The news on TV reported that there were new victims in the Daejeong serial killer case. Since the perpetrator had not yet been caught even after more than 20 murders, citizens were becoming increasingly terrified. All the crimes took place in the same metropolitan area, but because there was no clear connection between the victims, neither by age nor by sex, the police suspected they were random killings without a specific target. At the same time, they also revealed the possibility of a copycat killer. At that moment, a memorial service for one of the victims was taking place. The murdered woman's sister was Lee Se-la, who worked in a news office and naturally was still deeply shaken by the weight of loss and grief. Her friend Yoon Yo-han noticed she didn't look well and asked if her headache had returned, suggesting they move to a quieter place. Shortly after, they were at a restaurant with friends. Lee Se-la said she was fine and just distracted. The others replied that she always said that, but it was completely understandable that she was still feeling down. After all, it had been only a few weeks since her sister's murder. It was Lee Se-la herself who had to identify the body. Her sister's face, which she used to tease for being too yellow, was paler than ever. Furthermore, there was a number carved onto the back of her hand, the number 2. That was the signature of the world's most talked about serial killer, known as the Numerator. As they talked about the case, they noted that the victim count had already surpassed 40. The world seemed to be going mad. Robberies, stabbings, and murders were happening all the time. While many complained that the police were doing nothing, some said those criminals should simply be killed. However, Lee Se-la responded that it made no sense. Her sister was already dead, and nothing would change that fact. Whenever she went out reporting on cases involving murderers, thieves, or any other criminals, she always arrived at the same conclusion. It made no sense to act only after everything had already happened. A more fundamental solution was needed, such as identifying dangerous people before they committed crimes or eliminating future killers before they could claim any victims. Lately, that thought had been stuck in her mind. On their way out, Yoon Yo-han told her to be careful. He mentioned that the Duncheon Street side was brighter and had more security cameras, making it much easier for someone to help her if anything happened. Lee Se-la replied that she would be careful. The next day, she stayed late at work analyzing the cases. She compared age, sex, relationships, and any other possible piece of information, but found no pattern among the Numerator's victims. The only link connecting all the murders was the number-shaped wounds carved onto the bodies. Everything pointed to a sequence of completely random killings on an unprecedented scale. And it wasn't as if there were no witnesses. On very rare occasions, a few people managed to survive even after encountering the Numerator. The survivor of the 21st case, Lee Jae-yun, stated that everything had happened by pure coincidence. She and another person had gone out to eat that day and, while passing through an alley, ran into the killer, who murdered his victim right in front of them. On the other hand, Choi Chang, the survivor of the 13th case, recounted that he was walking down a quiet street at that hour. At first he saw no one, but when he noticed someone approaching, he felt something strange. He couldn't explain it, but it was as if that man already knew exactly how everything would end. These accounts made Lee Jae-yun reflect. Why did these specific people survive? Why did the Numerator spare them? Even knowing that witnesses posed a massive risk, the survivor of the 21st case revealed that she heard the killer say a single phrase. He simply stated that she was not number 1. Due to the ongoing investigation, the police never revealed the chronological order of the victims. Nevertheless, Lee Jae-yun spent days searching for any information that could fill that gap. She was already on her 4th can of energy drink as she worked, unable to understand one thing. How could someone keep committing murders without even hiding the bodies and still leave witnesses alive? None of it made sense. On another workday, her inbox was completely overflowing. Among so many emails, one caught her attention because it seemed unbelievable. She called the number provided, wanting to interview that person. As she walked to the meeting location, she thought everything was going much better than expected. However, she soon realized she was being followed. Footsteps echoed behind her on that empty, silent street. At first, she tried to convince herself it was just a coincidence. But when the man began running toward her, she ran too. Even so, he eventually caught up with her. At the last moment, Yoon Yo-han appeared and slammed into the pursuer with his own body. He then pulled Lee Jae-yun into an alley so they could escape together. As they ran, he asked who that man was and even speculated that it might be the Numerator, though he added that it made no sense. They entered what seemed to be a shortcut, only to discover too late that it was a dead end. That was when Yoon Yo-han revealed his true face. Without hesitation, he struck Lee Jae-yun with a steel pipe. She collapsed to the ground, unable to feel her body. Shortly after, another hooded man appeared and asked why Yoon Yo-han had run so fast. He replied that it was all part of the plan and that he had found the perfect spot, since there were no cameras or surveillance of any kind in that alley. Unable to comprehend what was happening, Lee Jae-yun tried to figure out the reason behind the betrayal. The hooded man remarked that both sisters were quick to notice their surroundings, adding that he almost lost control because of it. Confused, Lee Jae-yun asked if her sister hadn't been killed by the Numerator. Yoon Yo-han replied that she had, and revealed that he was extremely grateful to the killer. He explained that all it took was carving a number onto a victim's palm for everyone to believe the crime was committed by the Numerator. That way, no one would ever suspect him. He then carved a number onto Lee Jae-yun's hand with a knife and told the hooded man he could do whatever he wanted with her. However, the moment moment she stopped breathing, her body belonged to him. Before they could continue, a third person entered the dead-end alley. It was another hooded man, his eyes glowing intensely. As soon as he looked at the two of them, he saw numbers floating above their heads. 4, 1. Finally, he had found them. 3 hours earlier, Lee Jae-yun was listening to another witness's statement. That woman claimed she was deeply grateful to the numerator because he had saved her life and her entire family's. She was the survivor of the 37th case. Lee Jae-yun asked if the victim she saw die during the incident was the woman's ex-boyfriend. She replied that calling him an ex was being generous. The guy was total trash and had already caused a scene, beating her up right in front of her house. Lee Jae-yun then recalled that the victim had been killed by the numerator and asked how she, as a witness, could say he saved her life when she could have easily been killed as well. The woman answered that, in reality, she was the one who would have died. It was at that moment Lee Jae-yun began to understand what was truly happening, who the numerator kills, and who he saves. The numerator declared that he had finally found the predestined killers. The hooded man raised the steel pipe to confront him, and despite Yoon Yohan telling him not to do anything foolish, he charged at the numerator. However, he took a direct punch to the stomach and collapsed to the ground, unable to react. Even so, the numerator simply walked past him. The number floating above that man's head was only 1 point. Hearing that, Lee Se-la remembered the witness's statements. Above Yoon Yohan's head was the number 4, which was still blinking. That was why the numerator said he was number 4, a target for elimination. Yoon Yohan lunged forward with his dagger, while the numerator drew a curved knife. The gap between them was immense. In just a few movements, the numerator pierced Yoon Yohan's arms and legs, leaving him completely incapacitated. Immediately after, the number above his head dropped to 3. The hooded man tried to fight back again, but took another kick and was knocked down once more. Still, the numerator did not kill him. At that moment, Lee Se-la finally realized how everything made sense. It had always been a mystery why the victims shared absolutely no common traits. It was also strange how the numerator managed to evade every investigation, and why surviving witnesses always felt like he knew exactly what was going to happen. She then remembered the last witness she had interviewed. After the numerator left and the police arrived at the scene, they found gasoline, butane gas, and a lighter in her ex-boyfriend's bag. He had intended to set her house on fire and kill her entire family. If the numerator hadn't killed him first, a much greater tragedy would have occurred. As Lee Se-la processed all this information in her mind, the numerator kept beating Yoon Yohan. He kicked his face and continued stomping until he showed no reaction at all. It seemed completely absurd. Even so, Lee Se-la began to form an even more unbelievable hypothesis. Could the numerator predict the future? Did he see who would become killers before the crimes even took place? And did those numbers represent the exact amount of people each person was destined to kill in the future? With Yoon Yohan completely defeated and unable to fight, the numerator took out a voice recorder and logged, November 14th, 2026, 10:32 p.m. Number 4, Yoon Yohan. By eliminating him, 4 lives will be saved. He then asked if he had any last words or a final wish, any regret, hope, or message he wanted to leave for anyone. Yoon Yohan replied that no one willingly accepts death, so he had nothing to say. The numerator simply responded that he understood, and finished the job. After that, he let the hooded man flee. Confused, Lee Se-la asked why he wasn't going after him too. The numerator explained that the man was a number 1. People with that number were not targets for elimination. To him, killing one person to save another was still a crime, but it was an evil that could be forgiven. At that moment, Lee Se-la understood that the numerator followed his own set of rules. She then said she could help him. She had always believed it was better to prevent crimes before they happened. If it was possible to find future killers, identify them, and judge them in advance, she would do it. As a reporter, she could hide his existence in the shadows and help him continue his work. The numerator asked if she truly believed that. He then revealed his face and said it would be faster to resolve things with few words. Turning the recorder back on, he asked if she had any last words or a final wish. Utterly confused, Lee Se-la asked why she had been chosen too. Above her head was the number 12. The numerator explained that everyone says every human life has equal value. In such a chaotic world, that was the only truth that allowed him to keep moving forward. He didn't know who was truly good or bad, who deserved to live or die, or who would bring more good into the world. He had no answers to any of those questions. Because of that, all he did was erase the numbers that appeared before him. He killed a few to save many others. With those words, he left Lee Se-la lying dead on the ground, with the number 12 carved onto her hand. Sometime later, at a coffee shop, the television reported that the Daejeong serial killings remained unsolved. Police believed the numerator had inspired various copycat crimes and announced that the most recent murder was likely committed by one of them. The leading hypothesis was that the real numerator was actively eliminating those very copycats. While the news aired, the numerator himself sat in that cafe drinking coffee as if he were just another ordinary customer. He was taking notes in a small notebook and sketching the faces of his future victims. Everything was calculated with absolute precision. His order was always the same: 2.5 shots of espresso with caramel syrup, a crispy chicken sandwich, and a side of egg and waffle. Each item was consumed at a specific time, and he placed a new order precisely when his cup reached the halfway mark. He also always chose the second seat near the window. From there he could observe all the restaurant's customers, the staff, people entering and exiting, and even those walking by on the street. Right across from the cafe was an intersection for Line 8 at Jonggil Station. That was precisely why he liked the spot. His line of sight could reach nearly everyone around. As he watched each person, his ability revealed the numbers above their heads. The girl wearing a choker had the number 2. The man further ahead had the number 4. The waitress had the number 1. When selecting his targets, his priority rule was simple. The higher the number and the faster it blinked, the greater the urgency. It meant that person was getting closer and closer to committing their predicted murders. By the time the waitress returned to deliver the sandwich and waffle, the numerator had already disappeared. The numerator's next target was at a bar, drinking beer and making a lot of noise. When the waiter approached to tell him he was bothering other customers, the man reacted by smashing a bottle against the wall. He didn't care about anyone there. He said he was paying for the round of drinks and no one had any right to complain. Shortly after, he told his friends he was on probation and that every penny spent on lawyers had been worth it. He had heard that punishment for drunk driving was heavy, so if he had let someone else take the blame, he would be screwed. They asked how he handled things with the father of the high school girl he ran over. The man replied that even after offering as much money as the old man wanted, he kept talking trash. He admitted he made a mistake drinking and driving, but said there was nothing more he could do. After all, the girl survived, yet the father kept complaining. Mockingly, he asked if they wanted him to make her legs grow back. In the end, he said the old man only calmed down after he sent a few guys to scare him. After leaving the bar, he got back behind the wheel completely drunk, repeating the exact same mistake. At that point, the car was already veering toward the sidewalk, about to run over several people, when the numerator pressed a knife against his neck and ordered him to turn the wheel. The target complied and kept driving in the directed direction. The numerator instructed him to turn right at the second intersection and head toward the outer highway. While watching the man, he noticed a fluctuation in the number 5 above his head. That meant the number would decrease soon, a sign that normally within 24 hours or even just 10 hours he would kill someone. The numerator then ordered the man to stop the car and move to the passenger seat, asking if he had any last words or a final wish. When the target tried to slice his neck in resistance, he grabbed his arm. The car lost control, and the numerator slammed his head against the glass before plunging the knife into his chest to end it quickly. Afterward, he managed to bring the car to a stop. Although severely wounded, the man was still alive in the passenger seat, as the numerator needed to follow protocol. It was November 15, 2026, at 9:06 p.m. The fluctuation vanished, and the number remained 5. As he expected, even by preventing the murder scheduled for that day, the event was merely postponed. The set number never changed. When the target attempted to fight back once more, he died right there from a stab wound to the neck. The numerator simply commented that, as expected, the outcome was the same as before. It was another recorded experiment regarding the mechanics of his ability. Later, he finished paying for his order at his usual coffee shop. As he walked down the stairs, he ran into the waitress who had the number 1 above her head. She was carrying several boxes when she tripped and fell on the staircase. At that instant, the numerator briefly saw a glowing number 16 above her head. However, unlike the others, it wasn't blue, it was yellow. Without a second thought, the numerator grabbed her arm and prevented her fall. Highly flustered, she thanked him and asked if he was okay, then apologized to the senior staff member. The veteran employee replied that she shouldn't have let someone so clumsy carry those boxes alone, but asked if she was hurt. Since she was fine, the two began picking up the boxes scattered on the floor. Observing the scene, the numerator was intrigued. It was the same waitress from before, and he was absolutely certain her number was 1. Numbers never changed once set, a fact he had confirmed multiple times. He then looked at her name tag and learned her name was Moji. Remembering this, he realized she was already cataloged in his notebook. Later, the senior employee was helping Moji put eye drops in her eyes due to a problem she was experiencing. Unintentionally, she ended up pouring much more than necessary. Moji commented that she didn't understand why her eyes were burning and itching so much lately. The veteran suggested she might be going to bed too late and told her she needed to see an ophthalmologist as soon as possible. In the meantime, she lent her own eye drops for her to use. At that moment, the venue's television once again aired a program about the serial murders committed by the numerator. An investigative expert remarked that it was the first time Korea was facing a wave of random killings of that magnitude since the Mo Hyun-chul case in 2012. The instant she heard that name, Moji grew visibly nervous. She stood up immediately, said it was time for her to leave, and exited in silence. After she left, another waitress commented to the janitor that she was likely heading to another part-time job. She said it was sad to see someone her age, who should be studying, having to work so hard. She added that Moji never spoke about her personal life, but likely had her reasons. Outside, Moji took a deep breath as dizziness and nausea washed over her again. It still happened from time to time, but she just took a deep breath, caught her wind, and ran off to her next job. As soon as she arrived, she was slapped across the face. The boss ordered her never to be late again. Even so, she was used to that kind of treatment. In her mind, physical abuse wasn't that big big of a deal. She just had to endure the pain for a few moments. It was just a few slaps, exactly like her boss's old theory on pain. During the night, Moji worked at a street food stall. There, she could work more hours than allowed for her age and earn a little extra money. Since she considered it a better environment than the other places she worked, she saw no reason to refuse. So she simply smiled, endured it all, and kept working. While serving customers, one person at a table recognized Moji. She pretended not to hear and continued serving another customer, but the young man persisted, saying he recognized her from middle school. It was the first time he had seen her since everything happened. He then revealed to everyone present that she was the daughter of Mo Hyun-chul, the infamous serial killer. The other people at the table were completely stunned. They didn't even know Mo Hyun-chul had a daughter. The young man commented that it was good to see her again, adding that everyone was shocked when she suddenly vanished. Without realizing it, that conversation began drawing the attention of virtually the entire restaurant, exactly the kind of attention Moji wanted to avoid most. At that moment, she began seeing those glowing yellow numbers above everyone's heads around her once more. Feeling worse by the second, she stepped out of the stall to catch her breath and threw up again shortly after. Her eyes were extremely dry and burning relentlessly. From a distance, the numerator watched everything. The waitress named Moji, the same person above whose head he had seen multiple different numbers. It made no sense at all. As he observed her, he reached the conclusion that she was definitely no ordinary person, and that something very strange was happening to her. When Mo Hyun-chul was arrested in a case that gained nationwide coverage, Moji and her mother were watching television. Not understanding what was happening, she asked why her father was appearing on TV. At that time, she was only 8 years old. Shortly after that incident, her mother lost her job. At age 9, Moji began living as if she were half asleep, or perhaps simply denying reality to bear everything unfolding before her eyes. When she turned 14, she began suffering bullying for something she had never done, simply for being considered a cursed child, the daughter of a murderer. They said she should be expelled from school and shouldn't even socialize with anyone. The situation worsened when she was slapped by her own friend from school. After that, a guidance counselor explained that Hai Jin, the girl who hit her, had lost her brother in the murder spree committed by Mo Hyun-chul. The two were close, but Moji had never known about that story, nor did she have any way of knowing virtually anything about her own father. He had left home when she was only 6 years old, and since then, until he appeared under arrest on television, she had never seen his face again. She didn't even know what he did for a living. The counselor said that while it might be understandable, he asked her to be careful, because to other people, it might look like she was just trying to make excuses. He also asked how she thought Hai Jin was feeling. That made Moji lose her patience. She wondered why she had to apologize, and how she herself was supposed to feel being the daughter of a killer. She questioned why she was wrong. Was her mistake trying to make friends with a classmate, or was she guilty simply because her father was the worst killer that country had ever seen? The counselor replied that it wasn't a matter of right or wrong. He said that in front of someone who was grieving, you couldn't expect them to understand her pain. He also warned that this would likely happen many more times in the future. In the end, Moji couldn't do much. It was just her bad luck. At that moment, all she could think about was that cursed name, Mo Hyun-chul, an eternal, unbreakable curse. After leaving work, she started seeing those strange numbers above people's heads again. They were numbers separated by a colon, and followed by another number. At that moment, she realized it wasn't a dream. Something really was happening to her eyes. She discovered that when she strained her vision to focus, those numbers appeared. At first, she imagined they were times because of the colon, but looking closer, she realized that made no sense given the size of the numbers. She even thought she might have some rare disease. It was then that Baek Min appeared, asking what disease she was talking about. She replied that it wasn't something a baby like him could understand. In truth though, he was only 1 month older than her. Right after, Baek Min handed her a hand cream she had really wanted. Since her birthday was the next day, he decided to give her the present early. Besides him, Moji had practically no one else, so he suggested that they go out to eat something, stop by the cyber cafe, and enjoy themselves a bit, since it had been a while since they did anything together. That show of affection made Moji break down in tears. She said she was just feeling strange and thanked him for the gift. She explained that she had been through a lot of difficult things. When she told him about the case of Kim Min-soo, the 5th grader who was causing trouble at her workplace, Baek Min commented that, of all possible people, she had happened to run into that exact kid. It was truly terrible luck. Moji replied that, all that time, she had believed she was over everything related to her past, but as soon as those memories returned, she felt a pit in her stomach and almost threw up. Faced with that, she felt completely helpless. Then she asked if Baek Min remembered the day several mothers gathered in the principal's office to try to expel her. They didn't want their children studying alongside the daughter of a murderer, believing she would become a criminal in the future. Even so, Moji wanted to keep proving them wrong. She wanted to show that she would never become like her father, that she would live happily, independently, and as an ordinary adult. Baek Min replied that, for starters, she never had to prove anything to anyone, but Moji said the whole whole world thought that way. Then Baekmin stood up and said they were going to forget all about it for a moment. He said she would still prove that she would have a happy, healthy future full of dreams. Then he asked where she wanted to go first. The two spent the rest of the day together. They went to an internet cafe, played games for a while, went to karaoke, and finished the night eating something. However, while they were walking down the commercial street, those numbers suddenly appeared above Baekmin's head. The value dropped from 32.2 to 32.1. Moji found it strange immediately, but chose to say it was nothing. Meanwhile, some people were secretly following the two, recording everything with a camera. Shortly after, a video was posted on the internet showing that Mo Hyunchel's daughter was living a happy life. The post claimed this was absurd, since the victims' families never got to have the same happiness. They said the world was unfair because some people could laugh and move on with their lives even after everything that had happened. In reality, it wasn't as if Moji had no right to live just because she was Mo Hyunchel's daughter. Nevertheless, the internet turned it into a source of outrage. The video went viral, generating thousands of comments and massive public backlash. Soon, they discovered the neighborhood where she lived. The situation became so chaotic that even the municipal guard had to be called in to control the crowd of onlookers who showed up just to record videos or harass the girl. Sometime later, Baekmin went to visit Moji's house. Her mother met him at the door, saying her daughter was not doing well at all. After all the public exposure caused by the internet, she had completely isolated herself. When Baekmin entered the room, Moji asked him not to come back, as he would end up getting into trouble because of her. She was also certain that all of this was the work of that man who found her at the tent. They had definitely tracked her steps to find out where she lived. Baekmin said he understood how she was feeling, but asked her to calm down. He said he would stay by her side and that there was no need to respond to all those attacks. Over time, people would lose interest when they no longer had any drama to feed on. Moji replied that she knew that, but still felt deeply betrayed. Whether you called it the inheritance of crime, karma, or anything else, she felt she was cursed. People said she would inevitably follow the same path as her father. She was living well precisely to prove them wrong, but now they were using even that against her. It was as if they were saying she had no right to be happy. Because of this, she began to question why she was still working and why she kept trying to prove anything to those people. Shortly after, Moji's mother called Baekmin to talk outside the room. She said she was deeply worried about both her daughter's condition and the public's behavior. She wanted to stay by her side, but she had to work the night shift. Baekmin replied that he understood the situation and said he could stay with Moji. Since it was the entrance exam period, he wasn't having classes at the moment. Before leaving, her mother asked them both to avoid leaving the house and to call immediately if anything happened. At that moment, Moji noticed that the number above Baekmin's head dropped from 332 to 331. She had no idea what those numbers meant, but for some reason, she didn't want to see them decreasing. Later, Baekmin went to look for something to make dinner, but found almost no food at home. Looking out the window, he noticed that the people outside had disappeared. He thought it would be a good opportunity to quickly run to the market, but the moment he opened the door, several people appeared, waiting for that exact moment. One of the men put his foot in the door and asked who he was. He wanted to know if that was really Moji's house and whether he was her brother or boyfriend. Another man commented that he was the guy from the video and said they actually just wanted to record an interview. Within seconds, several people started shouting at the doorstep while Moji remained locked in her room. Baekmin replied that it was trespassing and warned that he would call the police, but a very burly man grabbed the door before he could close it. That man's gaze was completely hollow, like someone who had lost all emotion. Suddenly, he recognized the school uniform Baekmin was wearing. It was the Songhyeon High School uniform. More than 10 years had passed, but the uniform remained the same, because his daughter had also studied at that school. She was practically the same age as Baekmin. She was a very pretty girl, but she ended up being murdered by that monster. The man simply walked past Baekmin, asking where Moji was. He said Mo Hyunchul also had a daughter, and that was great, because it was finally his turn to strike back. When Baekmin tried to stop him, he was struck in the head with a hammer. The people around told him he didn't need to act like that he shouldn't use violence, but the man just asked why they were standing in his way. All he wanted was to take back what had been stolen from him. At that moment, as the number above Baekmin's head decreased down to 1 minute and 5 seconds, Moji finally understood the meaning of those numbers. They represented the remaining lifespan. Once per hour, once per minute, and once per second, each person's life was counting down. She finally understood what she was seeing. She also realized that it didn't matter who those people were. It was enough that she was known as the daughter of a murderer. Everyone just needed someone to take out their anger, frustration, and suffering on. Someone who could bear all the blame in their place. To those people, she would one day inevitably become just like her father. Already holding a knife, Moji decided to fight back. But before she could attack, the numerator snatched the weapon from her hands and asked if those were going to be her last words. While all of this was happening, the first man who had put his foot in the door was live streaming everything. The moment Moji appeared holding the knife, his phone was sliced in half by a karambit. Right after, the numerator looked at her and wondered what could have led her to become a killer. Perhaps she really had inherited her father's traits. Perhaps it was the expectations of everyone around her, or perhaps it was just the miserable life she led. Either way, that wasn't his problem. His job was simply to fulfill the mission, so he drew the the blade across her neck. Instantly, everyone started running away, except for the father of one of the victims. As soon as he saw Moji collapsed on the ground, he said he needed to kill her, but the numerator choked him until he lost consciousness. Even so, he didn't kill him, because the number above his head was 1. On the verge of death, Moji asked who he was. The numerator replied that she was still breathing, and commented that perhaps the blade wasn't as sharp as he thought. Then, he noticed that the numbers above her head hadn't disappeared either. Upon hearing that, Moji asked if he could see the numbers too. The numerator replied yes. He said he could see the 4,326 lives she would take in the future. At that instant, Moji remembered all the news stories about the numerator. She also recalled everything she had been through, and wondered if she was truly capable of killing over 4,000 people. In short, that man was there specifically to eliminate people like her. Her vision began to blur, and for the first time, she saw her own number above her head. There were only 32 seconds left. Bakeman's number still read 50 seconds, and kept dropping. She couldn't let him die there. The numerator asked again if she had any last words. Gathering what little strength she had left, Moji simply asked why he had let that man live. The question caught the numerator off guard. He commented that she was a very strange girl, and explained that people with the number 1 were not targets for elimination. Even if someone killed others to save a person, that person's fate would not change. As soon as Moji understood this, something happened that the numerator had never seen before. Her number dropped from 4,326 to just 1. At that exact moment, he remembered the mission he had been given. He needed to carry out his duty, because he believed he was the only one capable of doing so. Still, he decided that if he proved the numbers really didn't change back, he would return to confront her again. Just then, the victim's father regained consciousness, stood up holding a sledgehammer, and yelled that he needed to kill Moji. At that moment, the number above his head increased from 1 to 2. The numerator realized he had seen numbers decrease before, but never increase like that. Even so, he stayed calm. He just had to keep doing what he believed was his duty. So he threw a knife that hit the man squarely in the forehead, killing him instantly. Before dying, his last words were a plea for forgiveness to his own daughter. In the end, Bakeman would apparently survive. Moji would too. The numerator found all of this extremely interesting. The number 4,326 had turned into just 1. He had no idea who that girl really was, nor did he understand the phenomenon he had just witnessed. Even so, he made a decision. He handed Bakeman over to the authorities to receive medical care, and took Moji with him. She woke up inside a car, feeling intense pain in her neck from the dull blade's cut. Looking around, she realized she was in an abandoned warehouse. Shortly after, the numerator appeared, saying she had woken up earlier than he expected. Desperate, Moji tried to run away, but was yanked back by a rope wrapped around her arm, as if she were on a leash. The numerator simply told her to stop wasting energy, and get inside once and for all. He said he had no intention of killing her, because if he wanted to, he would have done it already. Later, she remained inside the van while he organized his gear. That was when she finally remembered where she recognized that man from. He was the customer who always showed up at the coffee shop, and sat near the window. She also realized he was the famous numerator, and recalled his words, claiming she would kill 4,326 people in the future. She asked if that was really true. The numerator replied that, to be precise, it would have been 4,326 people, or rather, it was meant to be. When she asked why, he repeated the same explanation. People with the number 1 were not targets for elimination. Her number had changed to 1 shortly before she lost consciousness. He commented that perhaps she had managed to alter the number just to avoid being killed by him, as if it were something simple to manipulate. Either way, Bakeman was alive thanks to her decision. Originally, he was supposed to have died at that man's hands. That was his fate. But somehow, Moji had managed to completely alter that future. Her number dropped to 1, and the man who was supposed to survive to create a new future had his number increased, leading to his elimination by the numerator. Worried, Moji asked if Bakeman had truly survived. The numerator answered yes. He explained that he killed the man before he had the chance to kill both of them. She then asked why his number hadn't decreased the same way hers did. The numerator asked if she was trying to blame him, considering she was the one who had tried to kill him moments earlier. He then explained that she was understanding it all wrong. Once formed, a number should never change under any circumstances. It didn't matter if the person was stabbed, passed out, had their limbs torn off, or was locked away in a place where no one could find them. Fate would always make that number run out exactly as determined. Even so, somehow, Moji had managed to change that rule. So he asked if she finally understood the problem that caused, and what her existence meant to him. After preparing the car to set off again, even without a clear destination, the numerator decided he would take her along from then on. He couldn't simply leave someone like her walking free. Moji asked what would happen if she refused. The numerator replied that she was free to decide. She could try her best to run away from him. Then, he handed her a cell phone. On the screen were news reports showing Moji holding a knife, apparently trying to stab a man. The numerator said she could go ahead and fulfill the exact fate everyone expected of her by becoming a murderer. Then he asked if that was really the path she would choose. With few options left, Moji only asked to return home one last time. She needed to see her mother and grab a few things. To her surprise, the numerator accepted her request and actually drove her there. As she walked up, she imagined the crime scene must have been completely cleaned up by then. Before leaving her, the numerator said he would return in exactly 30 minutes to pick her up. She entered the house, grabbed everything she needed, and packed a backpack. Her intention was simple. As soon as she had the chance, she would run in the opposite direction and disappear. She just had no idea where she would go next. Before departing, the numerator left one final warning. If she returned within the agreed time, she would pass the test, but if she tried to run, she would fail. At that moment, someone else entered the apartment. The person was armed with a broken bottle, and it was Baek Min. As soon as he saw it was Moji, he asked what she was doing there, and said that, at least, she was alive. Thank God. She asked why he was armed like that. Baek Min explained that he had heard the police were gone, so he came back to get the bag he had left behind. But upon realizing someone was inside the apartment, he tried to attack, thinking those crazy people had returned. Moji saw the injury on his face, and said it was all her fault. Baek Min replied that it was fine, just a scratch, and that he would be okay. Then he asked where on earth she had been. She had survived, but disappeared from the crime scene. The media and everyone else were already spreading rumors, saying she fled because she was the numerator's accomplice. Baek Min shared that the detective had handed him his card earlier that day. He had called and explained everything that happened, so he believed that would make those scum shut their mouths. But right after, he noticed that Moji was ready to leave, carrying all those bags. She explained that he had seen everything that happened, including the moment she was stabbed. At the hospital, Baek Min rewatched that video where she appeared holding a knife behind the victim. Right after that, the phone was destroyed and the live stream ended there. The detective, who was also at the hospital, commented that according to YouTubers, it looked like the numerator had done it. No one knew for sure if Moji was still alive, but if she was, her whereabouts remained unknown. Since the video cut off at that exact moment, the public pointed fingers at her, blaming her for everything. Since Baek Min was her friend, the detective believed he could convince her to turn herself in. However, Moji decided to leave because she realized Baek Min was faking it just to hand her over to the police, so he asked whether or not she had killed that man and why she was running away. She remembered the numerator's words. He had told her she was free to choose, but that she would spend her whole life running, just as she always had, and that it would only get worse. Baek Min insisted she didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Inherited traits and being a predestined killer didn't exist. People could say whatever they wanted, but Moji replied that he was wrong. It wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't that simple. In that moment, she hadn't tried to kill that man to stop what he was going to do, nor to save the other victim. She simply wanted to kill him. She wasn't out of her mind. Her mind was completely lucid, and yet she still wanted to do it. Perhaps she was just like her father after all. She thought that perhaps that was precisely why the numerator chose her as a target. He was able to see the numbers above her head, indicating how many people she would go on to kill, so she simply asked for forgiveness and left. She didn't want Baek Min to keep getting hurt because of her. It made no sense to waste his life for someone like her. Before she left, Baek Min reminded her that her mother was in the hospital and asked if she was really going to break her heart all over again. Moji replied that that was precisely one more reason not to end up like her father. She wanted to be able to see her mother again someday. Shortly after, she got into the numerator's vehicle. He commented that she was late and that he had even thought she had run away. Moji asked if he truly intended to eliminate every potential killer. The numerator replied that someone needed to do it and that he was the only one capable. She then asked if, as long as she stayed by his side, she wouldn't have to kill anyone. He answered no, that she didn't need to worry, but he made it clear that the moment her number increased, he would dispose of her as well. At that moment, the investigator returned to Moji's home. As expected, she was alive and had managed to escape. He picked up her photo once more and saw the number 213 above her head. He then ordered his team to hurry because she was the only lead they had to find the numerator. Meanwhile, a woman called to report an incident. A man had been standing in her building's hallway, threatening to kill her for several days. The police responded that they would dispatch a patrol unit and mentioned that this wasn't the first incident involving that man. Just like the other times, they would simply send him away. Outraged, the woman asked why they didn't just arrest him. She said she couldn't stand living like that anymore. The officers replied that he was only walking around the hallway and hadn't actually done anything yet. For now, there was nothing they could do. In practice, it felt as though they were waiting for her to die before taking action. Meanwhile, during their trip, Moji and the numerator continued on the road. She was once again eating cereal with soy milk and asked if he really had nothing else to eat besides that, eggs and chicken breast. The numerator replied no. She asked if he ever got tired of that food. He explained that taste didn't matter. The important thing was maintaining a routine, something he could repeat every single day. In truth, what actually bothered him were unexpected variables that disrupted that routine. It was already November 24th, marking the 4th day since Moji began traveling alongside the infamous killer, the numerator. Even though they were together constantly, she practically did nothing. On one of the days, she spent the entire time inside the car while he went out to take care of his business. Over time, she noticed his routine was always the same. He would park the car in a dark alley, walk to a secluded spot, and start looking for his next target among the crowd. She realized he did this often near the restaurant where she used to work. Thinking back, she recalled that he always ordered the exact same items whenever he appeared there. This reminded her of her former coworkers, making her wonder if she was truly doing the right thing. The numerator numerator only returned at night, when she was already sleeping in the car seat. He knocked on the trunk and threw inside clothes completely drenched in blood. He shared that he had killed 2 people that day. One had the number 5, and the other had almost reached 3. He needed to eliminate them immediately, even if it meant using force, which was why it took him so long. Suddenly Moji felt that pain in her eyes again. She brushed it off, saying it was nothing, but she was actually seeing numbers above the numerator's head. The numbers were 9 and 11. She was beginning to understand their meaning, but the numerator stepped closer and asked what exactly she was seeing. Moji pretended not to know what he was talking about. She had no reason to hide it, but she felt something was off. Intuitively, she believed that telling the truth wouldn't help at all. Seeing her like that, the numerator remembered his own childhood, when he first started feeling that same burning sensation in his eyes. As he suspected, they were the exact same symptoms. The next morning, he stopped the car in an alley and told Moji he needed to buy a few things. He said he would return in an hour or two. While waiting, she decided to test her ability further and began observing the numbers above people's heads. She noticed there were always 2 numbers, like X and Y. The number on the right decreased at a different speed each moment because the unit of time changed. Shortly before someone died, for example, the numbers could be 1 and 5, meaning 1 minute and 5 seconds. A bit earlier, they might appear as 3 and 31, indicating 3 hours and 31 minutes. Over a longer interval, they could represent 3 days and 1 hour, and when the time frame was even longer, the first number indicated years and the second, months. That was when she saw something truly shocking. A girl with a haggard expression was walking alongside 2 friends. She looked completely broken because some lunatic kept knocking on her door every day, saying he would kill her, her entire family, and even her friends. Looking at the 3 of them, Moji saw the numbers 8 and 31 above each of their heads. That meant all 3 would die at the exact same time. Meanwhile, the numerator found a killer whose number was at 3 and dropping rapidly. This meant that man would kill someone within the next few hours. Moji kept observing those identical numbers. By the speed at which the right-hand number decreased, she concluded it represented minutes, while the left represented hours. This meant the 3 of them had only 8 hours and 30 minutes to live. She could simply keep following those women, but if she did that, she wouldn't be able to prevent anything. Even remembering Bake Min, she decided to get out of the car to follow them. The numerator clearly noticed her walking away, but observed that she didn't seem to be running away. In fact, she was tailing someone. He connected the dots quickly. Moji was following 3 women, and the killer he had seen earlier, with the number 3 dropping fast, indicated it was time to act. Meanwhile, the poor victim had to block several numbers that kept calling her non-stop. A friend asked Yunyo why she didn't simply report the man to the police. She explained that it wasn't just him calling. The stalker had spread her number around, and now she was receiving messages from all kinds of people. The young man asked what the man wanted, and why he was doing that to her. Yunyo replied that she had no idea, but that she would stay there only until she finished moving her things. The friend said that was fine, and that she could stay at his place for as long as she needed. While drinking coffee and watching everything from afar, Moji noticed that woman was being trailed by a man. That meant her family would also be targeted by the stalker. She commented that it wasn't fair and made no sense at all. At that moment, the numerator appeared beside her and said she was right. There were 3 victims, including the youngest one. Moji was startled to realize he was there. Then he asked what numbers she had seen above their heads. She realized he already knew, and the numerator explained there was no reason to hide it. She could see numbers, couldn't she? That was precisely why she decided to follow those women. He knew the symptoms of that phenomenon very well, as he had gone through it himself. From the start, he had found it strange how easily she accepted that absurd idea of the numbers, even while on the brink of death. Moji pondered whether she should tell the truth. At that point, the 3 women left the shop, and she replied that fine, she would explain everything on the way. Thus, the numerator discovered that she could see people's remaining lifespans. She wasn't entirely certain yet, but at 2 in the afternoon, the numbers indicated 8 hours and 31 minutes. That meant the family would die at 10 o'clock at night. She also shared that she had overheard the conversation about the stalker, and believed this could be his doing. The numerator replied that there was no doubt about it. It was definitely him, because the man was right there, watching everyone from atop a building. He pointed to the hooded figure. Moji tried to run in his direction, but the numerator grabbed her by her jacket. She wanted to warn those women that they were being followed, but he asked if, even after everything he had explained, she still didn't understand. At that moment, Yunseo bumped into another person, dropped her bags, apologized, and began picking everything up. That was when she raised her head and saw the stalker watching from above. The numerator told Moji she had gotten exactly what she wanted. Now the victims knew they were being followed. Yet, that didn't make the numbers change. Their fate remained exactly the same. He explained that once defined, that number could not be altered. No matter what they did, they remained destined to die at that man's hands in 7 hours and 4 minutes, unless he killed the stalker himself beforehand. According to the numerator, being able to see the time of someone's death was a huge advantage. As long as the clock kept ticking normally, it meant fate remained unchanged. Therefore, there was no reason to rush. He could do everything calmly and prepare the plan as he always did. Before leaving, he ordered Moji to keep following those 3 women. She then discovered he had placed a tracker on her phone without her noticing. Startled, she remarked that it was creepy. The numerator replied that she was free to run away whenever she wanted. He had always said that. She remained by his side of her own free will, because he had never forced her to help him. At that moment, Moji realized she was indeed collaborating by her own choice. The numerator asked whether or not she wanted to keep doing this. He preferred working alone to having someone in his way. She replied that it was still hard to believe everything would end once that man died. She also asked how it was possible for the victims' numbers to stay the same, even if the stalker was stopped. What if they locked the door? What if they reported it to the police? The numerator explained that, firstly, the police usually act only after something happens, rather than taking preventive measures. Secondly, he could gauge the level of obsession in that stalker. It was as if he had been planning that murder for a long time. Therefore, simply locking the door or filing a report wouldn't be enough to stop him. At 9:17 p.m., with only 1 hour and 15 minutes left until the victims' deaths, a patrol car passed by the apartment, but the officers were already leaving. Since the stalker hadn't shown up, they couldn't take any serious action. They simply told everyone to stay indoors for the rest of the night and informed them they would make one final patrol around the building. Naturally, Yoonseo's relative wasn't pleased with that at all, but the police left anyway. Meanwhile, Moji watched everything from an empty apartment directly opposite. She noticed the property was still under renovation and remembered the numerator's words. If she still had doubts, she could see with her own eyes that fate did not change. Even so, she thought that from that floor, it would be impossible for anyone to commit a murder. Yet, ever since she heard those words for the first time, a bad feeling hadn't left her mind. There was a carefully prepared plan to kill someone. As the numerator said, one person had to die to save 3 others. Even if she couldn't do it alone, at least she could understand the reason and help him somehow. When only 39 minutes remained until the victims' deaths, the stalker finally appeared in the hallway. He stopped in front of the apartment door, blocked the air vent for the heater and air conditioner, and connected a gas pipe. After that, he walked away as if nothing had happened. With 26 minutes left, the apartment began filling with gas. The people inside assumed there was a leak and asked the youngest girl to open the window. At the exact moment Moji realized gas was spreading through the apartment, the stalker entered through the window the girl had just opened. Moji managed to pull the hose out of the broken window and tried to warn them that he was inside, but it was too late. The stalker had already attacked the father and grabbed the child. Holding a knife to her neck, he said it had been a long time and asked how he had managed to escape, while the man begged for mercy. It was unbelievable. The stalker warned that he would kill every single one of them if they kept treating him like trash. Suddenly, the power was cut. The entire building plunged into darkness. At that moment, the numerator asked Moji to report the situation. He was ready to do the job. When the power went out, Yoonseo managed to tackle the stalker using her own body weight. The younger sister ran out into the hallway and ended up slamming the door in Moji's face. Still, the stalker managed to reach his intended victim. The moment he attempted to kill her, Moji sprayed gas in his face. Even so, the time didn't change. There were still 12 minutes and 47 seconds left. The stalker asked who on earth she was, but Moji demanded to know why he was going so far. The hooded man replied that she must be the girl who had been following him, and asked what she intended to do. Was she going to report him? A 20-something guy murdering his ex-girlfriend and her family would make a great headline, and reporters would love it. Still, he said he didn't care. By the time the police arrived, everyone would already be dead. The killer simply ignored Moji, passed right by her, and shoved her aside to reach Yoonseo. Watching this, Moji wondered how many more victims would have to suffer because of people like her, who only got in the way. However, the moment he stepped into the hallway, a single light above his head turned on. Everything else remained dark and silent. The stalker thought he saw something in the shadows, but before he could react, the numerator slammed his head against the wall, and then severed one of his arms. After that, he gave the stalker one last chance. Once the pain passed, he could say his final words. The stalker still tried to fight back, but everything went dark again. He tried to run after the victim, but received another kick to the spine and was thrown back into the family's apartment. Moji was already inside, watching it all. The numerator commented that the stalker was remarkably persistent, saying he wouldn't be suffering like that if he had just behaved from the start. Even so, the killer didn't give up and decided to attack once more. This time, he went straight for Moji. She had always thought she didn't want to become a murderer like her father. Perhaps that was precisely why she decided to follow the numerator. She could have thrown away the phone with the GPS tracker installed. She could also have run away, especially since he had let that happen multiple times. She wasn't afraid of being hunted by the numerator. What she wanted was an answer. At that instant, she was saved by the numerator, who threw a knife and sent the stalker flying. What Moji had been hoping for so long was to find someone capable of changing the future. The numerator could do that with his twisted logic. People wouldn't have to suffer or get hurt, because he did the dirty work. Moji went to help the victim, and led Yoonseo out of the building. Yoonseo asked who they were, but Moji replied that it was hard to explain. She told her that when the police arrived, she should just say she had never met the two of them, and asked her not to tell anyone who they were. Yoonseo thought she might know their identities, but preferred not to dwell on it. Afterward, Moji went to Yoonseo's father, who was only only injured. He would survive. The numerator confirmed his wounds weren't serious and that he just needed treatment, provided, of course, they could handle the number. The stalker was still alive. The numerator was keeping him alive solely to hear his last words. The killer said they didn't know who they were dealing with, nor what kind of person that woman really was, but Moji had zero curiosity. She didn't care who he was or what his backstory was. She didn't care about any killer, so she asked the numerator to end it quickly, because the police were bound to arrive any moment. The numerator replied that she could go ahead. He still hadn't heard the stalker's last words. It was true time was running out, but he thought he could still hear them. Moji asked if he was truly serious when asking that, or if it was just a catchphrase. The numerator asked if she was joking. If he asked, it was because he genuinely wanted to hear them. If she didn't want to listen, she could leave. He also ordered her to use the emergency stairs to go down, because their escape route would be through the roof. The patrol cars indeed arrived very quickly due to the emergency call. Moji went up to the roof and realized the building was already completely surrounded. There was no longer time to escape. At that moment, the numerator finished slitting the stalker's throat. Right after, Moji noticed climbing gear on the rooftop. In disbelief, she asked if he was serious. The numerator answered yes, and explained that he had left everything prepared. Given the layout of the area, as soon as they finished the job, they would either be arrested by the police or have their faces captured by security cameras. Therefore, the only way out was to rappel down using the ropes. Moji replied that it made no sense at all. It was easy for him because he was a trained killer, but what about her? Without answering, the numerator secured the ropes, placed Moji on his back, and told her to hold on tight so she wouldn't fall. Then, the two simply descended down the side of the building. With his skill, the numerator saw far more than just numbers. He observed everything around him to execute his kills. That was how he noticed the exact moment a security camera was covered, allowing them to descend without being filmed. Moji was completely terrified and began crying out of fear. Later, the case was recorded. At 10:15 p.m. on November 26, 2026, a stalking case was reported. Based on the injuries and the number found on the victim's wrist, the crime was believed to be linked to the serial murders committed by the numerator. The following morning, the crime scene was being investigated by the very man who had been pursuing the killer. Investigator and Detective Kwon Samuel analyzed the security cameras and searched for any evidence in the building. He treated his assistant like a child and asked her to hide his yo-yo. She simply replied she would do it just to get rid of him quickly. Meanwhile, the police officers responsible for the investigation were frustrated at having lost the numerator once again. They found no evidence because the fire extinguisher had erased all fingerprints and footprints. All that remained were the fingerprints of the victim's family and the dead stalker. At that moment, Kwon Samuel appeared, asking where the victim's family was. One of the officers didn't particularly care for his presence there, but another explained that the father had been admitted to the hospital and that everyone was likely there. Even so, the older officer said Kwon Samuel couldn't just walk into the crime scene whenever he wanted. Everyone had been working since early morning, and he asked if he would take responsibility if he ended up contaminating any evidence. Kwon Samuel replied that he understood and admitted he had arrived at the wrong time, interrupting their work, so he stated he would analyze the security camera footage first and return later. As soon as he left, one of the detectives remarked to his chief that he didn't need to treat Kwon Samuel like that, especially someone who had come all the way to their district to help. In his opinion, Kwon Samuel seemed like a pretty decent guy, but the older officer completely disagreed and told his subordinate to shut up. Kwon Samuel's assistant commented that it seemed like everyone around there hated him. He replied that he knew that, but simply didn't understand why. As he continued analyzing the security camera footage, Kwon Samuel said they shouldn't go to the hospital just yet. It was better to review the images one more time. At a certain point, a hooded man appeared entering the building. It was the numerator. The footage clearly showed he entered at 10:11 p.m. However, there was no recording of him leaving the building. Kwon Samuel's assistant deduced that he had likely escaped via the roof, although it was also possible to exit through a lower floor, considering resident testimony and camera blind spots. Kwon Samuel found a mark on the terrace at the exact spot from which they had descended using a rope. Still, the assistant said that made no sense. If he had really rappelled down from there, the cameras would have captured everything, so Kwon Samuel asked her to look more closely. At the exact moment the numerator would have been descending, a swarm of moths passed right in front of the camera, completely blocking the view. Kwon Samuel explained that the numerator knew the range of the security cameras and all their blind spots perfectly. On top of that, he also knew exactly when the light would flicker and when the power would return. Coincidentally, that was precisely when the moths would appear. All these factors were connected. The numerator seemed to know everything. He always found the safest, most efficient route to escape, choosing paths no one would ever imagine. It was as if he could predict the future. Kwon Samuel's assistant asked if the abilities of both men weren't similar. Later, Kwon Samuel went to the hospital to speak with Yoon-seo. He told her not to worry, as he only needed to ask a few questions. Above her head was a red number, 23,103. The moment he asked how she was feeling and she answered, the number dropped to 23,102. Kwon Samuel explained he was investigating the case and asked her to answer everything truthfully. Then he reflected on a question. On average, how many lies does a person tell per day? He imagined it was only 2 or 3. However, when everyday white lies are also considered, studies indicate that a person can lie around 200 times a day, whether out of habit, nervousness, to handle an unexpected situation, or out of pure malice. The nature of liars varies greatly, so general statistics end up meaning very little. Kwon Samuel's ability was precisely estimating how many lies a person would tell in the future. In this way, he could catch a glimpse of an individual's true essence. He then showed Yoonseo the security camera footage in which the numerator appeared entering the building, and asked if she had seen his face. Yoonseo replied that it wasn't a matter of not seeing him, but that everything was very dark and blurry, so she couldn't remember. The number above her head didn't decrease, proving she was telling the truth. Next, Kwon Samuel asked if she remembered approximately what time the numerator killed the stalker. Yoonseo replied that it hadn't been long since the power was cut, maybe between 3 and 5 minutes. Earlier, Kwon Samuel and his assistant had already concluded that the numerator entered the apartment at 10:11 p.m. and that the power was cut at that exact moment. If they reversed the line of reasoning and started from the hypothesis that he only fled after predicting the moment the moths would cover the security cameras, then that would be the exact time he left the apartment. With that, Kwon Samuel concluded that the numerator entered at 10:11 p.m., subdued the stalker in about 5 minutes, and only left at 10:32 p.m. Then, he asked Yoonseo what the numerator was doing during the remaining 15 minutes. Yoonseo replied that she wasn't sure. She said she had only encountered the killer briefly and stayed in the hallway the entire time. Except at that exact moment, the number above her head decreased. She had lied. From this, Kwon Samuel deduced that she really had only seen the numerator briefly and hadn't talked with him. However, she hadn't stayed in the hallway the entire time. In fact, she had remained inside the apartment throughout that time and didn't want the police to find out. To understand why, Kwon Samuel asked if she had been the victim of a stalker. The police found the portable rope and the gas tank, which indicated that the numerator had already planned the entire operation before the murder even occurred. Yoonseo asked what that had to do with the case. Kwon Samuel apologized if the question made her uncomfortable, and explained he was trying to figure out the criteria used by the numerator to choose his victims. Then he asked why she thought the stalker had been chosen. She replied that she had an idea, but really didn't want to talk about it. Just thinking about the subject made her stressed. The number above her head didn't decrease. She wasn't lying. She simply refused to answer, and that didn't count as a lie. Kwon Samuel realized he could push further, but Yoonseo showed great resistance, so he decided to ask just one more question. He showed a photo of Moji and asked if she had ever seen that girl before. Yoonseo replied yes. She said she recognized her from the news, and that she was Mo Hyun-chel's missing daughter. Kwon Samuel confirmed the information, but pointed out that her face had been blurred in all the news reports. Yoonseo replied she had no reason to lie. Even so, Kwon Samuel sensed something strange. Furthermore, in the security camera footage, he had seen Moji entering the building. So he explained that she would be surprised to know how many people had been on the brink of death, and shared one thing in common: all of them survived, thanks to the numerator. Many of them ended up wanting to repay that favor, even unconsciously, or simply hid information. Because of that, Kwon Samuel asked once more. It had never been publicized, nor appeared in any report, but he wanted to know if, on that day and at that time, she had truly seen Moji. Later, Kwon Samuel presented all the evidence to the Daejeong Police Task Force. After he finished his explanation, some officers commented that they had embarked on that endless hunt for the numerator many times before, and that the task force's reputation was already being damaged because of it. During the meeting, they asked if there was any lead on Mo Hyun-chel's daughter. Some believed she might have joined the numerator's group. At that moment, Kwon Samuel remembered that Yoonseo had told 2 lies during the interrogation. Even so, by his own judgment, she didn't seem to be hiding something out of malice. Therefore, he informed the officers that there was no evidence indicating where Moji was. He chose to keep that information to himself. Later at home, Kwon Samuel analyzed the recordings once again. He also instructed Yoonseo that when giving her statement to the police, she should repeat exactly everything she had told him. At the same time, he ordered the officers to keep looking for Moji, but believed her arrest and the investigation into the numerator should be treated as separate cases. Sometime later, while his assistant was driving, she asked if that really was the right decision. Kwon Samuel replied that he saw no reason for concern. He had met Moji in person, and knew she only gave vague answers. Furthermore, since the numerator could predict the future, it was impossible to reach him by following Moji's trail. He still believed he hadn't managed to have a truly honest conversation with her. Because of that, he couldn't let the police find the 2 of them before he did. Now that a few problems were solved, they could pursue the numerator on their own. Meanwhile, Yoonseo returned to the hospital room where her father was admitted, and found her younger sister. The girl asked if it really was the numerator who had saved them both. She also commented that the stalker seemed to have no specific motive to target them, but wanted to understand what he meant when he begged for mercy. After all, the whole family had almost died because of it, and she just wanted to know what had happened. Yoonseo Seo replied that she didn't need to know those things. No one in that family had done anything wrong. The important thing was that everyone was alive and didn't need to think about that nightmare anymore. Even so, there was one thing that only the numerator knew, what that stalker's last words had been. In the numerator's childhood, all of his companions were killed by a single person. He asked why the female killer did it, and she replied that she did it because he wouldn't, and if he didn't like it, he could kill her. At that moment, the number above her head dropped from 117 to 116. He then woke up from this dream, which was actually a memory from the past, with Moji sleeping in the back of the van. He wondered why he had remembered something that happened so long ago. Then he looked at his notebook and noticed that a lot was still missing, so he thought it was better to start the day. Later, the two of them stopped in the middle of a road and headed to a completely deserted neighborhood. There was no one around. The numerator knocked on the door of a strange place, resembling a service window, and a woman with completely tattooed arms received them. She commented that it had been a while since she last saw him, and said he hadn't shown up since he became famous, but the numerator merely replied, rudely, that he was delivering the things she had asked for. They were the voice recorders containing the names of the victims, and the number of people they would kill. The woman said he was very dull, and, in exchange for the recorders, handed over the contact he had requested. She also warned that she would deduct the expenses for the recorders from his account. At that moment, Moji finally understood. The numerator always carried those recorders, because he recorded the last words of the people he killed. The woman at the window then commented that Moji looked nothing like her father, and wondered why she was the only person the numerator had spared. He simply ordered the girl to ignore that woman, saying she was unbearable. Soon after, she said goodbye and closed the door. Back in the car, Moji asked what that had been about. She wanted to know why he delivered those recorders, and why he made a point of recording the victim's last words. The numerator explained that those were the final messages for the people they wanted to speak to, one last time. Some victims left messages for family members and loved ones. Others gave instructions to lawyers on how to divide their wealth and legacy, and there were also those who spent their last breath cursing the ones they failed to kill. As they walked up the stairs of a cemetery, Moji asked about those memos. The numerator explained that sometimes they were the only clues left. They were merely fragments indicating where the deceased used to live. After all, no one leaves home knowing they are about to be murdered. He gathered all the deceased person's information, including their connection to the recipient and any useful part of the will, to deliver to the broker. After that, they took care of the delivery without leaving any trace. That was precisely the job of the girl at the window. Even so, Moji thought it was all too risky. After all, they were crime scene recordings. The numerator replied that any information that could alert the police was removed, but she explained that she wasn't talking about that. She still couldn't understand why he did it. He claimed he was trying to eliminate future killers, yet at the same time, he cared about delivering their last words. To her, that made no sense at all. It was just like the previous case. They were almost caught by the police just because he insisted on recording the last words of that scum. From her perspective, that only put the numerator at risk. The numerator didn't answer. He just walked up to a tombstone and left some flowers. He didn't even know whose grave that was, but he had heard the last request of one of the victims he killed. The person had simply asked him to put flowers on his sister's grave. He admitted that he didn't even know the exact reason why he did it anymore. Before, he had a reason, but that didn't matter anymore. Now he just decided to fulfill the last wishes of the people he killed, no matter who they were. If it was within his reach, he would do it. It was a rule he created for himself. To him, it didn't matter if he was a cold-blooded killer, nor whether it was right or wrong, good or bad. Even while eliminating future killers, he would still honor their last wish. That was the path he chose, and he would keep his word. Moji found that completely ridiculous. She had always thought he killed murderers to save innocence, but now she no longer understood what the numerator's convictions were. Perhaps he didn't even care about the type of person he was about to kill. The numerator seemed more like a machine following the exact protocol it was programmed for. She was left wondering what had happened in his past. Shortly after, the two went on to their next destination. It was the last wish on the list that remained to be fulfilled. It was a revenge that a man was never able to complete. They arrived at a nightclub full of dangerous people. There weren't just people having fun, but also several criminals. The numerator remembered perfectly the moment he was about to kill that man. His last words were a single request, that he kill the man responsible for murdering his entire family. That was why, in exchange for the voice recorders, the numerator had asked the woman at the window for that criminal's contact information. That was the last request on the list. He needed to complete that revenge. At that moment, the criminal was at the bar ordering another drink. His agent had already gotten new targets for him. They were 3 people, at 7,000 ahead. The client had even threatened to kill his family if he didn't carry out the job, and now it seemed he was finally willing to act. Even so, that killer took no pleasure in killing ordinary civilians. The agent asked if he was feeling guilty, but he replied that it was just a hassle, and that it would pass after a while. Furthermore, he would have to handle everything alone. If he couldn't execute the plan, he would make it look like an accident. He had 6 days to complete the job. When he left the club, the numerator continued watching his every move. That was the target. In the photograph, the number above his head was 34, but now it had already decreased to 33. Moji asked if he could see the numbers through photographs. The numerator answered yes, but explained that the photo only showed the number that existed at the moment it was taken. If that killer had the number 1 or 0, he wouldn't be able to fulfill the victim's last wish. But since he was also a killer, the situation was different. At that moment, the criminal turned around and almost spotted Moji, who quickly hid on the building's rooftop. She then asked if that man's last wish really was to kill that assassin. He sought revenge, managed to find out the number, and yet the numerator killed him anyway. Wouldn't it have been better to let him complete his revenge on his own? If he had managed to kill that assassin, 33 people would be removed from the list. The numerator replied that there was no way to be sure. If that man actually carried out his revenge, he might end up killing people other than the actual target. Moji argued that he couldn't be sure of that either. It was precisely for that reason that he needed to confirm. Just like what happened last time, numbers could change, and he knew that very well. The numerator then remembered his own childhood again. Perhaps the people he planned to kill were different. Regardless, the female killer from back then was also different. She killed people destined to become murderers, and tried to explain that to him. But the numerator replied that she couldn't even see those numbers. There was no way to be sure. Even so, she said it didn't matter. It also didn't matter how many people they would kill, or whether they would actually end up killing anyone at all. Either way, they would turn out to be bad people, because that was what those children had seen and learned their entire lives. The numerator kept asking how she could be so sure. And now, hearing the same doubt from Moji, he asked her the exact same question. He asked if she could really declare who deserved to die and who could still save other people. If she was capable of saying which lives were worthless, who was good, who was evil, who should be spared, and who shouldn't. After all, one couldn't know all of that just by looking at numbers. But Moji asked if it was really that hard to tell. It wasn't that difficult to differentiate. Sometimes it was pretty obvious. There was no chance whatsoever that a hitman like that guy could make any positive difference in the world. When she was a child, adults were always smoking on the streets in her neighborhood. She didn't know what they were smoking or how bad it was for them, but she knew it was something bad. Just smelling it made her throat burn. Distinguishing people was somewhat like that. It didn't need to be so complicated. The numerator thought the girl simply didn't understand. She was just a naive child, so he calmed down. There was also no need to stress himself trying to explain it to her. So he simply said that, since she claimed it was so obvious, if she had to choose between the life of one man and the lives of the 33 people who would be his victims, she would choose to end that man's life. Moji replied that yes, of course. Then he said that was already more than enough to answer her question. Later, while still tailing his target, he told Moji that he needed her to do something. However, that was still beyond her reach at the moment, so he was going to teach her how to awaken her eyes to the next level. Later, while explaining the entire plan, he showed her the blueprint of the club where the assassin had received the job. Based on surveillance conducted at the place where he was staying, he concluded that the subordinate usually kept a low profile, but that was the office where they all worked. Next, he asked Moji how much lifespan he had left. She replied that the number was 14 and 09, so the numerator began to analyze. Judging by the fact that the 09 didn't change even after a minute of observation, it couldn't mean 14 hours and 9 minutes. Since 14 was greater than 12, it didn't represent months either. If that were the case, it would be 1 year and 2 months. Thus, the only explanation was that it meant 14 days and 9 hours. That made sense, especially because that man usually accepted a job every 2 weeks. Even considering the jobs executed by his subordinates under his orders, killing 33 people in just 14 days wasn't enough time. While the numerator observed closely and looked for an opportunity to eliminate him, he needed Moji to monitor the subordinates, take photos or record videos of their faces, and also carefully observe the numbers above their heads. She asked if he really wanted her to deal with criminals. The numerator knew he was asking for too much, which was why he was going to teach her how to awaken her eyes. That skill was called Ideal Future, and he was going to teach her how to use it. Later, at the hideout, he placed 2 guns in front of Moji. One was loaded, and the other was not. She would have to choose one of them, and the chosen gun would be the one with which he would pull the trigger pointed at her head. Moji asked if he was kidding. The numerator replied that if she chose the gun with the empty cylinder, nothing would happen, but if she chose the loaded one, her life would end. Then he asked if she understood. If she checked the numbers showing how much lifespan she had left, she could find out which gun was loaded and which was not. If she understood the logic, it was simple, although it required a bit more of her brain power. It was then that Moji remembered that when she was attacked by the numerator, she had been able to see her own numbers. The numerator ordered her to focus and imagine those numbers inside her own head. She closed her eyes, focused, and managed to see her numbers. 9, 4. Then he told her to choose, right or left. Moji chose the left gun, and her lifespan dropped to 7 seconds. Moji immediately told her to stop. The gun was already pointed at her head. Later, she verified that the gun really was loaded, and asked if he was actually planning to shoot her. The numerator answered yes. It was the only way to show that the numbers really decreased. He explained that in everything one does, there are risks. Since she could see the numbers, it would be easy to find out which choice was the best. She could apply that method to any action from then on. That way, she could notice traps and dangers she hadn't seen before. All she had to do was always choose the ideal route, the one where her numbers didn't decrease. Moji replied that it wasn't because she didn't want to help. Just like last time, she would do her best to save potential innocent lives. The problem problem was that she couldn't help but worry. Something could go wrong, she could get caught, and end up becoming just a burden to him. The numerator asked who was worrying about whom. Just because she made a mistake didn't mean his number would change. Nothing could stop him from eliminating his targets, so she needed to stop caring about meaningless things. His plans were not so fragile that a little girl could ruin them. Later, he continued pursuing his target, that tattooed killer, while watching his own number above his head. That was how he saw the future. He tried to avoid any drop in the number of future killings. If that number decreased, it meant he would fail to kill the target, and if he failed to eliminate him, he would also fail to save innocent lives. The numerator knew this better than anyone, because he never abandoned his beliefs. The moment he turned down an alley, he heard the sound of a can falling. Distracted by the noise, he looked up at a cat on the roof. At that instant, his number dropped to 0. In that same moment, he dodged a knife strike from the person he was pursuing, a blow that would have killed him, and immediately retaliated. The killer commented that he already had a feeling someone was following his steps, but this was even better than expected. The numerator knew that when his number reached 0, it marked a deadline, and that was only the second time in his entire life that he had encountered a deadline. In that killer's last job, for example, he simply broke into the place alongside his subordinates and killed everyone in sight. The real target was the last to die. Before being executed, the target asked why they were doing that. The answer was simple. It was just a job. They also asked who those people were, but the killer couldn't even answer. It was just another contract he was being paid for. He simply didn't care. Meanwhile, Moji was supervising the hideout of that killer's subordinates and recording the face of each one. She had already managed to take photos of 7 men, but she knew that sooner or later they would leave their posts. A full day had already passed since she started acting on her own, but she still hadn't had the opportunity to use the new skill she learned. She remained on stakeout in that building, even eating right there. Even though she tried to always follow the ideal path, her numbers didn't change at all. She remembered the numerator saying that one had to take risks to make it easier to notice changes in the numbers, but she still didn't quite understand how that worked. Meanwhile, the numerator put his theory into practice, proving his quick thinking and technique. The tattooed killer realized he was a professional. In sports, combat, and mental games like chess or even gambling, everything followed a system, with winners and losers always existing. In the end, it all depended on who could gain an advantage, when to attack, where to attack, when to defend, when to feint, which vital point to target, whether it was better to slash or stab, dodge, block, or counterattack. All these factors had to be taken into account to gain an advantage over the opponent. The tattooed killer realized something was very wrong. It was practically impossible to land a blow on the numerator. His movements were perfect, and he always knew exactly where to strike. This happened because the technique he had taught Moji was something he had already completely mastered. By analyzing his own numbers and the enemy's numbers, he could see the future. His brain worked differently, processing all information in milliseconds. Thus, he always found the ideal path. When he saw the 0 appear above the victim's head, he knew his strike would land dead on. A stab to the chest brought the killer down. The technique the numerator used was far beyond the comprehension of an ordinary person. Then he said the man's name, Choi Chang-hyuk, number 33. By killing him, 33 innocent lives could be saved. Choi Chang-hyuk asked if he was like that albino girl. The numerator immediately remembered his childhood, the girl who killed all the others, and asked how he knew her. Meanwhile, Moji was being completely surrounded in the building where she was keeping watch by Choi Chang-hyuk's subordinates. His right-hand man handed her a potato chip, telling her to enjoy her last meal, because she was going to die there. At the same time, the numerator grabbed Choi Chang-hyuk by the neck and asked what he had just said. He wanted to know everything about the albino girl who could see numbers. Years ago, Choi Chang-hyuk went to a meeting point to carry out a job, but found all the targets already dead. The one who had done it was none other than the albino girl. He commented that he had just lost a contract because of her, and asked who she was, and if she was also there for the job. She replied that she wasn't. Those people had found some children on the street and even used violence against them. When Choi Chang-hyuk appeared, she thought he was one of the criminals, but realized he had also gone there to kill them. So she asked, ironically, if he was some kind of hero. In the present, Choi Chang-hyuk told the numerator that it had happened in China. The two of them had the same target by coincidence, but that was many years ago, so he had no idea where the girl was now. At that moment, he took advantage of an opening and landed a kick to the pit of the numerator's stomach, sending him flying. Right after, the numerator saw a strange number appear before his eyes. He had pushed his ability too hard in too short a time, and Choi Chang-hyuk managed to escape. Even so, his words kept echoing in the numerator's head. It was in China. The two of them had the same target by chance. He quickly refocused on the current target. Choi Chang-hyuk would probably go to his home or to the hideout where he would meet his subordinates. Inside the car, while receiving medical treatment from one of his men, a subordinate asked who had done that to him. Choi Chang-hyuk replied that it was the numerator. Shortly after, he answered a call from his right-hand man, who informed him that a girl was watching all of them. He also discovered that she was apparently Moji, daughter of Mohan Chul, the man who constantly appeared on television and who had disappeared along with the numerator. Choi Chang-hyuk found that very interesting and went straight to the hideout. At the same time, he warned his assistant that he was being pursued by the numerator and ordered all the men to be stationed, leaving everyone prepared. It had been years since the numerator numerator had found any clues about the albino girl. Because of that, he wouldn't let Choi Chang-hyuk get away. On the other hand, Choi Chang-hyuk already knew the numerator would come after him. When he arrived at the hideout, he left everything wide open on purpose. As soon as the numerator entered, he found Moji held hostage. Choi Chang-hyuk said she must be very special. After all, she was the only survivor the numerator had spared. So he proposed a deal that would be good for both of them. They would release the girl, and in exchange, the numerator would leave and never involve himself with them again. If he refused, the girl would die. However, the numerator replied that he couldn't care less. He refused the proposal. They could do whatever they wanted because he didn't care about that girl. In fact, they would even be doing him a favor. Then he asked if Moji understood what he was saying. She remembered the instructions she had received and realized what he really meant. At that instant, Choi Chang-hyuk ordered all his subordinates to attack the numerator. He said that if they let fear overcome them, they would end up dead. The only way to survive was to keep attacking, no matter how strong the enemy was. The numerator might be extremely skilled, but he was still just a man with 2 arms, so he ordered everyone to bring him down at once. The numerator simply told Choi Chang-hyuk to try to recall his memories while he waited. He still had many questions to ask. Choi Chang-hyuk simply told him to go screw himself. The numerator replied that when he recovered all his memories and finished killing all the subordinates, he could answer the questions. Without wasting time, Choi Chang-hyuk ordered one of the men to kill the girl. At that moment, Moji activated her special gaze. The numerator had explained that when someone faced real danger, it became much easier to notice changes in the numbers. That was precisely why he had refused the deal. He wanted to force her to put her new technique into practice. The real objective was to make her understand the difference between the numbers and learn to choose the path that would prolong her life. She wondered what the correct decision was in that situation. At the exact moment Choi Chang-hyuk ordered them to kill the girl, the numerator himself pointed his gun at her head. That was when she understood. The number above her head still read 447. In the next instant, she took a bullet to the chest fired by the numerator himself, while he simultaneously shot at Choi Chang-hyuk and his assistant. Choi Chang-hyuk was completely shocked, realizing that the numerator wasn't bluffing. Even so, the numerator ended up being hit in the arm by a strike from a baseball bat. Still, he retaliated immediately, killing the first attacker. Meanwhile, the man who tried to shoot him directly in the head missed his shot. Choi Chang-hyuk ordered his men to kill the numerator once and for all. Meanwhile, Moji stood up. The gunshot she received hadn't hit any vital organ, so she seized the opportunity to escape. Choi Chang-hyuk's assistant ran after her, while the numerator dealt with all the subordinates alone. Multiple numbers appeared above the heads of each enemy. 2, 5. In total, there were 15 men. The numerator's Kevlar vest covered him from his neck to his thighs, protecting most of his body. Among them, there were 2 individuals who had no number above their heads. Those 2 were not to be killed. At that moment, Choi Chang-hyuk charged at him personally. The numerator followed the very path that would lead to the target's death, because that group was extremely annoying. They didn't retreat or hesitate, even after sustaining multiple slashes. They were real killers. While Choi Chang-hyuk dueled with the numerator, the subordinates continued to surround them. Once again, the numerator began to suffer the effects of overusing his eyes. After taking a heavy blow to the head and feeling dizzy, he remembered the albino girl telling him that he should give up, because he was too weak. Even so, he didn't give up. As soon as one of the men approached to strike him, he retaliated with a knife stab. The others were completely shocked. The numerator then placed the knife against the man's neck, and said he was number 4. Next, he asked if he had any last wish. As the man remained silent, the numerator simply slit his throat and moved on to the next target. Meanwhile, Moji continued trying to escape. She analyzed every door and every hallway in that building, because each showed different numbers. Every path indicated how much lifespan she would have if she chose to follow it. She found a door showing 3 minutes and 12 seconds, and slammed it in the face of Choi Chang-hyuk's assistant. However, she soon realized there were several other doors. She was completely cornered, as none of them gave her more than a few minutes of life. She kept analyzing the possibilities. 3 minutes and 19 seconds, 2 minutes and 43 seconds. No matter which path she chose, none gave her more than 3 minutes. It was then that she remembered what the numerator had said. For some strange reason, her number had changed right before she passed out on that previous occasion. Even so, somehow she managed to change her own destiny. That was precisely why he had become so obsessed with her. Moji's existence simply made no sense. That meant she was capable of altering her own fate. When Choi Chang-hyuk's assistant finally managed to force the door open, she was still there. She hadn't managed to escape. He said she must have known she wouldn't be spared. After all, that was what happened when a child like her got involved with a lunatic killer like the numerator. Then he asked if she would end up becoming a killer too. However, hidden behind her body, Moji was holding a fire hose. As soon as he stepped in, she opened the valve and blasted a powerful stream of water, shoving the man backward. As she did, she told him not to make her laugh. None of this would have happened if they weren't horrible people. It was then that the assistant realized that the box of fuses and circuit breakers was open. Moji had prepared everything on purpose to electrocute him. By luck, he didn't receive the electric shock. Even so, all the power in the building was cut. For the first time, Moji's choice was not based solely on the numbers. She made a carefully calculated decision. When the lights went out, the numerator was able to identify exactly where each target was, simply by observing the numbers glowing above their heads. 3, 2, 4, 2, 5, and 33. Guided solely by those numbers, he moved through the darkness, slitting the throat of each subordinate until finally reaching the neck of his true target. At that moment, it wasn't as if he had any living, logical, or solid proof. But ever since Moji heard that explanation, one question kept clinging to her mind. If a fixed number never changes unless the person is killed, then it made no sense for the numerators and Moji's numbers to keep changing moment by moment, as if they were alive on their own. How could something that was never supposed to change start changing just because they were thinking about what to do next? The numerator told Moji that at that moment, her number had changed to 1 right before she passed out. Her thought had been simple, absurdly simple. She just needed not to kill in order to survive. That was what she thought at that instant, and her number changed. But if that were true, then it would be possible to change numbers that were never supposed to change. However, right when she was thinking about this, the power was cut. The numerator concluded this meant he could also reach the number's prediction and intercept his own future. Choi Chang-hyuk ordered them to grab a flashlight, but it was already too late. The decision Moji made allowed her number to move freely, just as she wanted. The least she could do was buy time. When the lights went out, Moji struck the head of Choi Chang-hyuk's assistant, while the numerator did what he did best, cutting the necks of everyone who had numbers above 1 over their heads. Finally, he finished off his target once and for all. Shortly after, when Moji arrived, the numerator was turning on the voice recorder and interrogating Choi Chang-hyuk about the pale girl. He also asked him to state his last wish, promising to fulfill it as long as it was possible. In exchange for telling him everything about her, Choi Chang-hyuk asked if his wish could be to survive. The numerator replied no. If he didn't kill him right there, 33 innocent lives would be taken in the future. Because of that, he needed to kill everyone who had high counters so that the innocent could continue living. But Choi Chang-hyuk merely replied that he was a joke and that he had never met anyone as innocent as him. He said everyone in that room, including the two of them, were merely tools of a system that created them. If one of them died, another would simply take their place in that great gear. The numerator asked what he meant by that. Just because something seemed impossible, should he give up on his own humanity? He then demanded an answer as to what had happened in China with the pale girl, and asked how he found out that she could also see numbers. Choi Chang-hyuk only answered that she was in Korea at that very moment. Immediately after, he attempted to attack the numerator's neck and ended up dead right on the spot. In the moment of his death, he still managed to say that now this was merely a war between lunatics, and that if the numerator had so much trouble defeating him, he wouldn't stand a chance against the pale girl. After killing his target, the numerator said they could leave now. The assistant, the man with glasses, had the number 1 above his head, so he wouldn't die. Moji grew worried about him and asked what had happened, what all of that had been, and if the plan had worked. Suddenly, the numerator fell unconscious. His brain had reached its absolute limit, so he sank deeper and deeper into the buried memories of his past, plunging into his own origin, the day he met the pale girl. At that orphanage, she asked what his name was, but he replied he didn't have one yet. Everything started 19 years before the numerator incident. The boy's first memory was on the streets, where he lived as a beggar until he was rescued and brought to the orphanage. Everything changed the day he took the hand of an old woman who wanted to help him. Or perhaps it changed when he found a comic book hidden under one of the tables in the room. He became completely captivated and read the comic from beginning to end. It was the story of a masked hero. The pale girl asked if he liked the story and told him she was the one who had hidden the comic there. She said she knew a secret path to the city, which was where she got the books, but she asked him not to tell the teacher because last time she had gotten into big trouble for running away from the orphanage. He replied he wouldn't tell anyone. She then asked how old he was. Later, in the office of the teacher, who was also the director, he explained that he had no name and didn't even know his own age. By her estimates, he must have been between 5 and 6 years old. She also commented that he was far from the only child in that situation. In fact, it happened quite frequently. Eventually, the teachers would give him a name, just as they had done with all the other children. Even so, the orphanage didn't seem like such a bad place. At that time, the future numerator's only friend was none other than the pale girl. She said she was strange because she still used the name she had before entering the orphanage. Up until that point, her name was So-ah. The two remained friends in that place. Beneath a dense, tangled thicket near the path that wound up the mountain of that hidden city, lay a small school that also functioned as an orphanage. It was home to 27 students and 4 teachers. The children were split between the first and second floors, and there was a dormitory that looked like something out of a fairy tale, completely isolated from the rest of the world. It was there that the numerator spent his childhood and received the name Da-um. During that period, he also became friends with Han-gyul. This happened 16 years before the numerator incident. Da-um spent his time reading different books, practically devouring everything he found in the library. Han-gyul commented that he was very smart because when he first arrived at the orphanage, he couldn't even read, but now he read effortlessly. While they were talking, an arrogant child bumped into Da-um on purpose, knocking his book to the ground, and even blamed the boy. Han-gyul tried to defend him, but it was no use. Later, Later, when Kang-chan got in line to get his soup, he ended up running out of food. He was told he needed to respect the line and that he had cut in without realizing it. Embarrassed, seeing everyone staring at him, he decided to give up. Han-gyul thanked the server immensely for the help he received, and the woman serving the food replied it was nothing. Then, she asked everyone to eat plenty, as they would need energy for gym class. However, later on, in that quiet and dilapidated school, that gym class was actually training to raise assassins. The children fought one another using knives, while the teacher forced them to perform exercises completely unsuitable for young bodies. The director was also part of it, acting as if everything were perfectly normal. The children harbored almost no suspicion. They were told they should never leave the school because the people in the outside world were foolish and immature, incapable of understanding their mission. The director and the teachers repeated that they couldn't let the children be contaminated by cultures considered inferior. During a social studies class, the teacher explained that she knew very well they had all endured extremely difficult lives before arriving at the orphanage. Each person's pain was different, but the suffering they faced was never their fault. War, poverty, and natural selection were just a few of the reasons. According to her, the world was slowly heading toward ruin, while people didn't even realize they were marching toward their own destruction out of greed. That was precisely why Godmother Charlotte, the orphanage director, had built that place. There, they learned everything they needed for the real world, such as target practice, knife training, and hand-to-hand combat. They were all children chosen for their talent, potential, and capacity for growth. None of them had been contaminated by the outside culture. According to the teachers, it would be children like them who would defeat the villains alongside the godmother and change the world. For that to happen, they needed to listen carefully to everything their teachers taught. In the end, all of it was disguised as if it were completely normal. After gym class, the boys had to cover their knife cuts with several bandages. Even so, they always had a moment of rest before evening roll call. The lights were turned off at 10:30 p.m., after which one of the teachers went on night duty, locking all the doors and windows. Considering there were security cameras on all external walls, sneaking out during the night was practically impossible. And in truth, none of the children had ever tried to run away. One day, Da-um asked Han-gyul if he really believed everything the teachers said was true. Han-gyul replied that the teacher had already explained that before. Even if the lessons seemed difficult or made no sense at the time, all they had to do was keep learning, and one day their eyes would open. But Da-um commented that it looked nothing like the comic books he read. Han-gyul replied that comics were just fictional stories and didn't exist in reality. He also remarked that Da-um had been acting strange ever since he met that girl from the second class. Da-um denied it, saying it was nothing like that, and asked to drop the subject. Even so, he continued reading his comics, where the hero named Crow always saved the day by defeating the villains. Then he remembered what the teacher used to say, that one day they too would defeat the villains. At that moment, Soa caught his attention, because the director had just entered the room. She gave him a light flick on the head, and said he had almost been caught with a comic book again, as he was completely immersed in the story. That happened 15 years before the numerator incident. Soa warned him once more, that he needed to be very careful. No one could find those comic books, because no one knew where they came from, and it was very difficult to smuggle them in. Then Da-um asked if, the next time she went out into the outside world, she could take him along. In truth, he wanted to discover other books. He didn't want to rely solely on the knowledge passed down by the teachers. He didn't want to merely read how books described the outside world. He wanted to see that world with his own eyes. Soa replied that they could leave that very night. Of course, Da-um was worried, but she assured him it was entirely possible. After that opportunity, they would have to wait another 9 days. He found those conditions and the exact way she counted the days strange, but decided to go along with the plan. Before leaving, he placed a basketball on the bed in place of his head to pretend he was still sleeping. Then, he met Soa at the agreed time, 2 a.m. The teachers patrolled during the early morning hours. As Soa went down the stairs, Da-um warned her that the teacher was looking right at them, but she simply kept walking as if nothing were happening. In reality, the teacher was unconscious. She almost looked dead, lying completely passed out and drooling. Da-um tried to call her, but she only reacted like a sleepwalker. Soa told him to forget about it and hurry before they were discovered. The entire orphanage was locked down, with doors and windows shut, but Soa knew the storage room window was so hidden that the teachers always forgot to check it. Because of that, she had swapped the lock for another one she could open easily. Da-um asked where she had gotten that padlock, but she replied she couldn't even remember. She just used to keep anything that might come in handy. She also admitted she took hidden objects from the teacher's drawers when they weren't looking. In fact, that was how she found the medicine she used to make the teacher dizzy. She explained that she mixed small amounts of the medicine into the teacher's coffee. That was enough to make her completely drowsy. Since her night shift always coincided with the full moon, that was the best opportunity to escape. If they didn't leave that night, they might have to wait a very long time for another chance. chance. Even so, Da asked if it was really safe, because the teacher could end up getting hurt. So replied there was no danger, she would just get dizzy and, the next day, probably wouldn't even remember what had happened. Right after, the two jumped through the window and stood in front of one of the security cameras. So explained that there were exactly 3 cameras in that section, and that she knew perfectly well which direction each one pointed, as well as all their blind spots. She was making calculations that Da couldn't understand regarding the camera's field of view, so he just sat down and waited for the right moment. While doing the math, she explained that it wasn't just that. Since she was little, she had been exploring the place. Almost all those locks and cameras had been installed because of her escape attempts, but no matter what they tried, they could never trap her adventurous spirit. At that moment, Da began to regret slightly that he had agreed to go with her. While waiting, So kept counting the seconds and asked why he had been so worried about the teacher. Daeum replied that her expression had been very strange and that it was scary. He also commented that they learned all the time that all children were equally blessed by the godmother, and that outside of training, no one in that orphanage should fight or hurt another person. So replied, that was exactly what they taught. They said everyone on the outside was foolish or villainous, that they should never leave, and that they needed to obey the teachers at all times. Then she asked Da to think for a moment. If that medicine were truly that dangerous, would the teachers really leave it stored so easily in their own room? She asked if he had also felt that something was wrong with that place. After all, that was precisely why he had decided to go with her. Da replied that it was true. He knew hitting people was wrong, but Crow hit villains to save the day. So explained it wasn't that simple. The villains did bad things first. The teachers had done that too. They trapped all those children inside and kept everyone locked up. She was only running away because she could. If the teachers were evil, then there was no problem in acting that way against them. At that moment, she stood up and said there were only 20 seconds left. She pointed toward a tree and said they needed to run over there before time ran out. So revealed that besides classes 1 and 2, there was a third, advanced class intended only for the most talented children in the orphanage. The following year, she would finish class 2 and enter this special class. If Da demonstrated enough talent, he could enter as well. When that happened, she would tell him everything he wanted to know. It was precisely around that time that Daum's power began to awaken. He could never remember exactly when it happened, maybe a little before, or a little after that day, but it didn't take long. His eyes began to itch. To the present-day numerator, it was obvious what had happened, but back then, he thought it was just an optical illusion. Above Soa's head, the number 139 appeared. As time went on, he began to see those numbers more and more clearly above people's heads. 1 year later, 14 years before the numerator incident, Daum was already in class 2. During that period, all students were to undergo individual counseling. The science teacher would call each one in to talk separately. The first was Han Gyul. He had been studying there for 7 years. He wasn't exceptional in any single area, but he possessed solid talent. Among all his peers, he seemed to be the most motivated, because he wanted to become someone special. He shared that he had heard he could join the advanced class if he got good grades, thereby working directly alongside the godmother. He also said that were it not for his friends and teachers in that place, he would never have discovered he could be someone special. After all, before arriving there, he lived being beaten by his father, ignored by everyone, and constantly hiding from the world. Yul, on the other hand, who had been at the orphanage for 5 years, was completely different. She ranked at the top of all theoretical subjects, but was always last in physical training, perhaps because she was afraid. However, Yul replied that wasn't it. Of course she wanted to study hard and be useful, but compared to the others, she felt small and weak. Kang-chan, unlike the others, performed poorly in academic subjects, but excelled in physical training. It was no wonder the physical education teacher trained him personally. Meanwhile, the science teacher asked if he felt body aches, burning eyes, migraines, and other symptoms. Kang-chan replied no, so he was marked on his medical chart with 0 symptoms. However, Daum, who had been at the orphanage for 6 years, replied yes. He had been feeling those exact symptoms for about a year. The science teacher asked why he had never mentioned it before, and also asked if he saw anything, like a number above people's heads. Daum saw the number 11 above the teacher's head, but remembered what So-ah had told him about the advanced class. She had said the criteria to enter weren't actually that strict, so he lied, replying he wasn't sure if it was a number. He said he only saw a sort of smoke, a blue mist. The teacher recorded that as one of the symptoms and said that since he was the last interviewee, he would have the other children brought to the lab along with him. He then commented that that year's harvest had been good. The last 4 interviewees were personally summoned to the laboratory: Kang-chan, Han Gyul, Yul, and Daum. As they passed through a strange underground corridor, Daum saw numbers above his peers' heads. The 2 boys had the number 2, while Yul had only the number 1. It had already been a year since he had started seeing those numbers, but he still didn't know what they meant. By that point, he had even learned how to turn that vision on and off at will. The reason he hid it from the teacher was the man's reaction. He seemed almost desperate, looking for someone who possessed that power. Daum could have simply said he saw the numbers and joined the advanced class, but he realized too late how naive he had been. When they arrived at the lab, the science teacher was holding a kidnapped man who had a bag over his head and was completely covered in blood. He explained that, as they were always taught at the orphanage, that man was one of the rat bastards from the outside, desperate to snoop around everywhere he could. He said the man had been caught sneaking into the forest to secretly record the orphanage, which was precisely why he always warned the children to be careful whenever they went outside. Then he reloaded a gun, placed it on the table, and said they could begin in order of arrival. The first person to shoot would be the one from the advanced class. Of course, Yule was terrified. She could barely hold the gun. She was trembling so much that even if she pulled the trigger, she would likely drop the weapon from her hand. So the teacher decided to make things easier. He pointed his own gun at Kang Chan's head and said that way she wouldn't need to hesitate. He explained that it was a process everyone would go through, and that once they overcame that instinctive fear, their spirits would become strong and faithful. Yule didn't have the courage, so Han-gyul took the gun from her hands and shot the journalist in the head. He didn't want to do it either, and believed the test was over. After all, there was already a winner, except there wasn't. There were several other investigative journalists who had been captured. The teacher had never said there would be only one winner. If 2 of the remaining 3 passed, they would proceed again in order of arrival. He wouldn't send the others back just because one had managed to pass, so he ordered them to start all over again. The next to pick up the gun was Da-um. He trembled less, but was just as desperate. It couldn't even be called a test, because everyone's promotion there had already been decided. It was a form of discipline, designed to force those who hadn't opened up naturally. This time, the one threatened was Han-gyul, and Da-um would have to kill to prevent his friend from dying. The teacher kept pressuring him non-stop. Meanwhile, outside, So-ah was also prepared to kill whoever was necessary. She knew a new group was being approved for the advanced class, and commented that the teacher hadn't changed one bit. Furthermore, since he was advancing the schedule, she would also decide to move her own plans forward. Just then, the physical education teacher appeared in that hallway while making his rounds. He asked if there were any students around, as he had seen footprints on the floor. He also mentioned that someone had stolen the training pistol and put a fake one in its place. So-ah began counting her steps, as she always did when executing her plans. When the helmet appeared, she shot at the hallway light first, and then at the helmet. The science teacher heard the gunshots, but the helmet that was hit was in the physical education teacher's hands, not on his head. When the physical education teacher turned toward the hallway, the science teacher opened the door, shielding the student who had fired, and almost getting hit in her place. The physical education teacher kept looking for her, saying it was no big deal. He took the opportunity to ask how the approval ceremony for the new class had gone. The science teacher replied that everything had ended well on his end. The 4 had made it out alive, that was for sure, but they had also left deeply traumatized. The numerator couldn't even remember how he got back to the dormitory that day. Somewhere between vision and reason, there seemed to be a veil covering everything that had happened. For about a week, nobody mentioned a thing. Even so, the numbers he saw began disappearing one by one. The following week, the teacher introduced the 4 new members of the advanced class. So-ah was already waiting for Da-um, and at the end of that day, the 2 met on the rooftop to talk. He looked completely despondent, but she handed him a present, the new volume of the Crow comic book. She said it had taken an enormous amount of effort to smuggle that copy in, but that he deserved it. 6 years had passed since they first met. Even so, Da-um was so traumatized by the horror he experienced during that test that he ended up throwing up right then and there. He never imagined he would have to go through all of that. So-ah asked if he could also see the numbers. She already knew Da-um had a special ability, just like her. She promised she would explain everything once he joined the advanced class. She explained that when she looked into someone's eyes, she could see the number of people that person would save in the future. It was the amount of lives they would rescue. So she told Da-um that the 2 of them could kill all the teachers, destroy that orphanage, and together become heroes. Of course, that made no sense at all to Da-um. Even so, So-ah insisted, saying she could see how many people he would save, and that they could be heroes together. Then she asked if he knew what number he saw above her head. Da-um replied that made no sense whatsoever. He didn't understand how saving people involved killing everyone. The first thing he asked was how she knew about the numbers and how she understood how they worked. So-ah asked if he still hadn't figured out what his own number did. She hadn't expected to hear that, and asked if he didn't remember the first time the numbers changed. Da-um remembered. It was nearly a year prior, when he learned how to more or less control that vision. The numbers began decreasing one by one after the incident during the test to enter the secret class. So-ah asked if he understood now. The number above her head was 137. Da-um asked if she was really sure she was going to kill all the teachers. She replied it was much easier than it seemed. He himself had already realized that the orphanage's goal was to raise completely loyal children. First, they treated everyone like family, building bonds with the teachers. Later, when they were already emotionally dependent, they began forcing them to kill people and commit even worse acts. According to So-ah, those teachers weren't grand beings or heroes. heroes. They were just ordinary people, like anyone else. And ordinary people died from a gunshot, especially if attacked while sleeping. The only problem was the helmet-wearing teacher. She had tried to figure out his routine several times, but was always spotted. Because of that, she devised a plan. The date would be November 17 of the following year, the only day of the year when the helmet-wearing teacher took time off and stayed away from the orphanage. The plan was to take control of the orphanage by killing all the other staff members first. Then, they would set an ambush for the helmet-wearing teacher when he returned. Finally, they would find the person who founded the orphanage, Godmother Charlotte, to destroy the entire organization and its facilities. Soa knew she couldn't do all of that alone, but she believed the fact that she had found Da-um that day while he was reading his comics meant that only the two of them possessed those special powers. To her, it was destiny. The two had met precisely to defeat the villains and become real heroes. Da-um asked if that was why she had brought him there, if she wanted him to see firsthand how cruel the teachers were, just to convince him to kill them later. She replied that wasn't exactly her intention. She explained that by entering the advanced class, he would learn much more about his own ability. The teachers valued students with special talents, and if he demonstrated a unique power, he would certainly be treated differently. Then Da-um asked if she had also killed someone during the approval ceremony. Up to that point, he still felt everything as if it were a horror movie playing endlessly in his head. All they learned there were dagger techniques, target shooting, and skills to harm and kill people. At first, it seemed like mere knowledge to get good grades and avoid punishment from the teachers, but he never imagined he would actually have to kill someone. And he believed the others promoted alongside him had never imagined they would reach that point either. But Soa replied that if they stood still, those children would end up becoming just like their own teachers. Da-um replied they didn't need to kill anyone, they could simply run away. He said he wouldn't interfere with her plan on November 17th, but he would take that opportunity to escape the orphanage along with all his friends. Then he returned the gift she had given him, and said he couldn't be a hero like Crow. The numerator, who was once Da-um, recounted that he should have suspected her back then. The number above Soa's head was far too high, but he chose to ignore it. Even so, she kept saying it was very easy to increase that number. All it took was doing bad things to kill even more people. According to her, people simply didn't understand that. The numerator admitted he should have killed Soa back then, but he didn't. A year later, on November 17th, she finally put her plan into action. 12 years before the incident involving the numerator, on January 16 of that same year, Da-um was using everything he had learned from Soa when he was younger to sneak out of the orphanage and return undetected, secretly building an escape route. Little by little, he filled in the empty stretches of the path through the mountain. He also stopped talking to Soa, not because they had fought, but because that ambiguous situation was something he simply couldn't bear. On March 7th, Han-gyul and Kang-chan were on patrol duty for that month. After that patrol, during which they killed people, the numbers above their heads dropped to 0. It was at that moment that Da-um finally understood the true meaning of those numbers. Soa's number was extremely high, but he also began paying attention to the teacher's numbers. On July 28, he realized that convincing his friends to run away would be no easy task. Yule seemed even more apathetic than before. Choi Chang's violent behavior had worsened again. The entire advanced class seemed broken in some way. On October 2, November was drawing very near. Da-um still didn't know if Soa would actually put her plan into action, but he wanted to get as many children out of the orphanage as possible before that happened. However, Han-gyul handed over the notebook where Da-um wrote down all his plans to Godmother Charlotte, the orphanage director. She thanked him profusely for his help. Han-gyul tried to explain that Da-um wasn't to blame for anything. He said he had arrived at the orphanage very young, and that older sister had been putting strange ideas in his head ever since. But Godmother Charlotte replied that she knew all about it. She said she would simply talk to Da-um, and that if anything similar happened with any of his other friends, Han-gyul should act the same way. However, Soa had installed a wiretap in the director's office. She heard the entire conversation and commented that it was a real shame they had found the diary she also secretly read. Then came the year 2012. On November 17th, exactly 12 years before the numerator incident, the physical education teacher left the orphanage, as he did every year. Shortly after, the orphanage's social studies teacher could no longer escape or hit a single shot against Soa. Soa said it was very strange that the teacher couldn't hit her, considering she was trained. Even knowing she wouldn't get away with it unscathed, she continued with her plan and killed the first teacher, causing her number to drop to 136. The science teacher tried to take her by surprise, but she dodged the gunshots, hid in a room, and counted exactly how many bullets were left in his magazine. When he stopped to reload, she took advantage to cover his vision with a sheet. This was possible because she could see the future. She saw the number of people she would save throughout her life, which at that moment was 14,000, and that number changed in real time. Right after, she killed the science teacher, causing her count of predestined murders to drop to 135. As they heard the gunshots, Dom and Yule realized Soa's plan had already begun and started their own escape. At the same time, Godmother Charlotte, with Soa's gun pointed at her head, revealed that she had always found her rebelliousness useful for her business. That was why, all that time, she had allowed her to do whatever she wanted, so she could develop. In the end, however, she betrayed her and stabbed her in the back. Soa replied that she was arrogant, because even in the end she wouldn't admit her own mistakes. She said that, like the shameless villain she was, she could cry and beg for mercy until she died. Before she could do anything else, Soa was caught off guard by one of the assassins from the advanced class, who held a knife to her neck. Another was already standing in the doorway, pointing a gun at her. Confused by the situation, she asked what the two were doing, saying she was trying to save them. They replied they didn't want to be saved that way. If they became direct subordinates of the godmother, they could make a lot of money and then retire. Soa asked if everyone had already been completely dominated by the villain and infected by that ideology. She still tried to bring them back to their senses, but realized that now they too were villains. Without hesitating, she shot them both. When Da arrived at the room where Soa had prepared the window for escape, he found the passage blocked by chairs and crates. The person who had done that was Han Yul, who was already wearing the advanced class uniform and pointing a gun at Da and Yul, ordering them to leave without doing anything stupid. Meanwhile, Soa imagined she was Crow, the comic book hero, saving a city taken over by villains. Since the character wore a coat, she grabbed the director's lab coat to look like him and walked down the hallways while trying to decide what her hero name would be, leaving the villains behind. All that time, Han Yul had been helping the director because he knew about Daeum's plans. He had already taken the other children to the inner classroom, so no one else would be able to go with them. He also said the teachers would appear soon and that it would be better for everyone to surrender. It was clear he didn't want to hurt anyone. Yul was still deeply shaken by what had happened, and Daeum asked Han Yul to lower the gun, as she clearly wasn't okay. He also reminded him that they had been friends since childhood, and there was no reason to treat them that way. Even so, Han Yul replied that Yul would never get over it and would remain useless. So Daeum drew his knife and said that no matter what he said, they were going to run away. He also stated that Han Yul must have realized that everything they learned in that place was wrong, and that the orphanage was not normal. Han Yul, however, replied that all you had to do was obey the teachers to stay alive and have a good life. For him, it was impossible to believe that the only world he knew had been wrong all along. After all, if that orphanage wasn't reality, he wouldn't even know how to live on the outside. Daum replied that they couldn't carry that weight. They were just children, and those who should take on all that responsibility were the adults. So he extended his hand to his friend and asked that they run away together. At that moment, Soa entered the room asking if it hadn't been Han Yul who handed the diary over to the director. She compared the situation to the comic book story, where Crow revealed to his sidekick Hawk that he already knew who the true villain was. The real enemy was the mentor who raised those children from a young age to become villains. She explained all of this to Daum and said the culprit had always been the director. Now, those children were trying to avenge their mentor so that one day they could become the villains of the future. That was why she was going to save him. Without giving any chance to react, she shot and killed Han Yul. Yael tried to run away, but Kang Chan lunged at her with a knife. Before he could attack her, he was caught off guard by Soa, just as Crow used to catch his enemies unprepared. In her head, that was how a heroine acted. She believed she was merely eliminating villains and began a true purge inside the orphanage. When she tried to kill a few more students, Daum threw himself at her, and the two crashed through a window. During the fall, Soa fired the gun, and glass shards struck Daum's left eye, leaving the scar he would carry from then on. Even so, the massacre had already happened. Incapable of understanding, he merely asked the reason for all of it. Soa replied that no one did anything to stop the future, so she decided to act on her own. According to her, all those people would become heinous criminals and inevitably turn into villains. After midnight, when one of the teachers returned to the orphanage, he found only dying students and heard their last words. Meanwhile, Daum advanced on Soa, using only a knife. She dropped her pistol to engage him in hand-to-hand combat. As they traded blows, Daum asked how she could say she did that because no one did anything. To him, that was ridiculous. He could see the number of people she would kill in the future. Soa replied that she had always known the meaning of those numbers. They represented the amount of predestined murders for each person. She also said Daum should have hidden his diary better because she and Han Yul had found it easily. She added that she had done well to eliminate that traitor. Even so, Daum replied that although Han Yul had pointed a gun at him and yelled, he never wanted to do that. He was just confused, like everyone else. After all, they were all victims of the reality created by the orphanage. If it weren't for Soa's actions, perhaps everything could have been different. She asked how he could be so sure and, immediately after, shot his hand, making him drop the knife. She said he would never be able to guarantee that those children wouldn't become villains. They had all been trained since childhood to be assassins, received the perfect training for it, and saw the world in a completely different way than ordinary people. They would never adapt to society. When they stopped following the path desired by the godmother, they would be discarded and pushed into the darkest corners of the world. Sooner or later, they would end up doing the only thing they knew how to do well, kill, and they would continue taking countless innocent lives. Daeum believed she had committed that massacre out of her own delusions, but Soa replied that his villainous friends were no more important than the greater good. She also called him arrogant, just like all the others. Even wounded, Daeum managed to push her, disarm her, and pin her down. Then he said they weren't villains, they were just children. He also affirmed she had no right to decide who was good or bad, because everyone there had lived the exact same life she had. Finally, he revealed that everyone's number was 0, and that none of those students would kill anyone for the rest of their lives. However, replied it was obvious they would never kill anyone, because she had already planned to kill everyone before that could happen. Asked if Dom still hadn't understood his own power. Everyone's number was 0, because they were going to die that very night. Thanks to her, no one there would kill another person. She also said he couldn't be sure who was a villain and who wasn't, just as she couldn't either. Even holding the gun, remembered that had been the first friend he made in that place, and couldn't bring himself to shoot, even seeing that the number above her head was extremely high. Taking advantage of his hesitation, knocked him unconscious using a sleeping agent. Afterwards, she picked up the gun again and remarked that the teacher had arrived earlier than expected. Standing at the doorway was the physical education teacher, Hong Cho, who merely wanted to confirm one last thing. Apparently, the full blame for the massacre really lay with her. Turned, and they both fired at the same time. The next morning, woke up as the only living person in that orphanage. Before truly waking up, he was trapped in a nightmare. At first, everything seemed normal. The routine had returned to what it was before. Children walked down the hallways, and he was reading a book about the trolley problem. The scenario explained that if an unstoppable train were speeding down a track, one would have to decide between letting it continue, killing several people, or pulling the lever and sacrificing just one to save all the others. The difference was choosing to kill someone to save many, or simply not interfering. When he asked Hongul what he would do in that situation, the boy flipped the question back to him. Replied that sacrificing one person was better than letting several die. Then Hongul asked why he hadn't killed his senior. After all, he was the only one who could see the number above her head. There were 137 people who could have been saved if only she had died. Shortly after, Daum began to be tormented by the dead who had been murdered by Soa. Surrounded by those memories, he was ultimately confronted by Soa herself, who said he could very well have changed everything. In the end, one side would always be sacrificed, and running from that reality didn't change the fact that he did nothing. As soon as he joined the advanced class, he could simply have killed the science teacher. But Daum was never able to make such a heavy decision. He didn't trust his own judgment, and didn't want to carry the responsibility for another person's life. He couldn't even imagine what it would be like to consciously decide to kill someone. He then remembered everything he had learned at the orphanage, that one day they would all serve the godmother, and also Soa's words, saying that those children would grow up to become heinous villains, responsible for countless deaths. Daum realized that perhaps everyone really would follow that path. At the same time, he also understood that each person chooses for themselves who they consider a villain, calls their own side justice, and acts with their own hands. In reality, perhaps true villains didn't even exist. He realized he should have confirmed everything with his own eyes before his friends died. He should have killed Soa, checked the number above each surviving child's head, and even checked his own number. After all, only he could see each person's predestined murder count and could uncover the truth. Even so, Soa asked if that would make any difference. Would he really have the courage to kill someone? She said he could simply give up, because he was weak. Daum, however, replied he would no longer hesitate. He stated he would abandon his preferences, his personal judgments, and any kind of subjectivity. He would do only what was most just. If it were necessary to sacrifice one life to save several, he would do it. He said he didn't want to be a hero, only to uphold the rule. He also wanted to prove that those numbers never changed, and that a predestined fate could not be altered. Furthermore, he wanted to find out how many lives he would save in the future. For that reason, he needed to find Soa again. When he finally truly awakened, Daum found Moji stealing candy inside his van. Still confused, he asked where they were, and complained that no one had given her permission to eat it. He even said he had hidden the candy very well. Shortly after, he ended up passing out again. In truth, after they finished the job involving Choi Chong-hyuk and his men, he simply collapsed unconscious on top of Moji. It took her a while to manage to crawl out from under him, as he was much heavier. The strangest thing was that, shortly after, he got up like a sleepwalker, walked to the van, got inside, drove to that location, and after parking, simply lay down to sleep. When he woke up, he remembered absolutely nothing. This happened because he had used his power beyond its limit. When he asked what day it was, Moji replied he had been unconscious for 2 days, and that it was already December 3rd. As soon as he heard that, Daum accelerated the van to escape as fast as possible. After all, he had just taken part in a full-blown massacre. The police would soon begin investigating the entire area, and he needed to disappear before they found any clues. The problem was that, after lying unconscious for 2 days in that spot, he had likely already left several pieces of evidence behind. In fact, it was almost a miracle they hadn't been found yet. Moji commented that she had been watching the numbers above their heads during that time. Daum explained that the numbers she saw merely represented life expectancy. If they were arrested by the police, those numbers could drop. She grew confused, but he made it clear he wasn't blaming her. The responsibility was entirely his. He explained that he had spent nearly 40 days using his powers without stopping, not only to analyze people's numbers, but also to predict the future. He knew that at some point his body would reach its limit, yet he took no precautions to avoid it. Moji then asked if he had pushed his powers because of the albino girl. While he was sleeping, he kept repeating her name the whole time. It was so Upon hearing this, the numerator slammed on the van's brakes suddenly, causing Moji to hit her head against the dashboard. Immediately after, he asked how she knew that name and if she had heard anything else while he slept. She replied that he just kept repeating that name like a sleepwalker. She said she couldn't understand all the other names, but remembered him calling someone big sister or senior. Irritated, he told her to shut her mouth and resume driving. Moji apologized and explained she wasn't making fun of him. He replied it was fine and that he just wanted a little silence. Even so, she decided to ask why he kept doing all of this, and also wanted to know who had turned him into the person he was today. Meanwhile, in the interrogation room at the city police station, Choi Chang-hyuk's right-hand man was giving a statement to investigator Kwon Samuel, and later, at the main Daejeong police station, Park Tae-han, the detective who didn't particularly like Kwon Samuel, introduced himself to the head of the Seoul Special Task Force, Kang Hun-guk, who had come due to the importance of the case. Behind him were Kwon Samuel and his assistant, Sergeant Ju Sol, who accompanied the investigator during the inquiry. Park Tae-han was confused. After all, they were from the anti-corruption investigation team, whereas this was a serial killer case. However, Kang Hun-guk explained he had specially assigned them because they were extremely good at this type of investigation. The rest of the team would arrive shortly. Meanwhile, Park Tae-han ended up getting distracted watching Kwon Samuel and his cynical smile. At first glance, he seemed like just an annoying-looking detective, someone who got along with everyone, and always seemed to be killing time. But when he found the right type of person, based on a criterion no one knew, he could conduct the best interrogations. At that moment, Kwon Samuel was face-to-face with Choi Chang-hyuk's assistant. As he reviewed the documents, he commented that everything was very specific. The previous statement was already enough to record the testimony about what happened at the scene, but he wanted to ask a few questions separately. Of the 21 victims, including Gu Jun, who was sitting across from him, only 3 had survived. For a crime committed by the numerator, that was extreme. Furthermore, it made no sense for 3 people to have survived. Above Gu Jun's head, Kwon Samuel saw the number 49,581, which represented the amount of lies he could still tell. When he asked why only 3 people had survived, Gu Jun replied he had no idea. The number didn't change, so Kwon Samuel changed the subject and asked why those 18 people had been chosen as targets by the numerator. About 80% of the victims of that incident had criminal records. The count included minor offenses, such as fines and probation, so it was hard to claim that was the sole motive for the murders. Even so, during the investigation into the numerator, they discovered that the more severe the crime committed by the victim, the higher the chances of them becoming a target. It was a fairly evident pattern. Not understanding where the investigator was going with this, Gu Jun asked what he really wanted to know. Kwon Samuel then explained he had analyzed police station records related to an assault and missing person case that occurred at a local club. Several employees from that venue had been interrogated multiple times as suspects. Officially, the company was a third-party security service provider, in addition to controlling 3 clubs acquired through a transfer from an acquaintance. To Kwon Samuel, that seemed like just a very common front and was perhaps deeply linked to the numerator case. Gu Jun replied he had no idea what he was talking about, and the number above his head decreased. He then insisted that all of it was a false accusation, and the number dropped once more. It was then that Kwon Samuel asked where his real cell phone was. The device handed over to the police was just a burner phone, whereas the phone he actually used for work was the same one that had received a call from Choi Chang-hyuk. Gu Jun replied he had never received that call, and the number decreased again. Kwon Samuel kept pressing, saying that phone maintained frequent contact with Choi Chang-hyuk's number. Still, Gu Jun countered by saying the investigator was missing the main point. He was there as a survivor of the numerator case, not as a suspect. If those irrelevant questions continued, he would exercise his right to remain silent. Even so, Kwon Samuel replied that, regardless of the numerator case, there were already enough suspicions to open an investigation against him, and he could do so whenever he pleased. Gu Jun merely answered that he could try, and that he didn't even need to call another lawyer. Later, Kwon Samuel was talking to Sergeant Ju Sol, who commented that those criminals had been walking free for 4 years. If there really was an informant inside the precinct receiving money from them, the situation would be a total dead end. Kwon Samuel replied he was already used to seeing cases like that slip by. Having a special ability was like playing a game of Mafia. Even if he figured out who the culprit was, convincing others was a completely different story. In the end, the problem was convincing the system itself. Following only the laws and rules, a lot of things ended up making no sense. Still, whenever he had to abandon a case like that, it left him thoroughly frustrated. Without any formal charges, Gu Jun simply left the police station. Later, down at the harbor, he arranged a meeting with another survivor from Choi Chang-hyuk's gang to flee the country. During the conversation, question. One of the henchmen asked what he had told the police about the girl who had let the people responsible for all that mess escape. Gu-jun replied he had only said she was a very skilled woman who maintained contact with Choi Chung-hyuk. Nothing beyond that. There was no reason to say more about her. If they were going to seek revenge, they would do it their own way, without relying on the incompetent police, who for 2 months had done nothing but make mistakes in that case. Suddenly, the call was cut off. Someone had attacked the other henchman. In the very next second, Gu-jun felt a steel cable tightening around his neck from behind. It was Kwon Samuel, who was saying the police truly were incompetent. Precisely for that reason, he was there to deliver proper punishment. According to him, he couldn't trust public servants either, who always seemed trapped in a dead end. With so much concern over human rights, they could never deliver a truly satisfying punishment. That was why a gun or a knife would be too fast. Strangling someone was much better, because the pain lasted longer. In his view, that was exactly the punishment criminals like Gu-jun deserved. At that moment, a strong wave made the entire harbor tremble. The impact allowed Gu-jun to break free and start running. Kwon Samuel didn't even bother to chase him. He merely commented that he would get chewed out for this later. While running through the middle of the shipping containers, Gu-jun realized someone was waiting for him. It was Kwon Samuel, walking slowly while humming. Before he could flee again, however, the criminal ended up captured by Sergeant Jusol. She complained that Kwon Samuel was never careful and always let someone escape due to his carelessness. He merely replied that she always ended up making a mess too. While being pinned down, Gu-jun couldn't believe the strength of that woman. Kwon Samuel then asked if he really wanted to stay alive. He said they could still make a deal. If he confessed everything he knew about contract killings, scams, homicides, and the other crimes he had committed, besides demonstrating true remorse, perhaps he would still have a chance to keep living. Gu-jun begged for his life. He said he was sorry and would never do anything like that again. Except while he was saying that, the numbers above his head kept decreasing, lower and lower. In the end, he ended up sleeping with the fishes. At the harbor's edge, Kwon Samuel asked Sergeant Jusol who the woman was that Gu-jun had been trying to call. She replied she didn't know, but they could find out by trying to call the same number. Kwon Samuel commented that at one point he thought Moji would eventually reveal herself that way. To him, it was good she had shown herself to be the trash she was. As the daughter of a murderer, he believed it was only a matter of time. The simple fact that so much evidence had been left behind meant there was a problem with the numerator, or with that ideal future she envisioned. He also commented it would be hard to reach the two of them using the police. Jusol then asked what he would do when he finally found them. Kwon Samuel replied he wouldn't do anything special. First, he would judge them before making any decision. He wanted to understand what kind of people they were, why they were together, and above all, what criteria they used to decide who should die. He said he would be fair with them first and listen to everything they had to say, but if he wasn't convinced, they too would end up swimming with the fishes. Meanwhile, the numerator was talking to Moji about his very criteria. He said he had never imagined anyone could understand him. He didn't care if he was seen as a hero or a villain. The truth was, he didn't trust anyone's judgment, not even his own. He didn't believe he was capable of deciding who was good, who was bad, which life was worth more, or which death could help the world. To him, every human life had potential. Still, when he had to choose between two sides, he always chose the one that would save more people. That was the sole principle he would never surrender. After that, he said he had spoken too much about himself and asked if that was the answer Moji wanted to hear. While the two spoke, Kwon Samuel was drawing closer and closer to them. The footprints found at the crime scene belonged to Moji, and the police were tracking the exact model of shoes she wore. On December 5th, at 1 p.m., Moji returned to the city completely disguised. She carried a shopping list to help both herself and the numerator. She needed to buy food, water, supplies, new clothes for disguises for both of them, and products to eliminate the smell of blood. At one point, a few people approached her, likely wanting to talk about church. To escape the conversation, Moji ran off, saying she had a boyfriend. It was just an excuse to get out of the situation, and it worked. She knew her face appeared briefly in that video circulating on the internet. Fortunately, no one seemed to recognize her in that disguise, perhaps due to the low quality of the recording, or simply because enough time had passed. In Korea, 2 weeks was plenty of time for a topic to cool down. It had been exactly 2 weeks since the incident, and since she met the numerator. She then recalled the conversation she had with Dom on December 4th. On that occasion, he had asked if that was the answer she was looking for. Moji replied only that it still felt unreal that something like that had happened in their own country. In the end, she realized Da-em wanted revenge against that woman. However, he explained it wasn't exactly revenge. The goal was to prevent someone like her from continuing to live in that world. It was a sense of duty. The number above her head was too high. If someone could save one person or 100 people, the natural thing would be to save the 100. To him, all lives had the exact same value. If he stopped thinking that way, he would be no different from those monsters. Then Moji asked if he could also see numbers. Da-em replied yes, but explained that her ability was the opposite of his. While he saw the murders destined to happen by a person's hands, So-ah saw how many lives someone would save in the future. Even so, he admitted it remained a great nuisance. As much as he thought about the matter, there was a contradiction he still couldn't explain. At that moment, a police car passed right beside the van where they were hiding, putting them both on high alert. Da-em handed the shopping list to Moji and explained he had severely injured one of his eyes 3 nights prior. He had recovered enough to see simple numbers again, but it would still take a few days before he could see the future once more. The ideal thing would be to remain hidden until then. However, he didn't know what kind of evidence they might have left behind or if they were already being tracked. Considering the possibility of investigators getting closer, the safest option was to sever any connection to the evidence and abandon that place as soon as possible. While he prepared the car, he asked Moji to go to the city center to buy everything on the list, including new clothes for disguises. That was exactly what she did. As she walked through the streets, she observed the yellow numbers above everyone's heads. Those numbers represented each person's lifespan. The numerator could see how many murders a person was destined to commit, while Soa could see how many lives someone would save. Still, it all came back to the same dilemma. If it was necessary to kill one person to save 5, was that truly the right choice? Moji still couldn't answer. A person's murder count could be high simply because they were a soldier, a police officer, or someone seeking revenge against criminals. Just like those exaggerated comic book characters Daom liked when he was a child, someone who killed only psychopaths and serial killers would still have a very high number, so eliminating them solely because of that number didn't seem to make sense, nor did it seem to make the world a better place. Moji herself didn't consider Soa a hero either. She herself used to say that Daom could never be absolutely certain of what he was doing. It was impossible to predict exactly who would become a problem in the future. If they misjudged, an innocent person would end up paying the price. Thinking about this, Moji concluded that Soa's logic made a little more sense. She couldn't say it was entirely correct, but realistically, with no one to guide them, the possibility existed that they themselves would end up becoming monsters. It was then that she remembered her own past. She recalled the mothers of the other children saying she would become a monster because her father was one too. That came rushing back to her head. If she truly agreed with that logic, then she herself should die. She should have died that day. The difference was that Moji hadn't been called a killer out of mere prejudice or speculation. She was actually destined to kill 4,326 people. Fate said she would become a murderer. Those thoughts left her shaken. A child accompanied by his mother noticed she didn't look well and asked if everything was alright. Moji replied only that she had felt a bit dizzy. While still recalling that day, she thought that just reflecting on killing and dying made her head hurt. Perhaps she really was that kind of person. Perhaps not. She simply had no way of knowing. It was then that she noticed something strange. A bus was arriving at the stop, and every single person around had exactly 22 minutes and a few seconds of life remaining. Everyone who was about to board that bus would die in just 22 minutes. She easily realized the countdown was in seconds, because the numbers decreased with every passing moment. Even so, she boarded the bus. As soon as she got on, everyone kept practically the same counter, now marking 19 minutes and a few seconds. For Moji, it was still difficult to keep track of so many numbers dropping at the same time. It strained her eyes, but it was impossible to ignore that something terrible was about to happen to all those passengers. Some people, however, maintained a normal lifespan without the countdown in seconds. That meant not everyone would die in the accident. Others had a much larger estimate precisely because they would likely get off before everything happened. That pattern would keep repeating for the next 19 minutes, until every marked person ended up dead. At that moment, the same child who had asked if she was okay earlier approached again and offered her a candy. The mother, distracted looking at her phone, merely scolded her son, saying he shouldn't go around offering candy to strangers on the street. Moji replied she didn't need any candy, but commented that he seemed to like strawberry. Seeing that child smile, she couldn't let that happen. Because of that, she called the numerator for help and explained the whole situation. She was on bus number 23, and they only had 17 minutes until the accident. According to the map app's analysis, the accident would happen 5 stops away. The numerator was familiar with that address and asked if she knew the cause of the accident. Moji replied that, honestly, she had no idea. Apparently it was just another ordinary bus ride. She asked him to go to the marked location where the accident would occur. Meanwhile, she would try to evacuate everyone from the bus. Before anything else, he asked for a photo of the passengers and especially the driver. He needed to check each person's predestined murders. Moji asked if causing a bus accident also counted as murder. The numerator replied that it was obvious. It was no different from stabbing someone. The only difference was that the weapon would be the vehicle itself. But Moji argued that the driver wouldn't intend to do that. The numerator replied he had several lives under his responsibility, and when so many were lost, it didn't matter whether there was intent or not. He then told her to pray hard that someone had a high number, because in that case, everyone there would be saved, since the blame would lie with the driver or some passenger. But if it were a natural disaster, like an earthquake, a cave-in, or a rock slide, various factors could cause the accident. Therefore, it was better if someone had a high number. Otherwise, she would have to get off the bus, because the cause of the accident wouldn't be controlled by human hands. However, if the number were concentrated in a specific person, especially the driver, there would still be a way to save the other passengers. If no one had a number, he couldn't do anything. The numerator explained that murder counts and life expectancies never changed. Immediately after, he said he was heading straight to the designated location. If he found someone genuinely responsible for the deaths, he would kill that person first. The second possibility was was that a culprit existed, but he couldn't find them. The third was that the accident was caused by a natural disaster. Moji replied that was complete nonsense. The first option simply made no sense. Even so, the numerator continued to defend his philosophy. He killed one person to save several others, and asked her to do her best. That might change something, or it might not. After he hung up the phone, Moji complained, asking why he had to be so difficult all the time. Meanwhile, more people got off the bus and others boarded. Only 14 minutes remained. To save everyone, she needed to get everyone off the vehicle. She decided to improvise a plan. She stole a lighter from a sleeping man and attempted to start a small fire to create an emergency and force everyone to evacuate the bus. However, she had trouble lighting it, and suddenly a sharp turn sent the object flying toward the front of the vehicle. An elderly woman handed the lighter back to Moji, but right after, the driver had to slam on the brakes at an intersection to avoid a crash. The lighter fell to the floor and broke. She remembered the numerator's words. All she had to do was try her best. That might change something, or it might not. As he walked toward the location where the accident was set to happen, the numerator thought that indeed, numbers never changed. The only exception he had ever seen was Moji. Perhaps she was the sole anomaly capable of altering numbers and people's destinies. Even knowing it likely wouldn't work, Moji tried to grab the emergency hammer to shatter one of the windows and cause panic. But the bus took another turn. The hammer slipped from her hand, bounced off at a ridiculous angle, and fell right out of the vehicle. The driver then called her out, telling her to hold tight to the handrail while the bus was in motion. Since it wasn't the first time he had seen her almost fall, Moji began to wonder why that kept happening. Perhaps those accidents weren't mere coincidences. Everything she tried was thwarted. When she tried to create smoke with the lighter, it broke. When she tried to break a window with the emergency hammer to create chaos, it simply fell out of the bus. No matter how hard she tried, nothing worked. It was as if some force were actively preventing any attempt to stop that bus. The numerator always said that once set, a number never changed. At that moment, he called Moji and warned her he had already arrived at the predicted crash site, between the plaza and the residential apartments. He checked the entire area, but as expected, found no visible cause or culprit. Given the condition of the streets and buildings, there appeared to be no risk of a collapse. The most likely scenario was a traffic accident involving one or more vehicles, or in the worst case, a rollover or an explosion. As the time drew nearer, the search area would shrink. For now, he would simply wait. Even so, he warned her not to hold her breath and to get off the bus before she died. Moji tried to calm down to think straight. If the numbers were fixed and couldn't be altered, any attempt to change them would be blocked by some force. Except that still didn't make sense to her. Following that logic, the numerator shouldn't be able to kill people destined to become murderers either. Their future death count was already fixed. If they died before that, it would be a contradiction, because their number should drop to 0. It was then she recalled the numerator's explanation about using numbers to predict the future. Perhaps she could do the same. Only 11 minutes remained. So, she decided to test her theory. When the bus doors opened, she stepped closer to the fire extinguisher. The times didn't change, and life expectancy stayed the same. However, the moment she placed one foot outside the bus, her life expectancy increased. In that instant, she understood two things. First, remaining inside the bus was the necessary condition to die in the accident. Second, unlike everyone else, she could freely alter her own future in real time. At that moment, the bus lurched again, and the fire extinguisher broke loose. Moji managed to catch it, and realized her theory was right. She really could interfere with a future that seemed fixed. She then recalled the incident with the stalker in the gangster's hideout. The numerator always looked at his own number before taking action, choosing the most advantageous future before killing someone. He did that all the time. In other words, he was always altering his own future. With the extinguisher in hand, Moji ran toward the driver and pointed the equipment directly at his face. It didn't matter which seat each passenger was in. The only way to increase everyone's life expectancy was to make them get off the bus. There was no alternative. Except the moment she did that, the bus would end up crashing into a pole. It wouldn't be an impact severe enough to kill many people, but it would still be an accident. Meanwhile, the numerator observed everything from the top of a building. His eyes were already burning, and he even struggled to see normal numbers. He tried calling Moji, but suddenly spotted a person whose number was changing rapidly. That person's predestined murders were 27. At that moment, Moji finally answered the call. The numerator rushed to leave the building, but she revealed that even after causing an accident ahead of time, she had failed. People's life expectancy remained the same. 4 minutes prior, she had forced the bus to crash into a pole. It was a very minor crash. No one was hurt, and the road was blocked immediately. The driver accused Moji, describing the clothes she was wearing and saying she had caused the accident. Because of that, she quickly changed her disguise. Even after doing so, her own life expectancy returned to normal. The other passengers, however, didn't change. That happened because everyone decided to take another form of transportation. They still had commitments, and the station was right nearby. All they had to do was continue the rest of the way by subway. Everyone's life expectancy kept dropping. Only 6 minutes remained. It was then that Moji realized that the whole time, perhaps the real accident was never meant to be with the bus, but with the subway. Without realizing it, she had merely ensured ensured everyone was exactly where they were supposed to be. Everything remained predestined. The subway arrived precisely as all the passengers stepped off the bus to board it. In the end, they were merely transferred from one vehicle to another. The remaining time stayed exactly the same. Not knowing what else to do, Moji asked what on earth she was supposed to do. She could see the numbers, but she couldn't interfere with the future. She couldn't face that colossal force controlling past, present, and future in the same way the numerator did. She couldn't fight against time itself, nor against God. The numerator replied only that he knew exactly how she felt. He truly understood that. For a long time, he had tried to find a way to lower the numbers without needing to kill anyone. He wanted to change the future without resorting to murder. She already knew that. Just as she could change her own future by seeing her numbers, it was as though whoever saw their own fate ceased to be completely trapped by it. Except every action created a reaction that pulled everything back to the starting point, restoring the original flow of events. That was why he explained she needed to cut the lines of fate completely. In the brief time remaining, there was no choice other than to cause a permanent change, so he asked her to pay close attention, because this was important. Unlike the bus accident, there was a culprit behind that subway crash. There was a person responsible for altering everyone's fate. As he said this, the numerator pursued a hooded man who had the number 27 above his head. However, as Moji already knew, his eyes were damaged, so he asked if she understood what that meant. She would have to kill him. Since she was the only one capable of seeing the future, it was up to her to eliminate the culprit and save everyone on that train. He then asked what her choice would be: keep her hands clean or let everyone die. She would have to decide between letting the train crash and kill several people, or altering the course of events by killing just one. At that moment, Moji remembered everything she had ever heard about becoming a killer just like her father. She also recalled the moment she had almost succumbed to the urge to kill. Once again, she stood before the exact same decision. Since the incident involving her father, all she wanted was to live a normal life, like any girl. She had never wanted to become a murderer like him. But when she held the knife that day, she remembered every time people had called her a monster. She also recalled her own predestined murder count, 4,326. She returned to reality when she heard the numerator insisting over the phone. Time was running out. She needed to decide quickly whether she would kill the culprit or not. Moji replied she couldn't simply decide to kill someone like that. Meanwhile, the numerator kept following the hooded man and informed her he was in the second car. She, however, was in the sixth. The numerator himself was close enough to kill him, but acting from there would be extremely difficult. Therefore, she needed to reach the second car as fast as possible. Even so, Moji asked why she had to do it. The numerator replied she already possessed the perfect weapon, a syringe with lethal poison. She didn't need strength or skill, she just needed to administer the dose. She still didn't know if that would work, or what the chances of success were. Even so, the numerator replied that to him, everything always seemed impossible. So Moji activated her power, plucked up her courage, and began walking toward the second car. As she crossed the train, she started to think, what would drive a person to kill 27 subway passengers? Perhaps a bomb, perhaps toxic gas to fill the cars, or maybe a fire. Just like before, she had no idea what motives drove that man to want to kill so many innocent people. She couldn't imagine what was going through his head. She even came to think that the world might not change at all if one or two people like that man simply disappeared. Except at that instant, the train lurched again, making everyone lose their balance. The hooded man's backpack fell to the floor, scattering various trinkets, some trash, and the items he intended to use to start a fire in the subway. An elderly man standing nearby showed disgust, kicked the items scattered on the floor, picked up a teddy bear that was among them, and threw it away, humiliating the man in front of everyone. The people around began recording the scene, saying he was just a beggar and should disappear from their sight. The hooded man replied he had merely become exactly what everyone had always wanted him to be. In that instant, Moji saw herself in that person. The numerator heard the commotion over the phone and asked what was happening. Instead of answering, Moji simply grabbed the hooded man's backpack and ran toward the first car. The numerator asked what on earth she was doing. She needed to go back, take the weapon, and kill the murderer. But Moji had seen her own reflection in that man, in that hooded killer who was willing to kill everyone because he had been humiliated. She realized she couldn't simply decide to kill someone just because she believed that person would kill others in the future. After all, that was exactly what they had done to her. They tried to do away with Moji simply for being the daughter of a murderer, believing she would inevitably follow the same path. If she did that, she would be no different from a killer. She wouldn't be saving people, she would just be killing one. Even so, the numerator kept insisting she needed to choose a destiny. Then Moji asked if he was truly certain that destiny couldn't change. The initial accident was clearly supposed to happen with a bus, but ended up shifting to a subway, even increasing the number of passengers involved. That meant people's fates had already been altered because of her. They still didn't understand exactly how those numbers worked. Because of that, Moji promised she would find a third option to save everyone. Even so, the numerator replied he had told her countless times that changing a number was impossible. Moji said that it had always been his work alone, but she could help him change destiny. She had an idea that was more of a gamble, because she had no certainty it would work. She would do something that only she, with her own power, was capable of doing. The numerator continued explaining that by using self-prediction of the future, it It was possible to alter fate, but the instant a person stopped using the power, it was like a rubber band snapping back to its original place in destiny. That was precisely what happened in the stalker's case. When the numerator killed that man, whose murder count was 3, he ended up extending the lives of 3 people in the family. As for self-prediction, one had to prepare completely for the flow of destiny and time. That was the method the numerator had been using the whole time, eliminating numbers through deaths. Any other method seemed impossible. By the murder count, he could know how many people someone would kill, but not who the victims would be. Moji, on the other hand, could see the victims and their lifespans. Because of that, she believed the reverse should also be possible. Instead of killing the aggressor to save the victim, she could save the victim to prevent the aggressor from committing the upcoming murders, saving both sides. The numerator replied that saving the victim was impossible. In fact, that was precisely why they had ended up in that subway. She had already tried to save the bus victims, and nothing changed. Even so, Moji asked what would happen if she kept her prediction active until the very end of those people's life expectancy. Only 2 minutes and 1 second remained. If she kept her self-prediction active through all that time, keeping everyone outside the interference of fate and keeping everyone alive past the end of their lives, perhaps a completely new future, separated from the original flow, could be created. The numerator asked if she could endure that. The moment she thought of keeping her eyes active for so long, they began to ache intensely, and she fell to the subway floor. The pain was unbearable because her brain was being overloaded with information. The numerator warned that if she interrupted her power for even a single moment, the entire plan would go wrong. It was then that Moji realized the gasoline inside the backpack had been leaking for quite some time. The trail of flammable liquid had already reached several people. At that moment, the hooded woman demanded her backpack back, where the doll was. Brandishing a blowtorch, she began threatening everyone on the train, ordering them to hand over the bag. Since gasoline was leaking, the situation became even more dangerous. Moji needed to quickly regain control over the flow of time, but her eyes were no longer working properly. It was then that the numerator took action. Using his silenced pistol and his own future prediction, he fired a shot to shatter a window. The glass fell over the woman with the blowtorch, causing her to drop the weapon. In truth, he had wanted to kill that woman for a long time, but began to wonder if that really was Moji's choice, to save both sides. To him, that was impossible, or at least it should be. Even so, he wanted to believe in that miracle, because she had already managed to perform one. Moji didn't understand that woman's motives. She had brought all those things to start a fire in the subway, but she had made that choice on her own. Perhaps all other possibilities, and all the paths she had tried to follow had been taken from her. She was a person whose future had been stolen by others. It was then that Moji made an unexpected decision. She poured gasoline over her own head. Neither the hooded woman nor the numerator understood why, but she wanted to bet on that single remaining possibility of winning. Only 41 seconds remained. The hooded woman tried to retrieve the blowtorch, but Moji charged toward her. With the passengers trapped in the commotion and unable to move, a single spark would be enough for everyone to die. Because of that, she poured gasoline on herself, making herself the primary target. She needed to find the best possible future, one where even she, completely soaked in gasoline, would survive. That way, all the focus of fate, life and death would shift to her, lifting the weight off the other people. Technically, now she was the only one at risk. When she lunged at the killer, who had already retrieved the blowtorch, sunlight reflected off the subway window and blinded the criminal's vision. Taking advantage of that opening, Moji slammed her against the train door, breaking the glass and throwing the backpack, along with the flammables and the blowtorch, out of the subway. The numerator confirmed that the backpack had indeed been thrown outside. Right after, Moji collapsed completely exhausted, after saving everyone. Next, the subway stopped briefly on the tracks, crossing the river, and began moving slowly toward a safe location where all passengers could evacuate without danger. The numerator approached, threw his coat over Moji, and told her to hide. From that moment on, they would head in the opposite direction of the survivors, because there would certainly be police officers waiting at the station. Even exhausted, Moji looked around and realized that all 27 people had regained their normal life expectancy. She had managed to save everyone without killing anyone. The numerator commented she had taken an enormous risk, especially since she needed to keep a low profile because of the police. But Moji replied everything had turned out fine. That meant numbers could indeed be altered, just like the number 1 above her head. Remembered the promise he had made to prove that numbers never decreased. Except now Moji was showing him the exact opposite. It was possible to save people without having to kill others. At that moment, an evacuation order was issued for everyone still in the station. However, the numerator said he needed to do one last check. The two returned to the crime scene and found several police officers surrounding the hooded woman before taking her into custody. The numerator then asked Moji if she truly believed it wasn't necessary to choose a side, nor to kill one person to save 27 others. She really had brought all the victims into a different future without even touching the killer. killer, but he asked if, by any chance, she had checked the life expectancy of that woman she decided to spare. At that exact moment, by an irony of fate, one of the ceiling lights in the subway came loose and fell directly onto the culprit's head, killing her instantly. Moji fell into complete despair upon realizing that, in the end, fate never changes. A number that has been determined simply never changes. Moji tried to run to the woman to check on her, but the numerator only wanted her to come back, so as not to draw attention. Later, while hiding in an alley, Moji asked if he had known that would happen all along, and even so, hid the truth from her on purpose. The numerator replied by telling her about his first victim. He didn't kill him, he merely kept him captive. That happened even before he returned to Korea. That predatory killer, after failing to reach his murder quota, ended up being tried again for another crime and executed. However, the man whose arms and legs the numerator had broken and locked in captivity died before that, falling victim to sepsis caused by a small wound that became infected. After trying countless different methods multiple times, he finally realized that fate, as if mocking him for trying to save both sides, always ended up forcing a choice. It wasn't just about numbers, abilities, or probabilities. From the day he left the orphanage until he became the numerator, every step of his life had been the result of a choice. Whenever he followed one path, he was forced to abandon another, and even when he believed he had secured both, something ended up being taken from him in the end. Because of that, he decided that the most just path was to choose the one where the greatest possible number of people survived. He then confessed to Moji that he really had pretended not to know what would happen. He hadn't wanted to destroy her resolve before she even tried. He thought that perhaps someone like her could achieve a different outcome. He had believed in her too, but in the end, nothing changed. Moji asked if giving up like that was really the end. Was someone marked to be a murderer, left with no choice other than becoming a murderer, or dying? To her, it was a situation that drove a person to that fate. But the numerator replied he didn't even care about the motives that turned someone into a killer. Moji insisted she didn't believe that simply killing every person who appeared before him was the best solution. At that moment, however, the call began to break up, and she stopped talking. Investigator Kwan Samuel had placed a steel cord around her neck and asked who she was speaking to on the phone. Kwan Samuel told Moji to listen carefully. He said the important part was for her to call the numerator right then and there. He asked her to take a deep breath, make the call again, and stay calm. When the call went through, the numerator himself, using a voice changer, asked who was speaking and demanded they state what they wanted right away. Kwan Samuel replied that it was nothing major. He simply said he was very interested in that distorted version of vigilante justice he followed, and that he would like to meet him in person to talk face to face about it. The numerator had no idea who that bastard was. From what the man had just said, it was obvious that he was the real target of the investigation, but the police didn't usually act that way. If they had really found the two of them at the subway station, they would have confronted him on the spot, drawing the attention of the authorities, instead of letting the moment pass to catch Moji off guard. In other words, whoever was after him was someone who had been pursuing him for a long time. Kwan Samuel explained that he hadn't done anything bad to Moji up to that point, and that he didn't care what happened to her. But perhaps the numerator thought differently, so he set a meeting at an abandoned building on Naman Street at 10 o'clock that night. However, the numerator refused immediately. He said they were all pathetic and deserved nothing. He also stated that he didn't care about the girl held hostage, and that they could do whatever they wanted with her. She wouldn't die so easily, and he wasn't going to turn himself in for her sake. After that, he hung up the call. Kwan Samuel had thought the relationship between the two was closer, but realized he was mistaken. So he released Moji's neck, apologized for what he had done, and told her to relax because she didn't need to run away. He assured her they wouldn't kill her. After all, they were still police officers. However, their expressions said otherwise. At least to Moji, they didn't seem like real police officers. Kwan Samuel explained that it was her choice to go with them to talk. After all, she had been fleeing the subway not long ago. If she were recognized, it would only bring more trouble. And if she still wanted to find the numerator, staying with them would be the safest option. Meanwhile, the numerator was tracking the signal from the device he had installed on Moji's phone. However, Kwan Samuel already knew about its existence. According to the detective, people obsessed with never losing control of a situation always do that kind of thing. This only increased his curiosity to meet the numerator. Moji tried to use her power, but couldn't. Her eyes began to sting, and when she realized it, Kwan Samuel was staring at her with his red eyes. He then asked if, by any chance, her eyes were hurting. He said that might explain a lot of things. Next, he asked the sergeant to drive slowly for a while because he wanted to talk with the girl for a bit. He also warned her that from then on, she should not lie. At that exact moment, the numerator was preparing his equipment and asked his supplier if she had gotten what he requested. She replied that he had called just in time and had already provided the number of the warehouse where the requested motorcycle was located. Since he was an irregular client, the billing would be handled later. She only asked him not to break the motorcycle this time. The The numerator left immediately toward the tracker, saying he couldn't promise anything. During his years as a detective, Kwon Samuel learned that it was possible to discover a lot just by observing a person. Sweat, breathing, and small details revealed much more than it seemed, but he also knew there was a limit. It was impossible to completely know someone's true essence just by looking at the outside. The suspect sitting in front of him could be just an ordinary girl who lost her way in life and ended up making a mistake, but she could also be someone completely beyond saving, a person who cried to appear like a victim while hiding a cruel, shameless nature. According to Kwon Samuel, only he was capable of seeing the lies through his eyes. When he first watched the video of Mo Ji, daughter of Mo Hyun-chel, the police version stated that she had grabbed a knife during a fit of rage to save a boy. But to Kwon Samuel, the recording was of too low quality to draw any conclusions. She could have grabbed the knife to save the boy, or simply to kill another person because she wanted to. After investigating everything, analyzing photos, apartment security cameras, and even the footprints at the scene on December 2nd, he concluded that the girl, who was still of high school age, was walking alongside the most deadly serial killer in the country. On December 4th, Kwon Samuel hired someone to keep watch on both the girl and the van. If this criminal found the information he wanted, he would drop all charges against him. And of course, the man carried out the task. To Kwon Samuel, it was like a game of mafia where lives were at stake. Arresting one or two small-time criminals made no difference. What mattered was understanding the psychology hidden in people's hearts and discovering their true nature. Only then would it be possible to reach the real mafia and cut out the root of evil. The detective carried a huge burden. If the police failed to capture these criminals, every night some citizen would risk losing their life. That was why he could never allow them to escape. On the day he heard about the incident involving the stalker in that building, he rushed to the scene but found only another victim. Now, however, he was finally standing before the criminal. At least, that was how he saw her. He asked if Moji's eyes were tired or hurting. He said he just wanted to have a quiet chat, and asked her not to lie. He didn't want it to feel like an interrogation. Since she didn't answer, he decided to give her a few options. The first was that dust had gotten into her eyes. The second was that it happened because of the fire extinguisher used on the bus. And the third was that she had overused her eyes. To him, the correct answer was the third option. Then he asked about the incidents on the bus and the subway. He wanted to know her goal in causing all that chaos. The first option was that she felt an urge to kill random people. The second was that she just wanted to stop the bus by causing a disturbance. Meanwhile, Moji was completely desperate. She thought about what she should answer, not even knowing if those men were real police officers. She also had no idea what their true objective regarding the numerator was, but she had a terrible bad feeling. Since she remained silent, Kwon Samuel said he would assume the answer was the first option. To him, that was terrorism. The murder attempt at home probably hadn't been enough for Moji. Even so, he explained that cases like that were common, and that it didn't necessarily mean she was a bad person. According to him, people like that believed society didn't value them, and ended up taking out their frustrations on an indefinite number of innocent people. That was why she had been following the numerator until now. It was at that moment that Moji lost control. She said Kwon Samuel knew absolutely nothing about her, and told him to stop acting like she was a killer. Even so, Kwon Samuel maintained a completely calm expression. He said he seemed to have misunderstood something. From her reaction, he realized that the crime hadn't simply been a random attack. Only then did Moji realize she had been manipulated, and ended up answering exactly what he wanted to find out. Kwon Samuel began to raise a few hypotheses. He wanted to discover a specific routine or piece of information that only Moji would know. So he asked exactly which of those numbers she could see, whether it was the time and place where an accident would happen, the number of predestined murders a person would commit, or their life expectancy. Using her future foresight, Moji decided to gamble. She answered that she would tell him which number she could see, but only if he revealed his first. Naturally, Kwon Samuel was excited by the proposal, while Jusol grew concerned, so Moji gave him 3 options to choose from. The first was that he could see the sentence a person would receive. The second was the number of crimes someone had committed, and the third was the number of times a person lied. At that exact moment, the numerator appeared through the car's rear window, shattered the glass, and grabbed Kwon Samuel by the neck. He commented that it had been a long time since he had seen such a high number, and asked if the detective had any last words. Kwon Samuel reacted by trying to rip off the numerator's helmet, but ended up having his hand slashed. The wound hurt only a little. As he bandaged his wrist, he asked how the killer had identified the car and commented that he also seemed to ride a motorcycle very well. Right after, the numerator appeared on the other side of the vehicle and made a few gestures for Moji to understand. He was signaling her to use her future foresight. She responded by raising 2 fingers on both hands, but he didn't understand the meaning. At that moment, he had to swerve behind a truck when Jusol started shooting at him. Kwon Samuel commented that the numerator drove like a lunatic, but that didn't seem related to his ability. Jusol became worried upon hearing him talking talk about powers, but he replied that there was no longer any reason to hide it. The girl had already figured everything out. Her stinging eyes were no coincidence. She also possessed an ability. The detective even praised Moji, saying she was an incredible girl for being able to face that situation like that. In his opinion, her ability would be much more useful working as a police officer. Moji asked if he was truly a police officer and what his real goal was. Kwon Samuel replied that, for the police, there was only one goal: to catch the bad guys. But right after, he asked what truly defined a bad person. Was it someone who committed crimes, who killed, who stole? Did it come from genetics or the environment? If someone inherited a bad tendency from their parents, did that automatically make them a bad person? According to him, evil was much more complex. There was a moral code beyond the law itself, and there were people so rotten that they could no longer be saved, people who could only be judged by death. Even so, Kwon Samuel explained that he couldn't define who was bad just by looking at a few isolated facts, not even in Moji's or the numerator's case. That was precisely why he wanted to talk to him. He wanted to find out what kind of personality he possessed, what criteria he used to decide who lived and who died, and what was truly hidden inside him. At that moment, the numerator lunged at the car again, narrowly dodging the bullets. So Kwon Samuel used that as an example. He said the numerator was trying to kill him, but not because he wanted to, but because he needed to. The proof was that he hadn't yet shot at the car's tires to make it flip. Next, he presented three possibilities. The first was that he didn't want to cause an accident, so as not to attract attention. The second was that he didn't want to involve Moji. And the third was that he was only pretending to want to kill them because he was listening to the entire conversation through the device hidden in Moji's clothes. Then he asked directly if that wasn't true, saying that this time, he had hit the mark. Upon removing the device from her clothes, Kwon Samuel also threw the yo-yo onto the road. At that instant, the detective simply threw himself out of the car and fell from the bridge, landing precisely on a passing garbage truck. Before disappearing, he shouted to the numerator that the tracker was still with him. If he wanted to find him, it would be very easy. If he preferred to keep chasing the car, all he had to do was follow the motorcycle. Now he had only two choices: pursue the investigator or rescue Moji. That decision would show what his true priority was. Above Kwon Samuel's head, the number 52 continued to appear. Meanwhile, Moji remained in the car. Ju-Sul had already received all the detective's orders. They would meet at the designated spot 45 minutes later to put Plan A into action. As expected, the numerator appeared at the location, and Kwon Samuel was already waiting for him. As soon as the killer appeared, the detective threw his yo-yo toward his neck. The numerator managed to block the string using his own arms, but Kwon Samuel reacted quickly and changed the movement instantly. At that moment, the numerator remembered that Moji had pressed Kwon Samuel, saying that he also possessed an ability to see numbers. Through the communicator in the numerator's ear, Kwon Samuel commented that he had also been surprised. At first, he was skeptical because he had only heard that the numerator was a killer who left numbers behind. That made him think that perhaps he really possessed a similar ability. Furthermore, he wanted to find out why his number was so high and what the true meaning of that number was. In reality, all that time the detective was merely preparing his trap. He pulled the yo-yo strings and brought several metal beams crashing down onto the numerator. The killer managed to dodge all of them, but ended up locked in hand-to-hand combat. Kwon Samuel then revealed a curious habit. He told exactly 5 lies a day. If he lied less on one day, he made up for it the next. If he lied more than necessary, he reduced it the following day. He did this to keep his daily quota always the same. That count was the method he used to measure his own life expectancy. When he tried to strike the numerator with a taser, he ended up being disarmed with extreme ease and violence. Even so, he said there was no need for all of that. He had already heard what the killer's purpose was, and had been following his crimes for a long time. The two of them possessed similar abilities, and he believed they could talk and understand each other. The only point he still didn't understand was the criteria the numerator used to choose his victims. He knew it was related to the high or low numbers he saw, but there were always 1 or 2 cases that didn't fit that pattern. The numerator answered directly. He said he would kill Kwon Samuel to save the 52 people he would murder in the future. That reason alone was enough. Then he asked if he had any last wish or last words. Kwon Samuel asked if that was true. He wanted to confirm if the numerator could really see the number of murders a person would commit in the future, and if that was the sole criterion used to decide who should die. At that very moment, Da felt his power return. He closed his eyes and saw his own count. The number was now 3,713. His body was already completely recovered. Without wasting time, he charged toward Kwon Samuel, who pulled more chains and beams using the yo-yo strings. Even while dodging all the attacks, the numerator ended up taking a heavy knee to the pit of his stomach, as if Kwon Samuel had predicted exactly what he would do. Kwon Samuel was impressed. To him, that was absurd. Among all the possibilities he had imagined, he never expected that the execution method and the criterion used to decide who to kill were actually so simple. Da wondered what that feeling had been. He had clearly used his future foresight. Meanwhile, as Kwon Samuel grabbed the chain, he finally understood why the numerator let some criminals go unpunished. It was because their number was 1, but that made no sense sense at all. The man the numerator left alive 5 days ago would certainly commit more murders, perhaps not directly, but he had contacts. He was a criminal and would end up causing even more deaths. In Kwon Samuel's view, the numerator's execution criterion was completely flawed, as it allowed criminals to remain alive. He continued striking the numerator's face with the chain, saying he was truly disappointed. He commented that he had asked Santa Claus for a real killer, not someone mediocre like him. Whether in violence or conviction, the numerator didn't come close to what was expected. If he couldn't even defeat a detective like him, then there was no longer an answer. Kwon Samuel stated that he no longer wanted to be the numerator's partner, nor use him as a pawn. Still, he made a proposal. All he had to do was free Moji so she could become a detective alongside him. In exchange, he would never pursue the numerator again. Furthermore, he believed she had much more potential. She was smart, adapted easily to situations, and possessed a much more useful ability. He also demanded that the numerator cease his activities, as he had already done enough. In his opinion, such a superficial person had no right to judge villains. The numerator, however, replied that there was a flaw in his reasoning. He said he didn't kill villains, but predestined killers. After all, that was the only thing he could distinguish. Next, he asked if Kwon Samuel was truly capable of distinguishing villains. Did he have that right? In Gray City, there were all kinds of human groups where good, evil, prejudice, and interests blended dizzyingly. It was no longer possible to separate black from white. Kwon Samuel replied that he could, indeed, and that he was the only one capable of doing so. Upon hearing those words, Da-um remembered So-ah, who also believed she could judge villains however she pleased. Without hesitating, he grabbed Kwon Samuel by the neck and said he was the second hero he had encountered in his life. Therefore, he would receive what he deserved. Right after, he detonated a flashbang right in front of both their faces. Meanwhile, Jusol was worried because Kwon Samuel insisted on facing the numerator alone. It was precisely at that moment that the grenade exploded. Before the explosion, the investigator had managed to recognize Dam's face, feeling that he had seen him somewhere before. As the flash filled the area, Jusol grew even more apprehensive. Even knowing she shouldn't interfere, she decided to enter the building. The explosion blinded Kwon Samuel's vision, but the numerator was also hit. Even so, he simply responded by stating the date and time, affirming that by killing Kwon Samuel at that moment, he would save another 52 people. Taking advantage of the fact that the detective was weakened by the blast, he knocked him down without difficulty. Now that he had recovered his future foresight, everything became much easier. He closed off all of Kwon Samuel's paths and opened new ones for himself. At that moment, he remembered Moji's attempt to change the future. That gave him hope, and he decided to follow the same path. He also recalled her words, saying that perhaps killing wasn't the only solution to stop murderers. With the knife trembling in his hands, he believed there was no other choice. However, he remembered that she had also thrown herself out of the car, even while handcuffed, because she believed that no one's fate had to end in death. After all, they were three ability users capable of changing destiny together. Jusol arrived before Moji. She kicked the numerator's leg, immobilized his arms, and displayed all her strength. Her punches were extremely heavy and threw him against the floor. Even so, in the middle of the barrage of blows, he managed to break free from the hold, using his own jacket, and caught her off guard. As strong as she was, he could still predict the future. What he didn't expect was Kwon Samuel, who took advantage of the opportunity to trap his neck with the chain. Jusol tried to shoot, but he escaped once more. Now it was a 2-on-1 fight. Above Jusol's head, the number 37 appeared. However, observing the perfect synergy between her and Kwon Samuel, the numerator realized that the two had been cooperating for a long time, and concluded that they had already killed many people together. Jusol checked if Kwon Samuel's ability was still working, and he replied that he could see the boy's number in front of him. However, that was a very special case. Since the two of them had met, the numerator had never told a single lie. In his entire life, he would lie only 25 times. The numerator then stated that they needed to face reality. Good and evil were merely illusions. It didn't matter if the victim was good or evil. If the judgment was made by a person rather than a rule, the result would always be the same: murder. People were flawed. Rules were not. Kwon Samuel replied that, in that case, all the numerator had to do was look in the mirror for a second. Everything would be resolved if they simply killed him first. The numerator, however, answered that if there were another way to distinguish predestined killers besides his ability, he would gladly accept death. The number above his head did not decrease. He was telling the truth. That sparked Kwon Samuel's curiosity, and he proposed a temporary ceasefire. The numerator replied that if that were a trick, he would kill him. The detective then explained that he knew he was looking for the albino girl. He said he could help him find her, investigate everything about her, and that he also possessed information about Mo Hyun-chul. The moment that name was mentioned, Moji appeared and asked how that was possible. Kwon Samuel explained that he had personally gone to investigate the orphanage where Mo Hyun-chul was last seen. The place was completely abandoned, filled with scattered school desks, creating an extremely eerie environment. There, he found records of Da-um, who showed symptoms similar to his. He also discovered information about the albino girl, which was why he asked the numerator if she was the one he was looking for. It was at that exact moment that Moji arrived in time to hear hear her father's name being mentioned. Confused, she asked what that meant. She wanted to know what his relationship with the albino girl was, how much Kwon Samuel really knew, and why her father's name had come up in this whole story. Kwon Samuel asked if the numerator had never told her that. He explained that Mo Hyun-chul was one of the teachers at the orphanage, but by all indications, he never revealed that mysterious part of his life, even to his own family. Moji then asked Da-um if he knew about it. He told her not to fall for the investigator's tricks. Even so, she said it didn't matter whether it was a lie or the truth. Her father's name had been mentioned in the same breath as the orphanage and the albino girl. Da-um replied that it was also his first time hearing about it. Thanks to his ability, Kwon Samuel knew the numerator wasn't lying, so he explained that he began by investigating Mo Hyun-chul and, following the clues, ended up reaching the orphanage. Since they set out with practically no information, that path was the most natural. The numerator then asked how much he really knew and who he truly was. Kwon Samuel simply revealed how his ability worked. At that moment, Moji realized he was right. Compared to powers capable of killing or saving people, her ability seemed trivial, but precisely because of that, it was perfect for working in the shadows. Kwon Samuel then proposed a cooperation among the three of them. They needed information, while he needed manpower. Together, they could dig deeper and deeper to confront the true evil, not just ordinary killers, but people who did all the dirty work without ever staining their own hands with blood. People who used influence, money, social connections, and even underworld professionals to protect their privileges. Against enemies like that, three ability users working together could create an intimidating synergy. He promised to provide answers about the albino girl, and also about Mo Hyun-chul, provided the two accepted a peace agreement. Then he asked how that proposal sounded to them. While thinking, Da-um remembered his friend and also Soa, the killer who believed she could judge villains. At the same time, he recognized that he didn't possess all the information Kwon Samuel had. However, if he had truly managed to reach the orphanage, it was because he was an excellent investigator. Meanwhile, Moji asked why, if he had information about Mo Hyun-chul, he had never revealed anything to the world. She and her mother lived completely unaware of what he did. Meanwhile, Kwon Samuel treated everything as if it were just a corporate negotiation. For the sake of her family, and so many other victims, he could have simply revealed the whole truth. Before the argument could continue, Ju-sol pushed Moji away from Kwon Samuel, saying she shouldn't speak to him that way. After all, she wasn't the only victim in this story. Kwon Samuel ordered Ju-sol to stop, but it was the numerator who interrupted everyone. He pulled the investigator close, and pressed the barrel of his gun against his head. Then he told Moji that there was no reason to let those two leave alive. Kwon Samuel had the number 52, and Ju-sol the number 37. He needed to follow the rules. There could be no exceptions. If the number was high, execution had to happen immediately. There was no room for subjectivity. It was a justification built solely on rigid rules, devoid of emotion. As long as there were people he had killed following that principle, he would not allow those rules to be twisted. Then Kwon Samuel told him to shoot. He told him to fire into his head, because those were the rules the numerator himself had created. The enemy he had pursued his entire life for revenge, the famous serial killer known as the numerator, was standing right before him, and it was precisely at that moment that he wanted to discover his true essence. Remembering Soa, who also believed she could judge villains, the numerator pulled the trigger. On that very day, December 5th, the police identified a suspect believed to be Moji, appearing for the first time since the last incident. And curiously, it was also from that day onward that the serial murders committed by the numerator, who carved numbers into his victims' bodies, simply stopped, as if he had gone completely inactive. In truth, the gun went off, but it was not aimed at Kwon Samuel. The detective already knew that would happen. He then explained that, according to modern neuroscience, human behavior is not determined by free will, but by the unconscious chemical reactions of the brain. The moment the numerator pointed the gun at his head, the number above him decreased. At that moment, Kwon Samuel realized he would never shoot. He knew the numerator would make the right choice, because he was intelligent. Accepting a compromise to capture a greater evil was something only human beings could do. That was neither right nor wrong. It was simply natural. After all, the numerator was not a rule. He was a person, just another flawed human being living in that world. At that moment, the police began surrounding the area. Kwon Samuel warned that reinforcements would only cause more trouble. He then handed the phone back to the numerator and kicked him away, saying that the numerator's rule had died at that moment. Shortly after, Ju-seol placed Moji over her shoulder to carry her away, but Kwon Samuel said that from then on, he would be the one coordinating everything. He also asked the numerator to keep an eye on his phone. When it began to rain, everyone was distracted for a few seconds. It was very strange for it to rain in December. Taking advantage of the distraction, Moji managed to break free and asked if Kwon Samuel hadn't said the police's job was to arrest the bad guys. So why was he hiding information that so many people were desperately searching for, while forcing others to kill each other? That didn't seem like a compromise. It wasn't fair. Kwon Samuel responded by asking how long she had been by the numerator's side. He said that if she truly hated killing people, she shouldn't stay with him. Then he asked if Baek-min was her friend. After all, he had been the only one who believed in her the entire time. In addition to keeping her mother company at the hospital, everyone was still waiting for her to return. If the numerator was giving her her special treatment and hadn't killed her, she could simply have returned to her normal life. Moji replied that, of course, she wanted to go back to her former life. How could she not? The problem was that she no longer knew how to do that. After everything she had discovered, nothing would ever be the same again. A girl her age should be going to school every morning, talking with her friends, and spending nights studying for semester exams. But she simply couldn't live that way anymore. That was precisely the hardest part. She couldn't live just as Mo Hyun-chul's daughter, nor as a predestined killer. Upon hearing this, Kwon Samuel stepped closer, removed her handcuffs, and made the same proposal again. He said they could work together from then on. He promised to help clear her record, but only after she did the right thing. When it came time to decide, however, Moji turned back to help the numerator. She extended her hand to him and said they needed to get out of there as fast as possible. As they drove back, Kwon Samuel commented that he had hoped she would accept his offer. Jusol replied that it didn't matter because, personally, she didn't want that girl by their side either. During the ride, Kwon Samuel recalled the day he had rushed to the crime scene and met Jusol for the first time. She had gone to that house because one of her family members had been a victim of Mo Hyun-chul. In the end, Kwon Samuel stated that nothing would change. They would simply move on to the next target and eliminate them before more people died. Meanwhile, Moji and the numerator continued their journey by motorcycle. Moji said she made that decision the moment she saw that woman dying on the subway. If someone is already destined to become a killer, whether due to fate, environment, genetics, or life circumstances that leave no choice but to follow that path, then she will shatter all of it. If it is already decided that someone will end up tied to the tracks, she will destroy that destiny, crush it into pieces, and prove that the numbers can decrease. She will also stop the numerator. None of the three ability users cared about what other people thought of them. They were all human beings capable of overcoming any adversity, regardless of whether the whole world believed in them or not. Meanwhile, Soa was claiming another victim. At the same time, Mo Hyun-chul received a visitor. From that moment on, things would begin to change, as different forces were altering fate. Naturally, the entire situation involving Moji was documented. First, there was a report of a disturbance on bus 4450 at 4 in the afternoon. Then, at 5 o'clock, an attempted arson occurred on line 1, heading toward Gaesong, followed by the death of the main suspect. By 7:30 that evening, gunshots were heard at an abandoned building on Namun Street and along the surrounding roads, where numerous bullet marks were also found. The police strongly suspected that the numerator and Moji were at the center of this sequence of incidents. At first, the police still had many doubts about the hypothesis that the numerator was accompanying Moji. Based on the information gathered by the task force, perhaps because it had passed through Kwon Samuel's hands, no trace of the two was found. However, footprints found in the underground warehouse in southwest Daejeong, where several members of a criminal organization were found dead, combined with witness reports describing the same physical characteristics across all incidents, began to accumulate in large quantities. Because of this, everyone was working around the clock at the city police station. The atmosphere was filled with concern. No one understood what was happening, and the workload kept piling up. Everyone commented that it made no sense for a guy like that to simply vanish across Korea without anyone seeing him. Investigator Park Tae-han was losing his mind. Every time he attended a meeting about this case, he felt his life expectancy decrease. It seemed as though the police force had already given up on saving its own reputation. If anyone were caught on a bad day, officers would be fired on the spot. Park Tae-han questioned how it was possible to let all those pieces of evidence slip by. They simply had nothing concrete. The witness statements made no sense. The accident and all the chaos on the bus had been completely erased from the security cameras. Yet on the subway, several witnesses claimed that Moji had thrown herself into danger to stop an arsonist. All of it was extremely frustrating for everyone involved. Meanwhile, Kwon Samuel listened to the entire discussion, pretending it had nothing to do with him. The impression was that Moji and the numerator were judging future criminals, something that simply made no sense. The topic had already taken over everywhere, especially the internet. Passengers from the bus and the subway offered differing accounts about Moji. After all, riding alongside a future serial killer was not an everyday occurrence. Rumors also began to circulate that the numerator actually existed and was acting like the Crow, the famous comic book character. Conspiracy theories grew exponentially. Some people believed the numerator was a sort of savior. One user posted an account saying he had a relative whose eldest son lived as a parasite past the age of 30. The family was always worried about him, but he had recently been killed by the numerator. When they went to clean his room, they found a diary stating that he was planning to kill his own family to collect the insurance money. Another widely discussed case was that of a woman saved from her toxic ex-boyfriend, who intended to set her house on fire. The man also ended up being killed by the numerator. Naturally, Kwon Samuel followed all of this closely, especially because it was the commander himself who had sent him the link regarding the case of the future maniac killed by the numerator. All of it was still treated as conspiracy theories, but a select few knew the truth. They said the numerator had already eliminated many terrible people. Even so, no one could simply glorify a serial killer. Some people were nearly convinced he was doing the right thing, while others were nowhere close to believing it. On television, some victims expressed deep gratitude toward the numerator. People who survived thanks to his actions publicly thanked the serial killer. After the video of Moji spread even further, many people on the internet came to believe that the numerator was hunting her down to kill her. That theory made sense to many, since she could become a killer in the future. Moji herself read all those comments and realized she no longer cared about the stares or other people's opinions. Now she only wanted to understand herself. At that moment, they also commented that everything was too quiet. The number of murders had dropped significantly over the past few days. It was then, on the rooftop of a building, that the numerator asked if Moji had observed everything carefully. She replied that she had. There were 4 people on the 14th floor, 3 on the 15th, and 2 who had gone up to the 20th floor. The numerator then said it was time to begin. All of this happened 23 days after their meeting with investigator Kwon Samuel. In this next murder location, a person was being tortured. One of their fingers was ripped off with a pipe wrench. The man who seemed to be the leader commented that those people were very stubborn. That was already the 3rd one they had to torture, and also the 3rd one who only opened their mouth after having their fingers broken. Even so, the victim insisted that he had already told the boss he wasn't the one who leaked the ledger. Still, he received another strike from the pipe wrench. The young master of the company replied that if it weren't for him along with that other bitch, no one would have discovered what was being spread. He also complained that his father nagged him, trying to cover up that whole story. Afterwards, he left the room and ordered one of his subordinates to clean up all the mess, doing a neat job without leaving any traces. However, before everyone could fully leave the room, one of the subordinates was pulled back into the shadows. Meanwhile, the numerator was doing what he did best. At the same time, Moji had already broken into the security room and was observing everyone's life expectancy through the cameras. She noticed that Da-um only had 5 minutes and 20 seconds left. Shortly before that, Daeum had a face-to-face conversation with Detective Kwon Samuel. He admitted he had made a mistake. He couldn't make his rule perfect, and confessed that he wanted to face Soa one more time. His personal feelings ended up interfering. Even so, he explained that if someone needed to die to prevent a future murderer from becoming a major villain, he still didn't believe the rule was wrong. The real problem was that he himself was imperfect. Kwon Samuel asked why he was helping now. Daeum replied that he wanted to find out, with his own eyes, which of the 2 paths was the correct one. At that moment, he was fulfilling one of the detective's missions, and would do whatever he asked in exchange for the information. In the end, it would be up to Kwon Samuel to decide whether the numerator would live or die. That way, he would be able to prove which rule was right. Meanwhile, the numerator advanced through the hallways, easily eliminating subordinates using his curved knife. Even the young master's massive bodyguard was having trouble facing him. At the same time, Moji was rescuing the hostages. She knocked them unconscious with a chemical to bring them safely out of the building. When the son of the company's director arrived at his own office, he found a surprise. He was surrounded, with the sergeant behind him and Kwon Samuel sitting calmly at his desk. The detective commented that they really had been very busy getting involved in all kinds of things. He said it was no wonder their brains had rotted, and ordered the young master to sit down. The sergeant pushed his chair up to the desk. Kwon Samuel explained that he had already checked all the basic evidence. Now he just wanted to ask a few questions and advised the young man not to lie to avoid trouble. After eliminating almost everyone in the hallway, the numerator was holding the massive bodyguard by the neck. Above his head appeared the number 12. Still, he asked Moji if nothing had happened yet. She replied that she wanted to test a bit more. She was monitoring the life expectancy of the woman who had been taken hostage, but she hadn't been able to alter either of the 2 numbers. That method had also failed. The numerator then ordered everyone to be taken out of the building. Meanwhile, he would deal with the predestined murderers. Upon hearing this over the earpiece, Kwon Samuel asked who he was talking about, and reminded him that he couldn't kill anyone else. The numerator replied that he had already said several times he didn't intend to break the deal. Kwon Samuel accepted the answer, but commented that since the young master didn't know anything, maybe he could serve as bait. In the end, the numerator asked Moji to stand up and not be disappointed. He said that neither the rule nor Soa would solve that in 1 or 2 attempts. They needed to think long term. She promised she would stop him. Shortly after, she agreed that there really was no reason to rush. They were gathering valuable information, especially because she had been recording all the numbers from every angle since the day she met the numerator. On that day, December 28, 2026, Moji organized and reviewed everything she had discovered up to that point. She began by analyzing what was considered murder. Killing someone with a knife or using poison was obviously intentional murder, and counted toward the total the numerator saw. Unintentional accidents that resulted in manslaughter were also counted. But she began asking other questions. What about suicide? What about indirect homicide? If the one who plans it and the one who executes it are different people, which number increases? She remembered a conversation she had with the numerator on December 7th, 21 days earlier. At the time, he told her not to overthink it. He explained that only physically killing someone counted as murder. Hitman contracts and indirect homicides were not included in the count. Even so, Moji continued organizing the criteria. She concluded that fate had no interest whatsoever in human will or emotions. It was simply relentless. It didn't care about resentment, malice, or intent. It merely recorded the fact of someone killing another person. In her view, it was like a massive strip of film. The trajectory of all actions was already determined, and fate simply counted and displayed the results in a completely mechanical way. When she talked about this with Kwon Samuel on the 14th, 17th, the detective commented that it was a bit frustrating. He said he accepted that the ability worked that way, but asked if that meant the person also needed to act like a machine to apply fate. To him, the numerator should use that power as a tool to catch criminals. He also pointed out that even under the law, intent and negligence are treated completely differently. After that conversation, Moji realized that Kwon Samuel had a broader perspective than the numerator. Still, she didn't fully trust him. After all, he resorted to whatever methods were necessary, using threats, flattery, and lies when needed. That made him a somewhat unsettling person. Even so, she asked why he had called her for that conversation. The detective playfully replied that it was funny hearing that from someone who was so excited to order from the menu. Maji then ordered an extremely sweet chocolate-filled frappuccino, accompanied by a cake. It was at that moment that Kwon Samuel handed over some evidence. It was a collection of police records regarding the murder cases involving Mo Hyun-chul. He explained that it was a small reward for the work they were doing together. Even with only 1 week of partnership, they had already achieved good results. However, if they wanted to discover more information about the orphanage, they would need to work even harder. The detective also commented that he found it curious how both had deduced each other's ability during their previous meeting. Then, he asked how much time he had left to live. After all, she had helped him escape the police operation and could simply answer. Moji asked if he really felt comfortable knowing when he was going to die. Kwon Samuel replied that it didn't make a difference, since he would keep switching between ability users. That information wasn't very important to him. Moji knew he was right. Unlike ordinary people, ability users could resist and even change their own fate. On December 17th, 11 days earlier, at the numerator's hideout, Moji showed that she had organized all the numbers seen by each person. The top number represented the observer, while the left number represented the person being observed. Only the numbers seen by Kwon Samuel remained blank, since she didn't know them yet. After analyzing that data, the numerator merely commented that she drew very poorly. She replied that, in fact, he was the one who drew way too well. Finally, the numerator explained that his kill count was a bit different from what she expected. The correct number was 3,684, not 3,701. According to him, that wasn't a big problem, as the value fluctuated between 10 and 20 whenever he performed a self-analysis, which created a small margin of error. Moji replied that in her case, the number was always the same, 30 years and 9 months. The numerator explained that the kill count depended on many factors, whereas life expectancy would probably only change if she suffered a serious injury. He then asked if his life expectancy was 9 years and 11 months. Upon finding out it was, he commented that it was longer than he expected. Then Moji pulled out a loaded gun and pointed it at his head, saying she really intended to shoot. Even so, the numerator's life expectancy didn't decrease. She concluded that even if she pulled the trigger at that instant, fate would interfere somehow. Perhaps she would miss the shot, or the gun would malfunction. Right after, she told the numerator to activate his self-analysis and asked what his kill count was. At that moment, the number changed to 0, and his life expectancy also decreased. With that, Moji realized that among ability users, numbers could influence one another while doing self-analyses. Furthermore, they could confirm these changes in real time. However, she began to wonder why this didn't happen with ordinary people. Even when the numerator tried to kill a predestined murderer, his kill count didn't immediately drop to 0. Future actions simply weren't reflected instantly. She also remembered that she continued using her self-analysis after saving the subway passengers. Unlike her own life expectancy, which varied greatly depending on the situation, the passenger's life expectancy remained exactly the same. Only after the time reached 0 minutes and 0 seconds without anyone dying did everyone receive a new life expectancy. The numerator asked where she was going with all that analysis. Moji jokingly replied that she had thought about it so much that smoke felt like it was coming out of her head. In reality, she hadn't reached any conclusion yet. She was just gathering facts. Even so, she had already noticed an important difference. Ability users had a flexible fate, while ordinary people had a rigid fate and couldn't escape their own numbers. If they discovered the origin of this difference, perhaps they could find a way to overcome the fate of ordinary people. Later, while Moji slept after reviewing all that information, the numerator sat down beside her. At that moment, the phone received a call from Detective Kwon Samuel. The two met on the rooftop of a building, and Kwon Samuel revealed a very important piece of information. The pale girl, So-ah, was active again. When the detective informed him that she had fallen into the trap, the numerator asked if he was sure she was actually inside. Noticing his nervousness, Kwon Samuel asked if he felt empty because he had found So-ah faster than expected. He said that should be considered a success. Even so, he commented that something was off. If it really was So-ah herself, she seemed to be a bit different from the person the numerator had described. Someone so obsessed with playing the hero would hardly be helping drug dealers and addicts keep their business running. Then the detective told him about a case that happened about 3 months earlier. The body of a young woman in her 20s had been found in a hotel bathtub. A high concentration of ketamine was detected in her blood. Furthermore, there was a witness statement claiming to have seen a male companion, although he hadn't been captured on camera. There were several other suspicious elements. Shortly before dying, the victim had visited an exclusive private members club called Babel, which was suspected of illegally distributing drugs. Even so, for unknown reasons, no significant punishment was applied to the club, and the case ended up closed as a simple accidental overdose. Inside Babel, the janitor didn't just clean bathrooms, he also collected all traces of drugs left behind by customers. Without complaining or reporting anyone, he just bagged everything up to get paid. However, the moment he left the trash bags in the dumpster, Kwon Samuel appeared and called the young man by his name. It was Hyun-Hoo, 20 years old. The detective warned that he didn't want to waste time. He said that unless Hyun-Hoo wanted to go to the police station and take responsibility for everything in that bag, he had better explain exactly what was going on. Hyun-Hoo then asked what kind of favor he wanted. At the same time, the second son of the CEO of a construction company was caught at a nightclub, accompanied by several women. Shortly after, police surrounded the building in a massive operation. Seeing that, the numerator asked what Kwon Samuel was doing. To him, the detective was breaking the promise they had made. Kwon Samuel replied that, quite the contrary, he was helping to capture Soa in the best possible way. The numerator stated that it would fail. He said it would be impossible to capture her with such a tight perimeter. The detective replied that he had heard that several times, that she could calculate all kinds of numbers instantly, and mastered her ability to an absurd degree. Still, he explained that the situation wasn't a contest to see who was stronger or smarter. According to him, even Soa herself would admit that the trap had been very well planned. Next, Kwon Samuel warned that he would also join the breach team. The numerator told him to stop, but the detective kept walking and merely replied to wait patiently until it was all over, because he was sure the plan would work. While going down the stairs, Kwon Samuel thought that the numerator wasn't the only one with unfinished business with Soa. He needed to uncover the whole truth. He wanted to know who she really was, what exactly happened at that orphanage, and what had happened to the hated Mo Hyun-chul. Before anyone else, he needed to confirm everything with his own eyes. Otherwise, he would never be able to face his senior again. Meanwhile, the police team finally arrived at the scene, and the drug dealer's subordinates began to panic, asking what was happening and why the police had showed up there. So asked where their family members were and said they could gather them right now. To her, something had been wrong from the start. The same situation had already happened twice before with other clients, and in all of them, the criminals never killed the VIP directly. They only eliminated one or two key bodyguards acting on the front line. They probably did that to lure superiors, or even Soa herself, out into the open. If they had killed everyone, the trail would have gone cold, and they would disappear without a trace. So, they caused just enough chaos to keep her on the distribution line. Soa only wanted to understand one thing: how they had managed to mobilize the police. The vice president should have covered up any case that surfaced, so she concluded that the police must have received a very specific warrant, likely related to suspected use of firearms and illegal equipment. Perhaps someone like the numerator had provoked that entire operation. Meanwhile, the special forces team entered the building alongside Sergeant Jusol. All escape routes were being blocked by helicopters and police cruisers. The officers advanced cautiously, believing the suspects had nowhere left to run. One of them was found on the stairwell, but to the officers, he looked like just an ordinary suspect. They didn't know that. In reality, he was a drug dealer trying to escape the operation. In truth, everyone was fleeing the police because the operation had been set up under the pretext of investigating a murder committed by the numerator. However, Park Tae-han suspected that it was merely a cover for another objective. Later, Soa began counting how many family members were gathered, who were actually subordinates of that trafficking network. She realized there were only 12 people, and concluded that one was still missing. Shortly after, the last subordinate came running, and suggested that if the police really believed it was a case involving the numerator, they should just go down and pretend to be victims. Soa replied that this was precisely the enemy's goal. They wanted to drag them into police custody, as witnesses at all costs. Once detained and thoroughly investigated, it would be impossible to escape drug trafficking charges. On the other hand, if they tried to flee or attacked the officers, they would become criminals in the eyes of the law. It was a double-edged trap. Meanwhile, Kwon Samuel climbed the stairs with gun in hand. He didn't want his fellow officers to be hurt by Soa. Furthermore, he intended to frame her as the numerator, making everyone believe she was the serial killer. That way, he would direct the entire investigation toward her while chasing the real mastermind alongside the real numerator. But Soa had also already decided to act. She understood that all of this was a big test. The moment the last subordinate arrived, everyone was finally gathered. Without hesitation, she began killing them one by one. What she would do from then on was obvious to her. A hero had to eliminate the villains. She fired at everyone, purging every last one of them. The officers rushed up in desperation, but Soa calculated everything perfectly. She predicted the distance each bullet would travel, its speed, and even the reaction time of every person present. With precise shots, she killed all her targets. Right after, she dropped her weapon and surrendered to the police. Detective Park Tae-han asked who she really was, and So-ah replied that she was the numerator everyone was looking for. The answer caught Kwon Samuel completely by surprise. That wasn't part of the plan. Even so, he remained calm and concluded that if she was pretending to be the numerator of her own free will, she probably wanted to draw all the police's attention. That wouldn't benefit her or her superiors, so there was definitely a plan behind it. When the task force entered the floor, they found a true massacre. There were several people dead from gunshot wounds, all on the 14th floor of the building. While agents confirmed the number of victims, So-ah asked if the team coming up the left stairwell had arrived yet. She commented that she would need to hurry if she still wanted to escape. The officers kept reporting that there were many bodies, at least 10. Park Tae-han asked if she was the one who had done all that. So-ah replied yes, and affirmed that they all deserved to die. She explained that they disguised themselves as a private security firm, but in reality, they were henchmen hired by the company's second son. If she hadn't stopped them from silencing the whistleblower, all suspicions involving drug distribution and money laundering at Club Babel would have been buried. Kwon Samuel asked how she knew all that and why she was revealing that information. Park Tae-han, however, stated that she was also just a fake numerator. According to him, her posture, behavior, and personality didn't match the real numerator at all, and they would never be fooled like that. So-ah replied that it was natural to seem different because the numerator wasn't a single person. In reality, it was a group. Park Tae-han was left completely in disbelief, while Kwon Samuel called it a blatant lie. So-ah said she didn't have time to give further explanations and preferred not to reveal any more details. Immediately after, she dodged all gunfire and ran up the stairs. However, when she reached the rooftop, she realized the location was also surrounded by a helicopter. Even so, she kept calculating the best way to escape. She thought running between floors would be fun, but she knew that the more reinforcements arrived, the harder it would be to escape. She just didn't expect a rope to be thrown around her neck. At the last moment, she managed to wrap the cord of Kwon Samuel's yo-yo around her arm and retaliated with a few shots. Still, she ended up disarmed. At that moment, So-ah noticed a curious detail. The tilt of Kwon Samuel's eyes was directed upward. Even knowing in advance where she would move and where she would end up, he didn't share that information with the other detectives. It was then that she concluded he was also an ability user. Kwon Samuel believed he had hidden it very well, but So-ah was too observant. She commented that now everything made sense. The numerator's accomplice inside the police force was him. Trying to play it off, Kwon Samuel replied that he always had a slight squint and that people often said his eyes never focused properly. But So-ah didn't waste time with that excuse. She stated that there must already be several falsified reports involving the numerator, and that it would be impossible to mobilize so many officers without using real information provided by him. Kwon Samuel replied that she should be grateful for that, because now everything would be easier. Exactly as he desired, she had assumed the identity of the numerator, and they could continue that conversation at the station. So-ah, however, replied that she was making an effort to understand him. She said he seemed extremely curious to find out what was really going on in her head. Even being a lie detector, he surely had realized she was different. That girl was strange, fanatical, and completely obsessed with the number of people she could save. Furthermore, she was directly involved with drug dealers and users. Her true behavior didn't match the image he had of the numerator at all. Every gesture, every tone of voice, and every expression seemed carefully planned. Suddenly, a fog swept through the entire environment. The shot that seemed to have missed its target had actually struck the refrigeration and hot water pipes, creating a thick fog that prevented Kwon Samuel from seeing her. Before disappearing, So-ah said that everything happening from the next day onward was an idea she had thanks to the trap he had prepared. She then asked him to look forward to it, because, according to her, it would be a lot of fun. When Kwon Samuel activated the ventilation system to clear the fog, So-ah had already vanished. That's when a motorcycle sped past all the police cars and crashed through the building's glass. It was the numerator, heading directly for the roof. He passed the officers while still in the lobby, and noticed they all had the number 0 above their heads. As expected, it was 10 against 1. With the elevators disabled, he decided to ride his motorcycle up the stairwell. Upon reaching the elevator lobby, he left the bike behind, opened the electrical room door, and caused a short circuit using the emergency battery. Then, he released the locks on the freight maintenance elevator and rode it straight to the rooftop, intending to find So-ah. Up top, the police helicopter confirmed the target's position, moving behind an emergency exit. So-ah then realized that didn't look like a full special forces team. Everything indicated it was just a distraction to grab her attention. However, all the fog Kwon Samuel had dispersed by turning on the ventilation system ended up being blown outside all at once, completely covering the helicopter's view. Realizing this, Kwon Samuel admitted she had been very clever. She had manipulated him into using the ventilation system specifically specifically to create that smokescreen. So then took her gun and aimed at the helicopter, acknowledging it wouldn't be an easy target. She took a deep breath and prepared to shoot, but was interrupted by Da-um's arrival. Finally, the two met face to face. So Ah's first reaction was to hug him tightly. Da-um was completely in shock. She commented that he had grown so much, remembering that he used to be so small. Then she joked that, on the other hand, it seemed she had stopped growing while still a child, because she remained the exact same size. The officers noticed there was a second person on the roof, but the smoke made it hard to see who it was. So commented that she really had thought the numerator seen in the news might be Da-um. Knife wounds weren't common, and when numbers were involved, he was the only person who came to her mind. Even so, she never imagined that the Da-um, who was once so pathetic and incapable of doing anything, was now hunting villains, and even secretly cooperating with the police. She confessed she only hoped for a chance to meet him that day, and said she was very happy to finally succeed. Dan, still not understanding anything, simply asked why she was there. He said he always believed he would be rejected, despised, and pushed into a corner where no one would see him. He thought that was the only way to survive in that world, using everything he had learned. It was precisely for that reason that Soa killed all those people. In the end, she had become the exact type of villain she claimed to hate, and swore to fight. Without saying another word, she shot a camera that was still recording everything, and explained that she had known this for a long time. Whenever she watched news about Da-um, she had that feeling. She admitted she still didn't truly understand what it meant to be a hero, but believed that was the perfect moment to explain her decision. She shared that the instant she recognized the trap set by Da-um and Detective Quan Samuel, she saw an opportunity. The opportunity to become a numerator. From that moment on, the two could work together. After all, the hero called Numerator was someone who saved people by eliminating future murderers. Upon hearing this, Da-um thanked her for not changing who she was. He said that prevented him from regretting his decision to kill her. 6 months earlier, So-ah had met with the man who commanded that whole scheme to discuss a possible partnership. She already understood the scale of the business. The man was Kwok Chul-ho, vice president of the UJ Group and funder of the ketamine distribution network that had been causing such a stir. During the meeting, So-ah asked him to convince her why she should help him with a drug distribution scheme. Only on December 8th would the numerator discover more details about that deal. One of the subordinates commented that the woman was completely crazy, so only accepted working for people she considered good. Before closing any contract, she asked questions to find out how bad the person she was supposed to kill was, or how important the person she needed to protect was. Anyone who failed her interview was immediately rejected. It took just one person speaking recklessly to be labeled a villain and lose any chance of getting her help. On the day of that interview, Kwok Chul-ho commented that meeting her in person was even more interesting. He said he didn't understand why she insisted on conducting that type of evaluation. Bluntly, So-ah asked why she should participate in a scheme that distributed drugs to innocent citizens. Kwok Chul-ho replied that it wasn't a simple business to get rich. According to him, the profit wasn't even that big. His clients were merely influential people from all sectors: celebrities, idols, promising youths, elite legal professionals, children of major executives, and even relatives of politicians. None of them had any idea that he controlled the entire operation. The distribution channels were different, passing through clubs, private bars, and private clinics. However, every purchase made, every flow of illicit money, and every crime committed turned into weaknesses that ultimately returned to his hands. He shared that since his miserable childhood, he always wondered why people with so much power and authority refused to use that influence to do good. That was why he decided to control those exact people. Keeping the elite on his leash, he believed he could force them to act in favor of true justice, rather than just pursuing their own interests. After finishing his explanation, he asked if, according to her criteria, he could be considered a good person. Soa began to applaud and said he was wonderful. She commented that maybe she couldn't see everyone's future, but she clearly saw how many lives he would save. Above Kwok Chul-ho's head, she saw the number 19,462. To her, anyone with a righteous heart was a true hero. That was why she stated she believed in him, and declared that he had passed the interview. Later, in his office, Kwok Chul-ho admitted to himself that it was complete nonsense. The whole story he told was nothing more than a fragile, meaningless lie. Perhaps So-ah had recognized the lie from the start, and simply didn't care. As long as someone appeared righteous enough in her eyes, that was sufficient. Back on December 29th, in the present, Da-um tried to attack So-ah, using his curved knife. However, she dodged all the strikes with ease. Next, she fired at his face, but the shot was just a feint. If she had wanted to, she could have killed him right then and there. Realizing this, Da-um remembered the conversation he had had with Moji. She asked if, in the end, he just wanted revenge against her, but Da-um replied that it wasn't about revenge, but duty. He was only trying to kill her because her number was too high. At that moment, it was at 47. At least that's what he believed. He thought his actions weren't motivated by revenge. So Ah merely commented that the fog would soon clear, and she would lose the helicopter's cover. Suddenly, the trap became much more complicated. She thought that maybe she should just kill Dae-eum right there. But at that instant, Detective Quan Samuel appeared behind the numerator and knocked him unconscious with a taser. Then, he called the boy crazy for charging right into the middle of the police cordon. Powerless, palace. Dae-eum was carried back inside the building, while Kwon Samuel merely told him to focus on not getting caught until everyone pulled back. So-ae watched it all smiling, but the numerator still wanted to kill her. He tumbled down the stairwell while officers reached the roof. However, when the fog finally cleared, So-ae had already vanished. The helicopter crew informed them that the thermal imaging system was down, so they had to look for suspects with the naked eye. The information was that they had gone down to a lower floor within the perimeter. It was then that Kwon Samuel remembered what the numerator had said earlier. According to him, they would fail because So-ae calculated everything. The real issue was precisely the reduced perimeter the killer had mentioned. Meanwhile, So-ae herself was already inside the police helicopter. She commented that it was funny seeing the detective go through so much trouble because of Da-eum, and that it would be a waste to kill him. At that moment, a cop bought off by Vice President Kwak Chul-ho handed her the phone. On the other end of the call, Kwak Chul-ho asked if she hadn't arrived too late for the party, but said that luckily he managed to place his men at the scene in advance. So-ae replied that she always knew how to use her connections. Thanks to that, she destroyed the helicopter camera transmitting images to headquarters and shifted police attention to the building's ground floor. Kwak Chul-ho commented that from then on, it shouldn't be too hard to continue the plan, but wanted to understand what she was thinking when creating all that chaos. She impersonated the numerator, drew police and public attention, and by mentioning the boy from Babel, linked everything to the hotel incident. Furthermore, no matter how weak the subcontractors were, she killed all his men. In his eyes, she no longer looked like a hero, but a psychopath. Even so, So-ae asked him to trust her, reminding him that she had never let him down. She also explained that she hadn't impersonated the numerator because she wanted to. According to her, all that chaos was part of a trap created to frame her. Kwak Chul-ho asked if someone was after her, not the drugs. She responded by asking who he was talking about. Later she commented that the moment she stood face to face with Da-eum, she was sure he would show up. It was just a feeling, but she always believed the boy seen in the news was him. However, Da-eum still didn't understand what it truly meant to be a hero. Therefore, she asked Kwak Chul-ho to leave that matter in her hands. She guaranteed it wouldn't disrupt business anymore, and that she only needed 1 month. Kwak Chul-ho agreed, saying that in the end, she always did things her own way. As long as she handled everything cleanly, there would be no problem. So-ae then revealed she already had an idea, and asked if, among his employees, there was someone good at video editing. She flew off in the helicopter thinking that Da-eum just needed to wait a little longer. From 1 to 10, she would produce everything for him, saving people, killing murderers, and creating a hero named Numerator. Later, the case was officially recorded as 14 deaths from gunshot wounds, 1 death from blood loss caused by knife wounds, and 1 additional victim who had been removed before the police raid and remained unconscious. In total, there were 16 victims. Even so, that day the police lost their 2 main suspects, the woman who claimed to be the numerator and an unauthorized intruder suspected of being her accomplice. The operation ended as a massive failure for the police. The police director was extremely dissatisfied with Park Tae-han and Kwon Samuel. Still, Kwon Samuel remained focused solely on analyzing the officer who was in the helicopter, as he heavily suspected him. Meanwhile, Moji still remained hidden in the numerator's hideout, unaware of what had happened to the others. When she woke up at dawn, she only saw Da-eum quickly leaving the place. He left without saying a single word. Da-eum himself was hiding in an alley after everything that happened, completely devoid of strength to stand up. Fragments of that morning's massive operation were recorded by dashcams in taxis and ambulances. Shortly before the images began spreading across social media, and the news broke about the police's failure to arrest the violent criminal, a live stream started. The police commissioner was notified immediately. The sergeant brought the information to Kwon Samuel, while Moji watched the numerator's first internet broadcast on her phone. A distorted voice began by saying they weren't the first to invent the name numerator. The police had never used that name in any official press conference. Even so, that was exactly the group everyone thought of upon hearing that word, the serial killers who left numbers marked on bodies. Watching the stream, Kwon Samuel noticed the voice was completely distorted, and that the live broadcast was extremely simple, showing only a logo on the screen. Right away, he concluded that it was part of yet another plan by So-ae. The voice continued, saying that those words alone wouldn't convince anyone, since several copycats had emulated the killer group over time. Therefore, on that day, they would reveal for the first time the true meaning of the numbers left on the victims. At that moment, So-ae partially appeared on the stream. She was hooded, and in the background, there was a person tied up, beaten, and trapped inside a bathtub. So-ae explained that the numbers represented a person's future kill count. In other words, they were able to see who was destined to become a murderer. Watching the stream, the commissioner commented that the man shown was the victim from the previous day's incident. There was a team at the hospital with him, but even so, they managed to take him. Many people began to believe it was real because it didn't look like makeup or artificial intelligence. Soa continued, saying that no one needed to understand exactly how it was possible to see the future. She also didn't care if people treated it as nonsense, because they would prove everything through their own actions, as they always had. In fact, many people had already roughly figured out the meaning of the numbers and the rule they used to select their targets. Meanwhile, Moji ran out, not understanding what was going on. The broadcast continued explaining that initially, they had no intention of revealing themselves that way. They believed that without aggressively imposing their beliefs, the message would eventually spread naturally one day. However, seeing all the chaos at the Haegwon construction site distorted and reduced to a simple joint counter-terrorism exercise, Soa realized that if they intended to face villains whose influence reached the very backbone of the country's power, they needed to capture the citizens' attention. As the police department panicked trying to take down the stream, Soa revealed that the man tied up in the tub was the head of the business planning management office at Haegwon Construction. According to the company president's son, he was also the true party responsible for the hotel death incident around September. She explained that the victim was a university student in her early 20s, living the prime of her life, who died suddenly inside a hotel bathtub, intoxicated by ketamine. In practice, she was forced into a state of complete intoxication, even with witness testimony stating the young woman was practically dragged to the hotel by a male companion. Prosecutors closed the case as if nothing had happened, classifying it all as an accidental death. Soa stated that the man went even further, attempting to kill internal whistleblowers who sought to reveal the truth using criminal organizations. According to her, that was the true story behind the turmoil at the construction company. The police only tried to arrest the numerator, and she held no grudge over that. After all, it was their duty. However, since the group had confirmed in advance that the man's kill count was very high and eliminated him before he could act again, they ended up saving honest, brave whistleblowers. At that moment, police finally managed to trace the broadcast's IP address and discovered where Soa was streaming from. A large convoy of police cruisers was mobilized immediately. During the stream, Soa declared that all people should be treated equally, without distinction. Then she posed a question to the public. She questioned whether the rights of criminals and murderers should really be more important than the lives of innocent families. She also criticized the fact that even knowing perfectly well what a criminal would do in the future, the police stood idly by until someone actually died. Meanwhile, the numerator himself, watched the broadcast. Soa shared that her childhood had been destroyed by cruel criminals who exploited unregistered children who had no one to protect them. In the end, she said she lost all the friends who lived in that place. Upon hearing that, the numerator burst out laughing. To him, that was revolting because, in his eyes, Soa was the very person who had killed all those children. Even so, Soa kept saying that was a life she had lost and would never get back. No matter the severity of the punishment applied to the perpetrator, even if he were executed, the scars left behind would never fade. The numerator couldn't believe those words were coming right out of her mouth. In his mind, Soa was insulting the entire history of those children. His history. Watching the stream, Kwon Samuel realized her true objective. Soa was leveraging all the incidents involving the numerator to reinforce the idea that predestined murderers were merely villains. She conveniently omitted everything the public would hardly accept. That wasn't reality. It was just a carefully constructed narrative. Shortly after, police raided the stream's address. However, when they entered the location, they found only the victim, already drugged and drowned. Soa had vanished. Only the equipment used for the live broadcast remained. She managed to escape in disguise, and even walked right past Moji, who didn't even realize who she really was. While escaping, Soa wished Dae were watching it all. She was deeply disappointed in how he used his power. In her view, he had the perfect material in hand, the predestined murderers, but only knew one single way to use that ability. Now he was finally seeing how it ought to be done. That was how, according to her, one saved the world using that power. Later, Detective Kwon Samuel interrogated Detective Moon, the cop who had betrayed the department to work alongside Kwak Chul-ho and Soa. Kwon Samuel demanded that he stop lying. Cornered, Moon asked how he had figured it all out. Kwon Samuel replied that it was obvious. The albino girl had vanished under circumstances impossible to hide for long, even for someone who spent the whole time on the roof. Moon tried to justify himself, saying he was being blackmailed, but Kwon Samuel stated that was a lie. According to him, Moon was a habitual offender who had been accepting bribes of all kinds for a long time. Only God knew how much money he had already pocketed. He also warned that if the backers found out Moon had been exposed, they would likely make it look like he took his own life to silence him. Even so, Kwon Samuel said he didn't want to see a former colleague end up that way, and directly asked who the real backer was. Right after the end of the numerator's first live broadcast, the platform suspended the channel. Initially, most viewers couldn't quite understand the sudden appearance of that group of killers, and many believed it was just another numerator copycat. Even so, people began discussing the various recent cases where potential criminals had been killed. Thanks to the whistleblowers the numerator saved, the identities of the victims, their personalities, and all the crimes they had committed came to light. The truth finally began to surface, albeit too late. Interviews with the family families involved in those cases were also released. And gradually, public opinion regarding the numerator began shifting in a more positive direction. So I promised that wasn't the end. The real villain, the mastermind who sowed the seeds of evil, was someone else. He was the one who truly needed to be judged. Kwon Samuel already knew that this mastermind was undoubtedly the same backer controlling the albino girl. So, he wondered why on earth they would tolerate an execution show like that, when it only disrupted their own business. After thinking it over, he explained to the numerator that the answer was simple. Both the Haegwon boy who died this time and the other distributors were being eliminated because they had leaked information. They were just getting rid of obstacles in their path. The pale girl claimed she would eliminate everyone, but that couldn't be true. While keeping everyone's attention away from the real mastermind, she would finish off all the distributors, and then the funder would open a completely new route for her. All of this was happening on December 31st, 2 days after the first broadcast. Kwon Samuel commented that even so, the numerator had gone ahead and killed the criminals on the street. He reminded that he had promised not to break the deal. Replied that he really had said that, but warned that that plan would never catch So-a. Kwon Samuel admitted he was right. If it weren't for that informant, maybe things would have been different. Still, stated that the detective had failed, and asked if that was really the ideal image of a righteous hero catching villains, exactly as he had always dreamed. Kwon Samuel asked if he really seemed like a psychopath like her. He said he could understand why hated that type of hero, obsessed with dispensing immediate justice. Criteria could seem vague, innocent people could end up getting hurt, and that was true. Even so, he believed he needed to ensure that didn't happen. According to him, people only thought about the damage caused when someone failed, rather than reflecting on whether the act itself was right or wrong. Thanks to his ability, he could see that sort of thing. He wasn't like who treated anyone with a high lie count as a villain. So Kwon Samuel asked if thought he was just like the pale girl, choosing whom to kill without thinking, merely following whatever emotion struck at the moment. At least he acted according to common sense and existing standards. Even if they weren't perfect, they were still 100 times better than simply throwing away all thought or hesitation to rely solely on numbers. He told to think carefully about it. Even eliminating a handful, maybe a dozen predestined murderers wouldn't change things. He wouldn't change the world through murder. However, asked another question. If villains were eliminated, would they really decrease? If they were killed or judged, would villains disappear forever? At that moment, Moji heard the bell signaling the new year. She approached her companions, saying she was now 19 years old. Then, she asked what Kwon Samuel meant by common sense standards. After all, many people who ended up becoming villains due to those universal standards had died at the hands of people who were just as bad as them, or even worse. Kwon Samuel replied to the numerator that he would let slide whoever killed those bullies however he wanted, but he made sure to remind him of one thing. The role of driving all of this forward was still his. Merely replied that if that was the case, then the detective would have to prove he was right. The detective explained that on his side, he would use the new route to discover who the real mastermind behind everything was. He had already found a very important informant. Meanwhile, I would likely begin tracking down and eliminating the distributors who had been exposed, using all of them as material for the numerator's little heroic act. Since Babel had already been cut off from the 3 places identified so far, only 2 remained. I would show up at one of them very soon, and Kwon Samuel would direct the police investigation to the same location. Meanwhile, and Moji would be responsible for dealing with a few thugs hired by HQ. Neither of them said anything. As he walked away, Kwon Samuel kept thinking about the line spoken by Maybe eliminating villains really didn't make them decrease. That thought made him remember his senior. It was New Year's, and he had already turned 19. But remembering that only made him even more annoyed. He swore he would catch the mafia responsible for all of it. As fireworks lit up the sky, he couldn't help but wonder why everything had to happen that way all over again. 15 years earlier, numbers began appearing in Kwon Samuel's vision. He didn't remember the exact moment it happened, nor when he realized the true meaning of that ability. It was something he simply came to understand over time. Back then, it was just him and his mother, separated from his father for some reason he didn't know. Even without knowing the reason, his ability showed that his mother lied to him. He always ended up worse off, but he also always found out he was right because he could detect every single lie. Over time, Kwon Samuel came to the conclusion that all adults were blatant liars. In one of those situations, he ended up at the police station after a shopkeeper accused him of stealing a product. She insisted he was the one who hid the cigarettes, grabbed a handful of them and ran out of the store. She kept pointing at the security camera footage as proof. Even so, Kwon Samuel replied that it wasn't him in the recordings. He explained that his clothes were probably similar to the real culprits. The shopkeeper kept saying he was very shameless. The officer handling the case commented that the boy hadn't provided his parents' contact info and still insisted on denying the footage. He said that at his age, it was normal to make mistakes and that he just needed to tell the truth because he would help him. But at that instant, Kwon Samuel noticed the officer's lie count decreasing. Still, he had over 31,000 lies left to tell throughout his life. That only reinforced what the boy already thought. All adults were the same. They never told the truth, and no one believed him. So, he decided he shouldn't believe anyone either. It was then that another officer showed up and interrupted the situation. He said that was enough. He stated that the boy said it wasn't him and asked if they hadn't checked all the cameras along the escape route yet. Then he commented to the shopkeeper that he understood how frustrating it must be, but guaranteed they would conduct a proper investigation and find the real culprit. Kwon Samuel was surprised and wondered who that man was. More than helping him at the station, the officer even offered him a ride home. Unlike other adults, that man didn't seem to lie all the time. In fact, his number almost never decreased. Along the way, he commented that it was no problem if a kid that age lied. If it made no difference either way, it was much better to simply believe him. Kwon Samuel noticed that man was so genuine that he could speak just like him, but without needing to detect lies. When he finally arrived home late at night, he noticed his daughter was dying of sleepiness. He asked for forgiveness for taking so long, and Jusol merely asked why he had taken so much time. She said he promised he would be back soon, and because of that, she hadn't even eaten dinner. He replied that was nonsense and told them both to get inside. He also invited Kwon Samuel in. Since he was there, he could have dinner with them before leaving. Then he asked if his house was also nearby. Just those words made Kwon Samuel emotional, because he had never heard such genuine words before. The officer grew concerned seeing him cry, but Jusol just told her father to stop, because he never really understood other people's emotions. It was at that moment that Kwon Samuel's stubbornness began to fade, and a new motivation grew inside him. He started visiting their home frequently, and ended up becoming very close to Jusol. The two became great friends, and he even taught her some school subjects, since he was in 12th grade, while she was still in 8th. 3 years passed. After entering high school, having decided to persevere in his studies, Kwon Samuel quickly caught up with the pace. It wasn't that he wasn't smart, he simply had never felt the need to study. Later, while walking with Jusol to reward her for doing her homework, he bought a sweet, but picked the wrong flavor. It was strawberry, the very flavor she hated. Even so, she took the sweet and said it was fine. Sometimes it was good to change things up a bit. Then Jusol asked if he wouldn't tell her father about his ability to detect lies. Kwon Samuel had shared that secret with her because the two were very close. Even so, he explained that he deliberately avoided using that ability when it wasn't necessary. While spending a lot of time at his veteran's house, helping with errands or receiving guidance, every now and then people came knocking on Inspector Ju-Yun's door. Almost all of them arrived with a gift and a smile on their face. Most owed him a favor. They were people cleared of false accusations during investigations, or who received help reintegrating into society after leaving prison. Just as Ju-Yun had saved Kwon Samuel, he also saved many other people. To Kwon Samuel, he was like a radiant star. That was exactly the kind of detective he wanted to become. He didn't want to investigate people's true nature using his ability as a cheat code. He wanted to be a detective who believed in the goodness of people and shone bright like his veteran. Except on that fateful day, everything changed. A man on a motorcycle asked for information. He wanted to know where a building was that had been empty for a long time. Kwon Samuel found the question strange. When the biker took off his helmet, he explained he wasn't looking for the building, but the lot next to it. So Kwon Samuel showed him the way without a second thought. In the present, he still thought about that moment. If he had used his ability back then, maybe everything would have been different. He could have memorized the man's face, his helmet, and every detail of his appearance. Just a little more attention. But he ended up letting that man go. When Kwon Samuel reached legal drinking age, it was Ju-Yun who taught him. On the same occasion, he also congratulated him on getting into the police academy. That had happened 11 years ago. Ju-Yun commented that it was strange to think they were now sharing a drink. Before, he couldn't even scold Kwon Samuel for smoking. Kwon Samuel replied that he had quit a long time ago. Then Ju-Yun said he had become an officer, following in his footsteps. After that, he decided to be candid. He asked if he remembered the time he tried to pop a pimple on Jusol's forehead and got chewed out. He almost got his wrist broken by accident. That girl possessed strength that was completely out of the ordinary, and maybe she should follow a path that made use of it. Next, he said Kwon Samuel's work could also be different. Arresting and locking up criminals had a limit. The true challenge was fixing the root of the problem. Ju-Yun was proud of his own work and his colleagues' work, but he had seen the same story repeat itself many times. People who could have lived a normal life, if someone had guided them in the right direction, ended up crossing a line from which they could never return. If only someone had believed in them, given them a hug, or a small push until they could walk on their own. Instead, society tried to force them back onto the right path until they broke. He made it clear he wasn't telling Kwon Samuel to copy him exactly. He just hoped he would always think about what kind of detective he wanted to be. Then he chuckled and commented that he was being too sentimental. Kwon Samuel replied that he had already understood what he meant. After all, he had been saved by him. Then Ju-Yun said he could now trust him with that task. Suddenly, he appeared completely covered in blood and asked him to take care of his daughter too. Kwon Samuel woke up from that nightmare. That had happened 10 years ago. As soon as he woke, he saw several missed calls and rushed to Jusol's house. At that moment, he could only think that he had been naive and foolish. That was the feeling he had upon arriving and finding the crime scene, seeing his veteran dead. That murder was part of the serial killer case that was terrifying the entire country. While the culprit remained at large, an unprecedented incident occurred. An on-duty detective had been murdered. Following the victim's identification, it was confirmed to be a police inspector. They also verified clarified that he was not part of the task force responsible for investigating that specific serial murder case. On the day of the crime, the killer broke into the inspector's home while he was off duty and killed him inside his own residence. Just as in previous crimes, no known link was found between the victim and the perpetrator. As if able to completely disappear from the investigation grid, everything indicated that the killer selected his victims randomly, without considering any specific target. Investigations pointed to Mo Hyun-chul as the primary suspect in the serial murder case. Not even his family, whom he had supposedly abandoned 2 years prior, knew his whereabouts or motives. The only known information was his basic personal data and some physical traits. He was a giant of a man, nearly 2 meters tall, had a scar on his right cheek, and motorcycle models were found damaged at the crime scene. Kwon Samuel immediately remembered that man. At the time, he had suspected him, but did nothing. If he had at least used his ability, maybe he could have prevented it all. During that period, he took a leave of absence from school and started an investigation on his own, following all kinds of leads. Thanks to his ability, he could distinguish any lie, even as a mere police academy student. Thus, he investigated places where the police themselves hadn't managed to reach, and in the end, he ended up finding an orphanage where Mo Hyun-chul was supposedly seen. It seemed that place still held a strong attachment over him. Kwon Samuel couldn't bear the guilt, and that was why he decided to investigate alone. During this search, he ended up bumping into Hwang Tae-sik in an alley at night, taking him by surprise. He was Inspector Ju-yun's old friend. As soon as he saw him, Hwang Tae-sik recognized Kwon Samuel, the boy who used to live at his friend's house, and asked why he was there instead of at school. Without answering, Kwon Samuel asked if Hwang Tae-sik knew the front door code to Ju-yun's house. He had already heard his statement, and also analyzed every moment the numbers above his head decreased while he spoke. Thus, he discovered that Hwang Tae-sik knew exactly which days the captain was off, the times he stayed home, the location of security cameras, the layout of the neighborhood, and even the moments when the house was most vulnerable to break-ins. Perhaps 2 years earlier it was different, but now that Mo Hyun-chul's face was known, it would be impossible for him to act alone without someone providing that kind of information. Hwang Tae-sik asked what he was talking about and what kind of person he thought he was, but Kwon Samuel already knew it was him, so he simply asked why. What was the motive? After all, he had heard that Captain Ju-yun had helped him a lot while he was in prison. Instead of repaying that kindness, he ended up betraying the person who saved him. Hwang Tae-sik denied everything. He said Kwon Samuel had no idea what he was talking about, that he wasn't an accomplice to the detective's death, and that it was a ridiculous accusation made by a kid against an adult. Except Kwon Samuel knew he was lying, so he asked Ju-sel to take care of him. Back then, he was still naive. The method taught by his veteran wasn't wrong. The problem was that there were people rotten to the core, people for whom that kind of kindness simply didn't work. With his yo-yo in hand, Kwon Samuel asked again why Hwang Tae-sik had done it, and warned that he'd better not lie during the interrogation. After torturing him for quite a while, Kwon Samuel commented that he really was persistent. Even so, lying was useless. Thanks to his ability, he could see exactly what the true intentions hidden behind every word were. In the end, Hwang Tae-sik confessed. He said a man from a private detective agency showed up, offering a good sum of money, so he sold all the information he had. Then he even tried to justify his actions. He said there was no reason to repay kindness with gratitude. People with criminal records could never live a decent life just because they received a little help. In his opinion, Ju-yun was too naive. He had no idea how terrifying people could be. He brought ex-convicts into his own home, and because of that, he was a complete idiot who was practically asking to be killed. Upon hearing that, Kwon Samuel told him to shut his mouth, but as Hwang Tae-sik kept talking, Sergeant Ju-sol crushed his head with a baseball bat. After all that, the two just stopped to eat a sweet. As they did, they cried, unable to contain the pain. Not long after Ju-yun's death, Mo Hyun-chul was arrested. It felt as though everything they had done had been in vain. He simply turned himself in, as if he had already completed his work and didn't care in the slightest about being captured. Kwon Samuel fell into a deep delirium because of all that. Afterward, he asked Ju-sol for forgiveness for dragging her down that path, but she replied that she had made that choice of her own free will. Either way, both of them were already stained, and there was no turning back, so they would move forward, walking a path that only equally stained people could tread. Kwon Samuel continued investigating. Even with Mo Hyun-chul arrested, no one yet knew the true motive behind the murders. However, considering he selected his victims up to a year in advance and spent all that time gathering information, it was impossible to believe it had all been a string of impulsive, random crimes. Therefore, he decided to follow the trails left by him. At first glance, the place looked like just an old, deteriorated orphanage in the middle of the mountains. In reality, though, it operated as a human resource training center, run by a pseudo-religious organization that bred assassins. Mo Hyun-chul worked there as an employee, hiding that fact even from his own family. 2 years prior, a massive fire struck the dormitory wing. They said students and teachers had died in large numbers. Even being such a major disaster, the case was covered up in a strangely quiet manner, as if someone was trying to burn something along with that fire. Hearing all this, Ju-sol asked if Mo Hyun-chul had killed all those residents, and then started the fire to destroy evidence. Kwon Samuel said no. He didn't know what had happened in the fire, but he was certain it wasn't him who killed the students. when, where, who, and how many people Mo Hyun-chul killed. Everything he said in the interrogation was true. That meant he didn't kill anyone other than the victims of the serial murder case. Even so, everyone connected to the orphanage, except for Mo Hyun-chul, was dead. At least that's what the public believed. But Kwon Samuel knew not everyone had died. Thanks to his ability, he couldn't see any numbers in photos of people who were already dead. Yet, when he found the files for Dae-um and Soa, he could see the numbers normally. Throughout his life, Dae-um would tell 45 lies. Soa, on the other hand, would tell over 71,000. Analyzing those files, Kwon Samuel also couldn't understand the meaning of the high probability of manifestation. The two children were treated as special students in the documents. After the incident, whatever happened, Mo Hyun-chul vanished. He even completely stopped visiting the house he supposedly only went to on his daughter's birthday. A year later, he began planning the serial murders while selecting his victims. The following year, he decided to hand himself in. Now, Kwon Samuel wanted to discover what his true objective was and understand what really happened at the orphanage 2 years earlier. But Daum knew exactly what had happened. Mo Hyun-chul was the only employee who survived after trying to stop the slaughter caused by Soa. In the end, he managed to defeat her. On that day, Soa was so weak she couldn't even stand up. She said that as expected, it was impossible to beat Mo Hyun-chul. It was frustrating, but she had given it her all. Mo Hyun-chul replied that her words didn't match the expression on her face. She wasn't afraid to die. On the contrary, she was satisfied with having fought with everything she had, even without any chance of winning, dying as if she were a hero. Even so, Mo Hyun-chul said she wouldn't die that day. He had known everything the whole time. He knew she had planned to attack the only event of the year he left home for, and that she intended to kill all the children. That was because he could also see the numbers above people's heads. The numbers showed that in addition to the children, So-ah would kill another 20 people. In the future, she would become a cruel villain responsible for the deaths of 117 other victims. That was the role she was supposed to play, not that of a hero. It was then that So-ah realized he also possessed the same ability. But the moment Mo Hyun-chul asked one more question, she woke up from that nightmare, tossing away the phone that had set off the alarm. Immediately after, she went out for her dawn patrol. The story returned to the present, on January 4th. After fulfilling her role and killing a few more people during her morning patrol, So-ah was completely convinced she was a hero. In her view, no one was more genuine about enacting justice than she was. Once again, the self-proclaimed numerator published another video. This time, the victims were two motorcyclists who were speeding through the city center around 2 in the morning. In the video, So-ah stated that if left alive, 4 days later they would cause an accident involving multiple vehicles and innocent citizens. The videos were released to the public without any polish, omission, or editing. Seeing that, Kwon Samuel commented that he imagined she would immediately hunt down the next drug distributors. Instead, she was popping up in various places, even in cases unrelated to trafficking. To him, So-ah was clearly trying to draw public attention to her cause. Inside the car, Moji asked where they were going. Kwon Samuel replied that out of the 2 remaining places, that was the location Babel was responsible for before disappearing. It was an exclusive members-only cocktail bar called Underscore. Up to that point, all they knew was that the venue served people from the high ranks of politics and the business world. But thanks to So-ah's actions, they had gained time to plan. Kwon Samuel explained that once he understood the relationships between the people involved, it would be much easier to predict the next steps. The plan was for Moji to infiltrate as a low-level employee, filling as many gaps in the investigation as possible. As long as she used her ability carefully, without overdoing it, she wouldn't be in danger. Besides, she would have someone to help her. Kwon Samuel admitted he knew he was using Moji to get information about Mo Hyun-chul. He acknowledged that probably didn't feel right, but explained that at that moment, the person who knew the most truth about him was So-ah. Even so, he made it clear Moji didn't have to accept the mission if she didn't feel confident. She told him not to try to convince her otherwise. Ever since she gave up on going back and decided to stay by the numerator's side, she had made her choice. Hearing that, Kwon Samuel thought that the people around him were truly strong. It was unlikely anyone would recognize Moji, but as a precaution, he asked her to wear a wig and choose an alias. Later, in an alley behind the club, they met Hyun-hoo, the janitor Kwon Samuel had contacted some time ago. Kwon Samuel asked if anyone had followed him, and Hyun-hoo replied that as far as he could tell, no one had. Then he asked if that was the girl. Kwon Samuel confirmed and said she was trustworthy. He explained that Moji would infiltrate alongside him. Hyun-hoo's role would be to help her blend into the club's support staff. Then, Hyun-hoo gave Moji the alias of a female employee who had recently left the team. According to him, no one had even noticed she was gone. Kwon Samuel commented that they could rest easy, since they were around the same age. Before leaving, however, Kwon Samuel whispered to Moji that Hyun-hae always passed lie detector tests, so she could trust him most of the time. Regardless, he said he was counting on both of them. Inside Underscore, the atmosphere was extremely exquisite. There was a restaurant, a bar, private rooms, and many security guards scattered throughout the venue. Hyun-hui explained to Moji that there were virtually no ordinary employees there. It wasn't just the managers and office heads who were part of the organization. Even the waiters and kitchen staff belonged to the same family within the same organization. He explained he was an exception, position, working as a temporary worker. He usually worked in the office, but since they needed extra hands and couldn't hire just anyone due to the nature of the business, they rotated staff between the organization's establishments. That was how he accidentally got involved with Detective Kwan Samuel. Since he had already promised to help, he was now there. Afterward, he commented that by the looks of it, Moji was in a similar situation to his. She replied, more or less. At that moment, one of the bodyguards called their attention and ordered them to go clean room 3, which had just been vacated. According to him, the manager had been quite irritated lately because of that numerator. The two janitors immediately headed to room 3. Hyun-Woo explained that the employees didn't memorize everyone's face passing through there. Therefore, it wouldn't be hard to fill in the blanks while circulating through the club. He himself would take care of cleaning the rooms, while Moji could blend into the crowd. She thanked him for the help, and Hyun-Woo replied that they were in the same boat. They had twisted fates and, one way or another, needed to help each other. Thus, Moji infiltrated as a waitress. She performed the role very well, as she dedicated herself thoroughly to whatever she did. While circulating through the room, she observed people's life expectancy numbers. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The issue was that everyone there was part of the organization. It would be impossible to draw the face or take pictures of each person. Even so, since the lifespans were slightly different, she could record each number along with each person's facial features. Afterward, it would just be a matter of comparing that information with Detective Kwan Samuel's photo database. It was then that someone suddenly called her by the name Moji. Even though that wasn't her fake name, she turned around out of instinct. She only realized the mistake after she had already looked. The person sitting at the table smiled and said that, as expected, it really was her. Then she told Moji to sit down and keep her company. In that exact instant, Moji realized that girl was So-Ah, who was also wearing a wig, and by the looks of it, So-Ah already knew very well that she was in disguise too. Even so, Moji remained calm. She didn't let fear take over. At that moment, the best option was to leverage the conversation to extract as much information as possible. She asked how So-Ah had figured out her identity. So-Ah admitted she wasn't 100% sure, but said she couldn't imagine any other reason for Daum to keep her alive, and even bring her along. Then she asked if she had heard about her ability. Moji replied yes. She knew it was the savior count. So-Ah explained that not even she fully understood every detail of the ability, but she knew the criteria for considering someone saved were quite broad. Saving a person from an accident or performing surgery that prevented a patient's death counted normally, but there were also indirect cases, like maintaining public order or building infrastructure that benefited society as a whole. All of that increased her savior count. According to her, that ability was the exact opposite of Daum's ability. Because of that, she wanted Moji to tell him that she wished to continue cooperating with the numerator. She would always follow the path that increased her own savior count. That was her rule. Then she asked Moji to think carefully. If someone could see both the kill count and the savior count of people at the same time, the two could form a perfect duo. They could cooperate. Moji asked if she was really saying that after insulting so many of the detectives and Daum's friends, in addition to killing all the people at the orphanage, Soe replied that she had merely added a bit of spice to teach people what a true hero narrative was. According to her, no one liked Daum's current method, which merely executed people mechanically, following cold rules. A true hero had to stand beside the weak and unprotected. Their principles needed to deeply touch people's hearts, making everyone root for their actions. It had to give satisfaction by defeating despicable villains almost casually. Only then could someone truly be called a hero. Moji replied that the reason she followed the numerator and tried to stop him had nothing to do with the number of people he killed or the fact that he was an imperfect hero. To her, those were superficial reasons. The true problem was the massive chain forcing everyone trapped on the tracks of fate to always choose between two evils. That was what she wanted to destroy. She wanted to shatter fate itself. Furthermore, everyone was merely human. So-Ah judged people however she saw fit, killed whoever she wanted, treated everyone as villains, and decided that one day they would inevitably become twisted people. In the end, she simply accepted fate as something absolute. Moji affirmed that So-Ah had no right to do that. Nobody did. Then So-Ah asked why Moji had wanted to kill that man. She said she wanted to find the people who tormented her and make them pay for their cruel acts. Then she asked her not to worry, because all human beings thought that way. She just needed to go wherever her genuine heart led her. She could still choose to stand on her side. But Moji replied that So-Ah was a fraud. She said she claimed to champion the hearts of the weak and fight for a just world, but in reality, she just wanted to feel the dopamine brought by blood and exercise her own power. Then Moji revealed that So-Ah's true ability wasn't seeing the savior count. The instant she heard that, So-Ah drew her gun. However, at the very last second, Hyun-Hui pulled Moji away and asked, terrified, if that gun was real. At that moment, So-Ah panicked. She thought it was impossible for Moji to have discovered her true ability. It had to be a bluff. Just as Mo Hyun-chul had said one day, there was no way anyone could discover what her true power was. Without wasting time, Moji ran through the alleys while calling her senior. As soon as he answered, she said she had finally discovered So-Ah's weakness. The moment So-Ah fired and the undercover agents escaped, she was completely shocked to realize that Moji had figured out her secret. Even so, she was still in disbelief. There was no way someone could discover that so easily. Perhaps Perhaps it was all just a bluff. Either way, at that moment she needed to shut Moji up. She couldn't let her leave that place. However, the managers were called, and the security guards surrounded Soa. They even asked which company or gang she belonged to, given that the place was packed with other criminals. They also intended to inflict a different kind of punishment on her, but Soa fought back, opening fire on everyone in the hall. In her mind, everything always ended up getting ruined simply because she was trying to be the hero. Even so, she told herself she would push through it all. Meanwhile, the janitor asked if she was being pursued. Moji realized that wasn't the case. Shortly after, Hyunhye received a call on the manager's phone. In reality, the person on the other end of the line was Soa. She asked if Moji was nearby to listen. She knew Moji wouldn't have used her real name, but regardless, she was certain Moji was right beside him. Or, at the very least, he could pass along the message. Soa said she would be waiting. All they had to do was pick a spot to meet, just the two of them, face to face. Hyunhui asked who the hell she was, but Soa replied that she knew very well which office he came from. It was a place that gathered runaway kids who had been using drugs since they were young, and were shipped around from one place to another. She knew the address and was aware that they usually worked as delivery workers or janitors, making them perfect targets for her. She also stated that he wouldn't easily be able to file a police report. Upon hearing that, Hyunhui told her to stay away from the children at that place. Soa then asked if Moji was listening. She said that if Moji hated seeing people treated as villains and dying like that so much, she would have to meet her alone so they could finally finish the conversation they were never able to conclude. As soon as Soa hung up, Moji grabbed the phone and said she was heading to the agreed location. She then asked Hyunhui where that office was located. The janitor wanted to know what she was planning, and asked who that woman was. How did she know all that? If she went alone, she would certainly die. But Moji told him not to worry. She had no intention of going there alone. Meanwhile, the numberer stayed on the call the entire time. Moji took the opportunity to tell him Soa's weakness. She recalled the first conversation in which Da-em revealed part of his past, and explained the power of his own soul. Soa claimed she could see how many people someone would save, an ability that seemed to be the exact opposite of Da-em's. Even so, there was a contradiction that neither of them could explain. Back in their orphanage days, when Da-em grabbed Soa by the neck, he told her she was wrong. The number above the heads of all the people she killed was 0. She had never saved anyone by killing them. Her excuse was that fate had already decided those people's deaths, which was why the number was 0. Later, Da-em and Moji discussed this contradiction. Even if someone were destined to become a killer, trying to kill them beforehand did not make their number drop to 0. The actions a person would take in the future were not immediately reflected in the numbers. That was when Moji arrived at a conclusion. Soa never had an ability. She was just an ordinary person. Looking back, she realized there had always been clues scattered throughout the case. When Da-em commented that there was an inexplicable contradiction, that detail got stuck in her mind. It was a tiny detail, almost impossible to notice on one's own. Even so, Moji kept reviewing all the information. She went back to Da-em's old diary, specifically the entry from December 24th. The numberer didn't object to the investigation. On the contrary, he lent her the diary as if it were just any ordinary notebook. Da-em drew very well, and Moji immediately recognized Soa's face among the drawings. While reading the accounts, she discovered that Da-em had recorded that the numbers of the other children in the advanced class had dropped to 0. It was at that moment that he realized the true meaning of the numbers. After everything that happened, when he confronted Soa, saying she understood nothing, she replied that those children were already destined to die, which was why their numbers were 0. That was precisely where Moji found the issue. The more she thought about that explanation, the less sense it made. She then recalled the stalker case. The murders he was destined to commit appeared as the number 3 because, in the future, he would kill 3 people. 7 hours and 4 minutes later, fate had already determined that the numberer would kill him. Even so, that death was not reflected in the numbers. If it had been, his number would have dropped to 0 instead of remaining at 3. In the end, the stalker never killed anyone because he died beforehand at the hands of the numberer. That was when Moji realized the flaw in Soa's logic. Da-em recorded in his diary that the boy's numbers were 0, and following her argument, that seemed correct. But then the real question arose. Why did only Soa's numbers work differently from all other ability users? On December 28th, when Kwon Samuel set an ambush for Soa and managed to capture her briefly, and later, on the 29th, when he revealed the entire truth about the numberer, Moji went to him to ask if he had really found Soa. He answered yes and said she remained just as repulsive and disgusting as before. Her murder count remained at 47. Next time, he wouldn't miss. He was going to execute her. After piecing all those clues together, Moji asked the numberer if the number above Soa's head had ever changed. Ability users could distort fate through their foresight. Whenever that happened, their own numbers shifted slightly. In addition to influencing the numbers of others. However, Soa's number had never changed. It remained exactly the same. At the time, Da-um replied that he had already explained that before. Just because Soa said those things didn't mean she was an ordinary person. It wasn't simply that the actions of non-ability users were reflected in the numbers while those of ability users were not. Just like the number 1 above Moji's head, those changes only happened when someone truly distorted their own fate. Murders also caused distortions, yet even so, they weren't immediately reflected in the numbers. In the end, the numberer concluded that was precisely the point. Soa didn't kill those boys because she distorted fate. Whether she was an ability user or not, she was already destined to kill them from the start. So Moji asked once more if Soa had ever distorted fate even once. The answer was simple: never. None of the information they had found up to that point contradicted the hypothesis that Soa was just an ordinary person. That was why Moji asked the numberer why he kept pretending he hadn't noticed that. He had known the truth all along. Da-um then asked if she was asking him to admit that his friends died, not because of a grand belief or for a better world, but simply because Soa was pretending to be righteous while, in reality, she was just a cold-blooded killer. Moji told him to leave it to her. She would prove that Soa was an ordinary person. That was precisely why she had confronted her at the underscore restaurant. Even before that meeting, she had already devised a method to test her theory. If Soa couldn't perform a self-foresight, it meant she had never been capable of changing an already determined fate. Even if she tried to force that change, all kinds of circumstances would end up stopping her. And if Soa were truly an ordinary person, fate itself would protect her. That was exactly what happened. The moment the janitor pulled Moji away, Soa fired, but her gun misfired. Thus, Moji was able to prove her theory to the numberer. No matter what Soa did, she would never be able to kill her, because she couldn't alter fate or interfere with her lifespan. On the other hand, when an ability user ceases to be bound by fate, they also cease to be protected by it. In those moments, even an ordinary person can kill an ability user. That was precisely the strategy Soa had been using all along. She forced her opponents to use self-foresight, and, after that, took advantage of the opportunity to distort fate. Therefore, when the gun was pointed at her head, Moji decided not to use self-foresight. She simply let fate take its course, causing the gun to jam. That was how Hao was able to pull her to safety. From the beginning, Moji knew that Soa would never be able to kill her. That was her true weakness. It was for that exact reason that Soa became even more enraged and ended up killing everyone in that club. Moji had already confirmed the lifespan of the other members of the organization. The only person Soa probably would have been able to kill originally was the leader, who ended up dying from poison. At that moment, Soa finally realized she was completely powerless against Moji's numbers. Any lifespan she had previously analyzed could no longer be altered. She then remembered Mo Hyun-chul when he had asked her to be honest. The truth was that she had never seen any numbers. He was the first person to figure that out. Even in front of the underscore manager, someone she couldn't kill, Soa still threatened him. She said that if he wanted to stay alive, he would have to repeat every single thing she commanded during the call. Meanwhile, speaking over the phone with Da-um, Moji explained that according to the informant embedded at the scene, the hostage was allegedly part of one of the delivery teams, subordinate to the rescued individuals. Soa had said she would show up alone, but she likely already expected the numberer to show up as well. At that moment, another broadcast from the female numberer went live. The underscore manager appeared blindfolded, begging for his life. He then exposed all the crimes committed by the organization. He revealed that underscore was an organization tied to a crime syndicate, hiding its operations behind the front of a members-only bar while distributing drugs to various political figures and businessmen. This revelation caused the police to start mobilizing. The manager also confessed that they took advantage of South Korea's lenient punishments and the belief in criminal rehabilitation. While the country debated human rights and resocialization, the organization acted freely, accumulating massive wealth through illegal means. As expected, public opinion began to side with the female numberer. Afterward, with the help of Detective Moon, who was undercover in the police force, Soa managed to escape from underscore. Meanwhile, the original numberer warned Moji to return to the train immediately. Everything was far too strange. At that point, he no longer felt anger or hatred. His mind was completely clear, uninfluenced by any emotion. Now he finally understood what he needed to do. He thanked Moji for securing concrete proof and immediately hung up the phone. On the internet, comments said that the female numberer had captured more dangerous criminals. Gradually, public opinion shifted to support her. She finally calmed down and ordered the driver to contact Vice President Kwok Chul-ho. She said that now that public opinion had shifted, it was the perfect opportunity. While she wrapped everything up, she wanted them to eliminate the last distribution route. The detective replied that, from what he had heard, they were already preparing for it. A mercenary who had recently returned from the Philippines would be in charge of the mission. He was extremely skilled at cleanup jobs and was likely already carrying out his work. However, Kwon Samuel had also already intercepted that information. Detective Moon had passed all the details along to him. So Kwon Samuel informed Sergeant Ju-sol that they were going to act again. He hadn't expected the enemies to move so quickly, but that turned out to be an excellent opportunity. While the numberer and Soa destroyed each other, they would bring down the entire operation of the true mastermind behind it all. Meanwhile, the mercenary in charge of the cleanup cleanup, was already at the final distribution warehouse, accompanied by his subordinates. They executed everyone they encountered along the way, while he casually used his phone. Before finishing, he ordered his men to make sure no one survived. As soon as the cleanup was completed, he contacted the vice president to report that the job was done. Kwak Chul-ho replied that it was fast and praised the work. Now that the public believed the numberers were a group of killers, they could take advantage of the situation. The mercenary, however, was slightly concerned. Cutting off a distribution network that was already lost was one thing, but thanks to that crazy woman, the entire media was talking about their business. That could attract unwanted attention. But Kwak Chul-ho wasn't worried about that in the slightest. To him, public opinion and all that attention didn't matter. Meanwhile, news broadcasts debated what was truly right. Many questioned whether young people should receive such light sentences simply for being first-time offenders, for still being young, or for having high chances of rehabilitation. In the end, that only served to let criminals off the hook without the punishments they truly deserved. With so many cases involving the children of wealthy executives committing crimes and getting away unpunished, people just wanted justice, and that was exactly what the numberers promised. On the other hand, another woman being interviewed explained that people were misunderstanding everything. She agreed that the war on drugs and cutting off the supply were important, and she wasn't against that. The problem was that as long as the numberers focused solely on judging and executing criminals, they would never address the root of the problem. As long as demand existed, new suppliers would always emerge, no matter how many were killed. According to her, the first step should be creating a system to treat addicts and reintegrate them into society. Even so, that woman's perspective was harshly criticized by those watching television and following along online. The majority wanted an immediate solution. They wanted to kill the criminals and get rid of them once and for all. That was why Kwak Chul-ho said there was no reason to worry. The public's interest was no longer an issue for him. Politicians themselves were using the idea of executing criminals as a platform to win votes, and the populace liked it. That was precisely the kind of reaction Kwak Chul-ho wanted to provoke. The angrier the people felt, the more freedom they would have to operate. The more society stripped humanity away from those who strayed from the deemed correct path, the further those people would drift from the light until they could no longer return. In the end, they would wind up working for Kwak Chul-ho, or joining the drug trade. To him, it was a perfect cycle. The driver commented that it was a rather clever idea, but that Kwak Chul-ho's superiority complex was a bit pathetic. In reality, the person driving the car was Detective Kwon Samuel. He admitted that Kwak Chul-ho was very good at reading people, but explained that capturing one or two small fish was useless. They needed to eliminate the problem at its root. Kwak Chul-ho asked who he really was. Kwon Samuel obviously didn't answer, so Kwak Chul-ho admitted he had gotten it wrong. He hadn't asked out of curiosity, he just wanted to know the name of the man who was about to die. He had already realized his driver had been replaced. As they spoke, several cars were pursuing the vehicle driven by Kwon Samuel. The Filipino mercenary was already prepared to act. As if playing a video game, he threw a blade that pierced through the car directly toward the driver's seat. The vehicle skidded and crashed against the tunnel wall. When the mercenary went to check, he realized Kwon Samuel was no longer in the seat. He had managed to escape. Even so, the mercenary enjoyed that kind of situation. The harder the job, the better. Kwon Samuel thought it was absurd. They had had the chance to capture the entire mafia and eliminate an indisputable evil, but once again, everything had gone wrong. Then he recalled the words of his senior, who used to say there was a limit to how many criminals one could simply arrest. At some point, you had to cut out the evil at its root. With that in mind, Kwon Samuel stated that it was long past time to wipe the smiles off those damned people's faces. Meanwhile, the numberer finally met face to face with So-ah. After so long, the two were finally standing before one another, and for them, the time for the true execution had arrived.